Lee Ho-jae opens with one bitter truth. People love saying life is a series of choices, but one stupid choice already wrecked his. He remembers a friend telling him to stop clinging to past mistakes and keep moving forward, and Ho-jae instantly rejects that as useless nonsense. Then he admits the reason plainly. He was drunk when a strange hologram invited him somewhere, so instead of being careful, he treated it like a fantasy come true. The floating prompt asks if he wants to enter the tutorial world, and he hits yes without a second thought. His old pro-gamer pride makes it worse, because when the system offers difficulty choices from easy to hell, he boldly picks hell like it is just another game. That one arrogant click is why he is still trapped here now. By floor 60, Ho-jae wanders the silent residential district singing badly to himself, because there is literally nobody left around to hear him. The emptiness hits him harder now, and even while joking to himself about I am legend, he cannot shake the dread of being completely alone. He could endure the earlier floors because he was still pushing ahead, but from floor 61 onward the stages are built for 2 people, so clearing them alone is impossible. Because he needs a partner that badly, Ho-jae heads to his favorite pub and sits down in the middle of the empty bar like it is still normal. He orders a drink from the system anyway, watches points get deducted, and flicks a coin as a fake tip just to keep the ritual alive. Then the message he has been waiting for appears. Round 81 is about to begin, which means new players will finally be dragged into the tutorial. Players hiding in residential districts are safe from forced stage entry, so Ho-jae is not worried about the round itself. He only cares whether a new companion might appear. To kill time, he opens the community forum and sees the bleak number that sums up hell difficulty perfectly. 1 survivor, 1 viewer, and that survivor is him. When he glances at normal mode and sees dozens of people alive there, his jealousy flares immediately. A new post pops up from Lee Jun-suk on floor 90, casually asking if Ho-jae is waiting for a newbie again. Ho-jae stays on good terms with strong hard mode players like Lee Jun-suk, because their advice and grinding knowledge can still help him survive hell. He explains that Lee Jun-suk could leave for the real world after 10 more floors, but he is staying to grind because players stop gaining true stat growth once they leave the tutorial. Ho-jae answers honestly that yes, he is waiting, even if he is not sure anyone insane enough will still choose hell. As a first-round victim, Ho-jae entered blind, but later survivors who escaped to the real world exposed the tutorial and warned everyone how lethal hell mode really is. That warning crushed the flow of hell newcomers, because after hearing the clear rate was basically 0, only the truly reckless would ever press that option. Lee Jun-suk asks what kind of newbie Ho-jae actually wants, and the question makes him think past simple desperation for the first time. He decides age and gender barely matter in hell, because anyone can grow stronger here if they live long enough. What matters most to him is mental strength, because most people who choose hell are unstable, delusional, or all talk, and they die almost immediately. He dryly includes himself among the boastful idiots who picked hell for the wrong reason, and the self-awareness does nothing to make him kinder about it. He even ranks who is most likely to survive a bad hell entry, putting plain bad luck above arrogance, delinquents, and outright insanity. When Lee Jun-suk asks why delinquents rank so low, Ho-jae gives the real answer. Hell is only fair if the newbie obeys him exactly. Then he names the single best trait after mindset. The newcomer has to be a warrior, and preferably a shield warrior, because without a shield they will not last. Young Ji-jun points out that Ho-jae does not use a shield now, which drags the conversation straight into Ho-jae's own early days in hell. He starts to answer that he did use one back then, and soon the forum fills with people curious enough to hear how hell mode began for him. Just as the crowd gathers, an easy mode player named Young-won-sik barges in and mocks Ho-jae as a loser who will never clear hell anyway. The insult lands hard enough to freeze him, and other players instantly pile on to mock the easy mode coward for running his mouth at Ho-jae. Ho-jae rubs the back of his neck, keeps his temper on a leash, and types a promise that sounds calm but is absolutely not empty. When he gets out, he will find Young-won-sik. He admits to himself that Young-won-sik is not even first on that list, because there are already 7 other people he plans to settle things with before him. The chat moves on when Young Ji-jun asks Ho-jae's level, and Ho-jae drops the number without drama, 251. That single number shocks the forum, and even veteran players explode with disbelief at how absurdly high his level is for floor 60. With the anger cooling off, Ho-jae reminds himself that the system never lied. Hell really does give monstrous growth, and he is proof of it. Still, he knows exactly what kind of person he is, petty and childish enough to remember every grudge forever. So he opens a system memo and writes down Young-won-sik's name, turning the insult into one more debt he plans to collect later. Then the long-awaited system notice finally arrives. The 81st round begins. Ho-jae closes his eyes and prays with the desperation of a gambler rolling his last chance, begging for a newbie who can become his partner. When he finally opens his eyes, the Hell Forum count has changed from 1 to 2, and after all this time he realizes someone actually came. Lee Ho-jae frames the tutorial with a grim memory. Back in 2014, monsters erupted across the world, and some were so tough that armies could not stop them. Humanity's answer came from the awakened, people kidnapped into the monthly tutorial and sent back with powers if they survived it. Now round 81 opens, 30 days after the last round, and another 100 unlucky newcomers are dragged in. On the normal difficulty forum, the usual flood of beginner guides appears, mostly posted by residents who gave up climbing and settled into the tutorial's safe districts. Lee Ho-jae looks at those residents and bitterly admits he may end up the same way, because he still cannot break past floor 60. Then the Hell Forum finally changes from 1 user to 2, and Lee Ho-jae jolts with desperate hope at the sight of a new arrival. He hurriedly posts first, praying that this newcomer is sane enough to survive and maybe become his only real chance forward. The new post appears from Lee Yun-hee on floor 1, and her panicked, typo-ridden cry for help makes it obvious she accidentally picked Hell difficulty. To Lee Ho-jae, her disaster is cruelly also a lifeline, because the first new Hell player in ages might be able to reach him one day. Other Hell players pile into the thread with bad jokes, pity, and hollow encouragement, turning her arrival into public spectacle. Lee Ho-jae cuts through the noise and tells Lee Yun-hee to calm down, promising she can live if she listens to him. Before anything else, he presses for the basics, because on Hell difficulty her age and starting weapon could decide whether helping her is even possible. Lee Yun-hee says she is 20, and Lee Ho-jae immediately steers her away from useless details to the answer he really needs. When she answers Bao, Lee Ho-jae's heart sinks, because that choice is notoriously dangerous for a beginner on Hell difficulty. The forum immediately mocks the pick, and the piling ridicule threatens to push the already terrified newcomer over the edge. To stop the public dogpile, Lee Ho-jae pulls Lee Yun-hee into a private one-on-one chat. Even in private, her first question is whether the Bao is really that bad, which tells him she is hanging on every word for her life. Lee Ho-jae starts to explain that bows are hard for beginners, but Lee Yun-hee suddenly reveals she is a national representative archer. That changes the picture, because an archer in the tutorial is not a stationary sniper but a mobile survival specialist who thrives once they get past the brutal opening floors. Still, Lee Ho-jae knows how difficulty twists that advantage, because the first 5 floors are so lethal that even a good class can die before it matters. So he lies just enough to steady her, telling Lee Yun-hee that archer is one of the best survival classes and that she should trust only his instructions. Once she starts to settle down, he walks her through the basics of the tutorial, from the shop and community to how skills are gained and raised. Lee Yun-hee asks again if she will really survive, and Lee Ho-jae doubles down that she must follow his advice and no one else's. Then he plays his strongest card and asks if she has heard of him, hoping his reputation will make her cling to his guidance. It works. Lee Yun-hee recognizes him as Korea's lone Hell survivor, the infamous player people even talk about in the real world. Lee Ho-jae modestly corrects the myth by saying he is not truly alone, since other servers have survivors too, though their numbers are still absurdly small. When she asks for the highest Hell record, Lee Ho-jae awkwardly admits that the current top floor is his own floor 60. She presses for the records of other players, and Lee Ho-jae hesitates instead of telling her the brutal truth. Rather than crush her with the real numbers, he gives a softer version and emphasizes the one comforting fact that matters. Floor 30 has a residential area where players can stop dying. Behind that gentle guidance, Lee Ho-jae has a harder goal in mind, because he needs Lee Yun-hee to climb all the way to floor 60 and help him clear the wall ahead. With her barely steadied, he moves on to what really matters and begins preparing a detailed lesson for surviving floor 1. He reminds himself that Hell is murderous but not random, because every challenge follows the same order and pattern if someone lives long enough to memorize it. As he starts explaining, Lee Ho-jae slips into a memory of the day he first fell into that same hell. 2 years earlier, before any of this, he was killing another empty night at home, bored out of his mind and half listening to trash TV with soju in hand. He had already quit pro gaming, bought a convenience store, and let part-timers run it, because once competition disappeared his life turned flat and pointless. The real problem was his nature. Once Lee Ho-jae started any game, even as a kid, he had to win, and retirement left that hunger with nowhere to go. As he reaches for more alcohol and realizes the bag is empty, the TV suddenly cuts to an emergency report about mysterious sinkholes opening all over the world. Before he can make sense of that news, floating words appear in front of his eyes and congratulate Lee Ho-jae on being invited to the tutorial world. The next prompt asks if he will enter, and drunk or not, Lee Ho-jae instantly reads it as a chance to become the protagonist of his own life again. He answers yes without real hesitation. A difficulty menu opens with easy, normal, hard, and hell, and his old pride takes over before caution ever gets a turn. Convinced he is too talented to settle for less, Lee Ho-jae proudly chooses hell difficulty. The choice is made, and he blacks out immediately after. He wakes to a rough shake from a rugged stranger, and finds himself lying in a stone chamber beside 3 people he has never seen before. Startled and still disoriented, Lee Ho-jae scrambles back as the stranger calmly tells him this place is the first floor waiting room. The bear-like man explains that everyone here saw the tutorial messages too and suggests they work together since none of them understand the situation yet. Lee Ho-jae agrees in principle but stays cautious, knowing allies only matter if they can actually be trusted. When they ask for any clue at all, Lee Ho-jae mentions the emergency report he saw just before arriving, about sinkholes appearing around the world. The rough-looking man explodes at the idea, snapping that it makes no sense and revealing just how frayed everyone's nerves already are. Lee Ho-jae cuts the argument short, and notices something stranger than the room itself. Despite drinking himself senseless earlier, his body feels completely normal. The bear-like man says a message appeared while Lee Ho-jae was asleep, explaining that entering this area heals the body. Realizing he missed important information, Lee Ho-jae politely asks for every message they saw before he woke up. As soon as the man starts explaining the beginner weapon choice, a new prompt opens in Lee Ho-jae's own vision and drags him into the next step. The room vanishes, and Lee Ho-jae finds himself alone in a separate weapon selection space packed with countless starter weapons. Instead of panicking, he forcefully reframes the impossible situation as game logic and regains his composure. He surveys the options one by one, spotting familiar picks like spear, sword, bow, mace, and even odd tools he can barely classify as weapons. Then he stops, recognizing that this first choice could shape everything that comes after, and the memory ends with Lee Ho-jae staring at the weapons and asking himself what to pick. In the weapon selection space, Lee Ho-jae stares at rows of plain starter weapons and starts judging them by one hard truth: his body is too weak for anything heavy. He briefly lingers on a wizard-like staff, but the idea dies fast when he remembers ranged users only stay safe if someone else protects them. That also makes him reject bows, clubs, and other blunt weapons, because he wants something lighter, sharper, and more intimidating if the people in the chamber ever turn on each other. He narrows it down to spear or sword, then talks himself out of the spear because a beginner loses its advantage the moment an enemy closes the distance. Once he tests a long sword and nearly gets dragged around by its weight, Lee Ho-jae gives up on two-handed swords too. He finds one-handed sword and shield sets next, but every set comes with a penalty because the gear is battered, thin, rusty, or chipped. For a moment he wonders if he should just become a tank, but he refuses to give up having a weapon when he still cannot trust the others. After hours of searching, he finally settles on a worn wooden round shield and a sturdy short sword like a gladius, choosing reliability over quality. The item windows are almost insulting, bluntly labeling both pieces as cheap second-hand junk before asking if he wants them. Lee Ho-jae says yes, and in an instant the selection space vanishes and drops him back into the stone chamber. The big bear-like man greets him right away, and when he sees the sword and shield set, he approves the choice. Cho Kyung-min explodes from across the room, furious that Lee Ho-jae somehow came back with 2 items instead of 1. Lee Ho-jae explains the set penalty, and Min-sik backs him up because he saw those paired weapons himself, which finally cools Kyung-min down. With that settled, Min-sik teaches Lee Ho-jae the basic system features: inventory, status, and the community menu. When Lee Ho-jae opens his inventory, stored food and water appear, and his weapon set slips in and out of his hands exactly like a game loadout. His status window is almost comically plain, except for one thing that catches his eye. His intelligence stat is high enough to make that discarded staff feel tempting again. Then he opens community and sees separate notice boards by difficulty, including a hell board that confirms there are only 4 of them in that bracket. Min-sik points to that tiny hell roster and makes the obvious pitch: if only 4 people chose this difficulty, they need to stick together. A final time display confirms the tutorial countdown is already running, and the 4 move to the center of the chamber to properly introduce themselves. Choi Min-sik goes first, introducing himself as a 47-year-old ordinary worker who got dragged here without warning. Cho Kyung-min follows with zero charm, openly identifying himself as a 31-year-old gangster who loves Korean RPGs. Park Soo-ah introduces herself next as a 21-year-old student, and her quiet anime fan side peeks through right away. Lee Ho-jae introduces himself last as a 26-year-old pro gamer, and the moment he says it, Kyung-min perks up and starts asking questions. When their first discussion stalls out, Lee Ho-jae steps up and frames the situation in game terms, because that is the one language everyone already understands. He points out that they already have weapons and stat windows like an RPG, so the smartest next step is to assign party roles. So all 4 open their inventories and lay out their chosen weapons in the middle of the room. Min-sik's weapon turns out to be a massive trident that looks powerful but brutally heavy. Kyung-min chose a long-handled axe, a straightforward damage weapon that suits his temperament almost too well. Lee Ho-jae had secretly hoped Soo-ah would cover the back line, but she pulls out an oversized anime-style katana instead and wrecks that plan on the spot. With all 4 of them stuck as melee fighters, the team composition looks awkward enough that Lee Ho-jae immediately starts rebuilding it by hand. He places himself slightly in front with the shield and puts Kyung-min beside him, turning the axe into the party's main striking power. He puts Min-sik in the rear to thrust the trident past them, where the giant weapon is safer and more useful. And because Soo-ah's long blade is too dangerous for a beginner to force into the front line, he gives her a floating support role instead. Min-sik and Kyung-min accept the setup right away, but Soo-ah clearly hates being sidelined as the safest player. Min-sik calmly talks her down, reminding everyone this may look like a game, but the hardest difficulty could still kill them for real. Soo-ah finally nods, and with their shaky alliance intact, the 4 start training in the waiting room. The first thing they learn is that this room is perfect for practice, because nobody gets hurt, tired, or even hungry here. They begin by drilling Lee Ho-jae's formation and painstakingly adjusting the gaps so Min-sik can attack without skewering his own team. At first the training is crude and exhausting looking, just the four of them swinging weapons like amateurs until they start to feel the rhythm. Once they move into sparring, another rule reveals itself: even damaged weapons repair on their own in the waiting room. Because none of them are ready to draw blood yet, the sparring stays controlled, but even cautious practice starts sharpening their teamwork. Lee Ho-jae and Kyung-min make the clearest progress first, turning axe versus shield into a useful drill for both attack timing and defense. Min-sik learns a harsher lesson with the trident. It is not elegant at all, just a heavy weapon that works best as a brutal straight thrust. Suwa, on the other hand, is a mess with the giant katana and keeps losing so badly that even Lee Ho-jae can beat her without his sword. Embarrassed and angry, Suwa suggests switching weapons, hoping the problem might be the fit rather than her alone. Kyung-min brushes her off in his usual rude way, but Lee Ho-jae backs the idea and gets the group to try it anyway. After they trade weapons and spar again, Suwa suddenly starts winning, and even Kyung-min admits her giant katana is far harder to use than it looks. That experiment pays off for all of them, because once they understand each other's weapons better, they start covering each other's weak spots more naturally. Most importantly, something clicks for Suwa when she picks up Kyung-min's axe, and she starts training with it like she is chopping wood with her whole body. Her confidence finally starts rising, but the moment she feels herself, a new problem appears. She shouts flashy skill names every single time she attacks. Kyung-min finally snaps and asks why he has to feel embarrassed for her, but Suwa insists you are supposed to say the skill name to activate it. Lee Ho-jae can only stare at the absurdity of it all, wondering why Suwa is yelling Pierce while swinging straight down. Back in the first floor waiting room, Choi Min-sik and Cho Kyung-min are still locked in a bitter argument that started over a sparring match and quickly turned into a fight over who should lead the group. Lee Ho-jae stays out of it on purpose, because unlike the other two, he has no interest in being anyone's leader and would rather rely on himself. Park Soo-hwa avoids the mess too, and while the two men keep clashing, she and Ho-jae casually chat on the sidelines instead. Soo-hwa mentions she got into Hanseo University, and Ho-jae learns she pushed herself hard because her parents tied her future dream of becoming a pro gamer to doing well in school first. At last, the argument narrows down to one blunt deal: whoever performs better in the tutorial will be the party leader. The two of them ask Ho-jae and Soo-hwa to go along with it, but Ho-jae dryly points out they already settled it themselves and only warns that he will ignore any stupid orders. After that, the whole group throws itself back into training, and Min-sik and Kyung-min become unexpectedly useful teachers thanks to their military experience. Because the waiting room heals them automatically and removes hunger and fatigue, they can train far past normal limits without lasting damage. By the end of 3 brutal days, all 4 have improved so much that they no longer look like people who only started training 72 hours ago. When the tutorial is finally about to start, the waiting room fills with nervous energy, but excitement clearly outweighs fear because every one of them chose hell difficulty on purpose. 4 portals appear, each marked for a different person, and Soo-ah quickly realizes the bad news: they cannot enter together. Kyung-min snaps that all their group preparation was wasted, but Min-sik steadies everyone by reminding them the training still made them stronger, and they may meet again later. As they walk toward their assigned portals, the mood turns softer, because after 3 days of fighting and training together, Ho-jae realizes these people already feel like real friends. Right before parting, Kyung-min raises his fist, and the others answer with the same small gesture like a rough promise to survive and meet again. Ho-jae chooses yes. The portal swallows him in blue light, and the moment he lands, he is alone in a dark stone corridor on hell difficulty's first floor. He forces himself to calm down and inspect the place like a game map, noting the rough stone floor, the high ceiling, the faint ceiling lamps, and the narrow corridor stretching straight ahead. When he checks behind himself, Ho-jae finds a portal at the starting point and immediately tests it instead of marching in blind. The test works, and Ho-jae pops right back into the waiting room, proving he can retreat from the stage whenever he reaches the return portal. To see how safe that really makes him, he cuts the back of his own hand with his sword and watches the waiting room heal the wound almost immediately. That result gives him a crucial rule for survival: if he can avoid instant death and make it back here, the waiting room can fully patch him up. A second portal suddenly flares, and Min-sik steps back out too, embarrassed but honest that he guessed Ho-jae would test the same trick. Ho-jae tells Min-sik about the healing and retreat trick, and the two immediately realize Soo-ah and Kyung-min need this information too. But the other two never come back, so Ho-jae and Min-sik have no choice except to return to the tutorial and keep moving on their own. Back in the corridor, Ho-jae checks his status and sees that the 3 days of non-stop training really did raise his physical stats. Still, he does not trust this place for a second, so he plans around one brutal truth: any hit to the head, neck, or heart could kill him before he ever gets the chance to retreat. He raises his round shield to eye level, crouches low, and starts creeping forward in a compact defensive stance that covers as much of his body as possible. Minutes drag into nearly an hour, and because nothing attacks him, Ho-jae gets more and more paranoid, shortening his steps again and again until he is practically crawling forward. The slow advance becomes torture on its own, with his shoulders locking up, his legs shaking, and his mind spiraling over whether this whole floor is secretly a time trap. Just as he forces himself to endure a little longer, the system rewards that stubborn focus by giving him battle concentration and will as new passive skills. He backs up a step, checks the descriptions, and realizes this world teaches skills through lived situations, not just levels or equipment. That discovery excites him for a moment, but he immediately shuts down thoughts of the others and goes back to his slow, shield-first advance. After another long stretch of empty darkness, the first real attack finally comes without warning when an arrow slams into his shield before he even registers it. A second arrow hits right after the first, confirming he is already under ranged attack from somewhere he still cannot see. This time he catches a silver flash in the dark and instinctively throws the shield overhead, barely blocking a third shot in time. He thinks he finally reacted in time, and that tiny burst of relief gets punished immediately when another arrow punches straight through his ankle. The pain is so violent that Ho-Jae collapses screaming, staring at the arrow buried deep in his leg, while blood spreads across the floor under him. Even through the shock, one thought cuts through everything else. He has to get back to the waiting room before he bleeds out here. He tries to stand and run, but the wounded leg gives out instantly, sending another wave of agony through the arrow-pinned ankle. So he drops to all fours and starts dragging himself back by sheer force, using his sword like a hook against the stone just to keep moving. As the crawl turns into a long nightmare, the system coldly adds new skills for pain tolerance and later hemorrhage tolerance, but the messages do nothing to make the suffering feel any less real. His arms and one good leg start failing, his ears ring, his head burns and chills at the same time, and he realizes the blood loss may kill him before he ever sees the portal again. When his vision finally blacks out, Ho-Jae understands with sudden clarity that this is not a game at all, and death here will be completely real. Blind now, he can only keep crawling by feel along the straight stone floor, crying openly as he refuses to die in this miserable place. Sleepy numbness starts to pull him under, and even while he fights it, Ho-Jae bitterly admits the first arrow would have killed him on the spot if he had not chosen a shield. Then, just as he is about to give out, the waiting room portal's low hum reaches him through the dark and a travel prompt appears in front of his fading eyes. Lee Ho-Jae wakes beside the portal in the first floor corridor and realizes he actually survived the arrow ambush. Even half delirious, Ho-Jae gets stuck on one terrifying question. If he enters the waiting room with the arrow still inside his ankle, will the healing save him or ruin his leg forever? Not knowing the rule and too scared to gamble on his leg, he decides to cut the arrow out himself and use the portal only if he starts blacking out again. He bites down on the leather strap of his shield, braces himself, and brings the sword down on the arrow. The strike barely works, and the pain hits so hard that Ho-Jae nearly throws himself into the portal by instinct. Realizing one clean cut is impossible, he grits his teeth and starts sawing through the arrow instead. At last the arrow tip snaps off, and Ho-Jae rips the remaining shaft out of his ankle in one desperate pull. Once the worst of it passes, relief gives way to rage, and he silently swears to kill whoever set this nightmare up. To trigger the return prompt before he loses consciousness, Ho-Jae jams a splinter of the broken arrow into his own palm. He accepts the prompt and blacks out as the portal finally takes him back. He wakes in the first floor waiting room with no pain at all, finally safe and fully healed. The calm hits him all at once, and Ho-Jae realizes just how absurdly close he came to dying. Looking down, he sees his white shirt turn completely red with dried blood and realizes just how badly the ordeal wrecked his body. Then he spots the arrow splinter on the floor and understands the waiting room healed him perfectly, and even removed the fragment from his hand. That means the savage surgery on his ankle was completely unnecessary, and Ho-Jae can only sit there hating himself for gambling his life on a bad guess. Trying to steady himself, he opens the community board to see how the others did. The notice board shows held difficulty 1 out of 1, and Ho-Jae slowly understands the brutal meaning. He is the only one left. He accepts almost immediately that Park Soo-ah, Cho Kyung-min, and Choi Min-sik are dead, because surviving that first floor without his exact luck was nearly impossible. What unsettles him most is how little shock he feels, as if his mind has already adapted to this insane place. But the numbness breaks anyway, and Ho-Jae starts crying despite himself. To get his mind off the deaths, he opens his status screen and checks the skills he gained while crawling back from the portal. The screen confirms upgraded concentration and will, plus new resistance skills and awakening from surviving the torture. Reading the skill details, Ho-Jae sees they are passive resistances and a crisis-triggered mental awakening, useful but not nearly as satisfying as a real active ability. Once he has the facts in front of him, the real problem returns. To survive, he has to go back into that corridor again. With the countdown still running, Ho-Jae reminds himself the waiting room is only a temporary safe zone and chooses to re-enter the stage instead of wasting time. He says yes and steps into the first floor for the third time, but now the same dark corridor feels more like a trauma site than an adventure. When he notices every trace of his blood is gone, Ho-Jae realizes the stage reset after he returned to the waiting room, which probably means the arrow trap reset too. That thought nearly freezes him in place, but standing still is no option when he has no idea what punishment comes with failing the tutorial timer. He tries to remember the arrow pattern from last time and inches toward the danger zone, terrified enough that every step feels heavier than the last. Paranoia creeps in when he wonders if the pattern might have changed, but after a long pause he forces himself to admit he cannot predict the trap anyway. So he falls back on the only plan he has: protect his heart with the shield, cover his head and neck with the sword, and just avoid instant death. He takes the first steps into the trap area like a man playing roulette with his life. The arrows start flying again, and Ho-Jae manages to block the first two with his shield exactly as he remembered. Expecting the next shot at his head, he drops into a crouch and thinks he finally beat the pattern. Then a new arrow snaps toward his forehead anyway, and he barely diverts it with his right arm instead of his head. The impact knocks him off balance, and before he can recover, the last arrow buries itself in his ankle again. Just as the pain threatens to crush him, a level up message appears and instantly heals both wounds. He sits there in disbelief, stunned by the absurd luck that a level up can restore his body on the spot like a second healing method. His status screen now shows level 1, better dexterity and endurance, and even more pain tolerance from surviving the trap. Now that he survived a second run, Ho-Jae starts breaking the trap down instead of just fearing it. He realizes the arrows do not follow fixed lanes at all, because they keep aiming directly at his heart, forehead, arm, and ankle even when his posture changes. That kills the idea of preemptive dodging, so the only workable answer is to react after each shot or block it in the moment. He also locks in a new survival rule: the waiting room heals whenever he retreats, and leveling up can heal him instantly if he pushes far enough. From the reset trap and delayed level up, Ho-Jae concludes that repeating cleared dangers still gives experience, which means pain itself can become a resource. That leads him to a brutal but simple conclusion: on the first floor, he has to keep moving, keep taking risks, and grow as much as possible before the tutorial gets worse. A little later, with time still slipping away, Ho-Jae abandons his crawling pace and pushes forward more aggressively without dropping his guard. His resolve hardens into tangible growth as the system grants will level 2, a god of adventure takes interest in him, and his endurance rises again while he keeps moving. On day 28, Lee Ho-Jae wakes in the first floor waiting room knowing this is the day he has to break through. He steadies himself with the pork jerky he saved for this moment, treating it like a last calm meal before the real test. Before leaving, Ho-Jae checks the community board one last time and confirms there is still no miracle answer waiting for him. He stops hesitating, accepts the stage prompt, and throws himself back into held difficulty. He appears in the same dark stone corridor, but this time he runs with confidence instead of fear. Night vision and eye lights let him see clearly enough to move fast through a place that used to swallow him whole. With better endurance and his new sprint skill, he stops pacing himself and just tears down the corridor. When the first arrow trap starts, Ho-Jae hears the shots before they reach him and knows he has already changed. He calmly catches the first 2 arrows on his shield, something the old him could barely react to at all. The next arrow comes at his head, and he slips past it with a small, almost casual dodge. Then he hops over another shot under his feet and clears the whole trap without even slowing down. At the next trap, he blocks the stronger ceiling shot with his shield before it can punch through his arm like before. A right side shot follows, and Ho-Jae knocks it away with his sword, paying off all the painful practice that taught him how. He ducks the blind front shot by memory alone, then leaps through the last low volley and rolls back to his feet. As he runs on, Ho-Jae realizes the tutorial was built less like an execution and more like brutal training meant to sharpen him. He reaches the bottomless pit that nearly killed him before, but now he charges straight for the rope instead of fearing it. Instead of hanging underneath, he runs across the rope itself and lets the incoming arrows miss him. That clean crossing teaches him one more thing: his senses and balance skills work better together than they do alone. The corridor turns into a cruel endurance section, where long empty runs hide sudden arrows meant to break his concentration instead of his body. Battle concentration is what keeps him alive here, and he feels a hard-earned pride in how much he has sharpened himself over 28 days. 15 hours later, that long push finally catches up with him, and Ho-Jae has to stop for breath. A new rule from the community hangs over him now: the first attempt must be cleared within 30 days, so he cannot afford to fail this push. When he checks himself, he realizes a recent level up already healed most of the damage, leaving only 2 arrows stuck through his right arm. Ahead of him lies the only trap with a warning, a red line on the floor that announces chaos from every direction. He remembers how the first attempt turned him into a human pincushion and how the second attempt almost killed him because there was no pattern to memorize. Knowing he cannot heal right away, Ho-Jae snaps off the shafts in his right arm so the wounds will not block his movement. He decides his ruined right arm and sword will have to serve as a second shield, because offense barely matters if he cannot stay moving. He hypes himself up with sheer stubbornness, because this trap has already shown him what hesitation costs. Then he remembers the key detail from earlier tries: the arrows start exactly 3 seconds after he crosses. He backs up, forces his body into a sprint start, and commits to blasting through as much of the kill zone as possible before the barrage begins. He explodes forward, crosses the red line at full speed, and starts counting down in his head. By the time the count hits 0, he has already made it deep into the trap, giving himself the one advantage he can actually control. The first flash appears in front of him, and he throws himself into a sliding dive to get under the low storm of arrows. He rolls through the impact zone without control, using speed itself as a shield while arrows slam into the floor around him. His left wrist twists under the shield during the roll, but stopping would be worse than the pain. He keeps charging because in this trap, losing speed means giving the side and rear volleys more time to tear him apart. He blocks a shot at his face with the shield, then panics and takes another arrow through his already mangled right arm to save his stomach. That split-second flinch costs him, and arrows from behind punch into his back as soon as his pace breaks. After that, he gives up on dodging perfectly and turns the run into pure survival, blocking what he can and tanking the rest. Another arrow buries into his left calf, and the moment his leg fails, his whole rhythm collapses. He crashes down, but terror jerks him right back up before the trap can finish him on the ground. Half hopping forward on a failing leg, he nearly dodges the next front shot, but it still rips through his ear. Then an arrow slams into his right heel too, leaving both legs wrecked and death suddenly very close. Refusing to die there, Ho-jae throws his whole body forward in one last desperate dive. He slams down hard, hears water ahead, and realizes he has somehow made it through the trap alive again. The reward waiting there is a healing well, the same lifeline that saved him after his earlier failure at this trap. Barely conscious, Ho-jae crawls to the water and drags his wrecked body into the well. The moment he falls into the healing water, Ho-jae finally blacks out. Ho-jae nearly drowns after throwing himself into the healing well, and when he comes up gasping, the clear spring has turned red with his blood. Since the well heals him instantly, Ho-jae grits his teeth and yanks the arrows out of his own body one by one. He drinks the cleaner water from the spring, checks that his body is fully restored, and climbs up to think through what almost killed him. Looking back on the last arrow trap, Ho-jae realizes he got greedy and tried to tank hits instead of dodging carefully, which nearly got him killed again. That thought leads him to a bigger lesson. The tutorial traps are not just torture, they are meant to force growth, and he may have missed a chance to gain a real dodging skill. When he opens his status, the only real change is pain tolerance going up again, which annoys him because it lets him endure pain without actually dulling it. Chewing jerky as he walks on, Ho-jae reads the community chatter and confirms the healing well was the last trap before the first floor boss room. Seeing the finish at last, he decides that on the second to last day he will finally stop grinding and challenge the boss. As he wrings water from his clothes and keeps walking, thick fog suddenly fills the corridor, and a giant stone door appears ahead. When Ho-jae touches the door, the system only asks if he will attempt it, so he answers yes and trusts everything he has survived to this point. The heavy door rumbles open to reveal a pond inside, but the moment he enters, it slams shut behind him. The next message tells him to enter, and when he turns back, Ho-jae realizes the pond is actually lava and the whole room is packed with arrow traps. He studies the arena and sees 9 rounded stone stepping bridges floating above the lava in a neat 3x3 grid, each one just dangerous enough to slip from. The trial rules finally appear. Once he steps onto the stone path, he has to survive 5 minutes. With no better option left, Ho-jae jumps onto the first stone and braces for an instant attack, only for the system to reveal he still has 30 seconds before the barrage starts. He uses the short countdown to test the footing, then jumps to the center stone and realizes his enhanced body can make the distance. But one mistake still means death. Then, without warning, an arrow snaps toward his face, and Ho-jae barely ducks in time. He immediately learns the real problem of the stage. On these narrow rounded stones, even ordinary dodges are hard, and the heavy fast arrows will knock him backward into the lava if he blocks them badly. Forced into precise defense, Ho-jae starts shaving arrows aside with the edge of his shield, and the desperate technique levels his shield's skill almost immediately. When the pressure keeps rising, he commits to movement and jumps backward to another stone without even looking, trusting his balance and heightened senses to carry him. He lands and keeps his footing, which proves his improved balance is the only reason he is not already falling into the lava. Then a new disaster hits when his clothes catch fire from the heat, and the flames start spreading while the arrows keep coming. Since standing still is no longer possible, Ho-jae starts leaping from stone to stone while screaming through the pain as the fire climbs across his torso. The system rewards his suffering with pain resistance and burn resistance, but Ho-jae can feel that the new skills do nothing to make the pain itself smaller. Smoke starts stinging his eyes and nose, and with death pressing in, he tears off his burning shirt in the middle of the barrage. That desperate move costs him his balance for a beat, and an arrow punches through his right arm while he struggles to recover. He pushes on anyway, but the lava's heat reaches his legs next, and when his ankle catches fire too, Ho-jae realizes even getting close to the lava is enough to burn him. By now Ho-jae has no spare motion left for anything but survival, so he keeps moving and endures the burns because stopping to strip off his pants would kill him faster. As the agony drags on, the world suddenly seems to slow for him, and Ho-jae drops into an extreme state of focus where every arrow becomes clear. In that slowed world, he redirects one arrow with almost no impact at all and slips past the next with the smallest possible tilt of his body. Then, just as suddenly, the arrows stop, the fire dies out, and the lava below starts to vanish. The wall ahead crumbles open into a path, and Ho-jae finally understands that the deadly stone layout really was a bridge to the exit. As he reaches the path, the system announces that he has cleared Hell difficulty first floor, heals all his injuries, and showers him with points and rewards. The clear reward that matters most is a new skill, Wind Spirit's Protection, and Ho-Jae is stunned because he has only heard of people getting items, not a skill this strong. When he checks the skill details and sees it gives him a flat 10 dexterity, Ho-Jae realizes all the suffering on this floor paid off in a huge way. Even fully healed, he feels strangely drained as he follows the dark path onward and accepts the next prompt to continue. After a brief floating sensation, Ho-Jae arrives in bright green plains that look almost absurdly peaceful after the hell he just escaped. There, on the grass, Ho-Jae spots a small girl in a white dress crouching alone, and he blurts out in disbelief that she looks like a rabbit. After clearing the first floor, Ho-Jae sees new system windows unlock the store and auction, but his attention goes straight to the strange girl waiting for him on the endless grass. When Ho-Jae blurts out rabbit, the girl perks up, hops right over, and proudly declares that yes, she is a rabbit. Ho-Jae tests the obvious question, and her blunt answer makes it clear she thinks of herself as a rabbit first and a person second. Remembering what the community said about merchant-like NPCs appearing after boss rooms, Ho-Jae realizes Hell difficulty got something much stranger than the usual old mage or giant. Kirikiri asks who he is, and the moment Ho-Jae introduces himself, she repeats his name and starts laughing like it is the funniest thing she has ever heard. Her laughter gets so wild she falls over rolling in the grass, and Ho-Jae can only sit there, annoyed and awkwardly distracted. Then her mood snaps without warning, and she goes stiff, crouches low, and starts hopping away like she suddenly forgot he exists. Ho-Jae calls her back and finally gets her name, Kirikiri, which makes her earlier mockery of his name feel even more ridiculous. When Ho-Jae asks what she is supposed to tell him, Kirikiri proudly announces the practical part first. He can now use the store and auction. Ho-Jae opens the store and finds an enormous catalog of gear and daily goods, while the auction immediately tells him it cannot be used here outside the waiting room or residential area. Kirikiri urgently tells him that if he wants combat items, he has to buy them here, because the waiting room store only carries things useless in a fight. Ho-Jae decides not to replace his current weapons yet, since the shield still works and equipment gets fully repaired whenever he returns to the waiting room. Instead of shopping blindly, Ho-Jae asks the question that matters most to survival: what really happens if someone fails to clear the first floor in 30 days? Her first answer jolts him cold: if you fail after 30 days, you go back to the waiting room. Kirikiri explains the catch right away: when the round ends, stored jerky and water vanish, and after that food has to be bought with points based on how far you reached, so nobody can hide forever in safety. She reminds him the waiting room only suppresses hunger while he is inside it, and he already knows he gets kicked back out after 24 hours. When Ho-Jae tries to push further, Kirikiri abruptly shuts down, squeezing her eyes closed and pulling down her ears as she refuses to say more. She explains the rule: her job is to advise players who reach her, but deeper answers only go to people with potential, strong results, and her personal favor, and he only has one chance left. Ho-Jae swallows all the bigger questions he wants to ask about the tutorial, the invitation, and going home, and decides to save that final chance for later. Kirikiri spends her own last bit of advice on something immediate, telling him to buy as many status effect potions as he can. That warning tells Ho-Jae the second floor is probably built around abnormal conditions, so he starts buying as many different status potions as he can. As he shops, Kirikiri eagerly explains the items one by one, and Ho-Jae realizes this odd little rabbit genuinely likes teaching people. Even after all that help, Ho-Jae still asks the darkest thing left on his mind: what happens to people who die in the tutorial? Kirikiri does not answer with words, but the pity in her eyes tells Ho-Jae everything he needs to know. Ho-Jae drops the subject, thanks Kirikiri for helping him shop, and chooses to leave before either of them has to say the answer aloud. Light wraps around Ho-Jae as he returns to the waiting room, and through the haze he catches Kirikiri hopping and waving after him, begging him not to die. Much later on the 60th floor, Ho-Jae walks alone through the empty residential district in a surprisingly good mood and settles into his usual outdoor cafe. He spends points on a caramel macchiato, and the simple luxury hits him hard because life in the tutorial finally feels hopeful instead of only desperate. The reason for that change is Lee Yun-hee, a new Hell participant who entered 30 days ago and gave Ho-Jae someone to worry about and hope for. He has spent that time gathering community knowledge and shaping it into a practical guide, because he wants Yun-hee to grow stronger as safely and efficiently as possible. In Ho-Jae's eyes, Yun-hee is exceptional from the start, a national team archer with the physical training, focus, decision-making, and mental control he never had back then. He knows talent alone means nothing here, but Yun-hee's first floor clear and the way she actually uses his advice make him believe she might go far. That hope pushes him to prepare a proper care package, and he buys 5 cookie gift sets to help fill it out. He checks the bag carefully, making sure it holds practical support gear for an archer and everyday comfort items instead of flashy overpowered weapons. Ho-Jae deliberately holds back on raw protection, because if Yun-hee grows too dependent on strong gear in the early floors, Hell difficulty will kill her later. What worries him even more than monsters is the tutorial's mental damage. so he packs most of his gifts around stress, loneliness, and fear instead of raw protection. Then Ho Jae's thoughts derail for a second, and he seriously wonders whether some kind of intimate stress relief item would count as helpful. A message from Park Young-ah cuts in, asking why he still has not sent in his regular report for Jajangdan. Ho Jae grumbles that reporting from Health Floor 60 is pointless when he is the only person there, but he still replies. Since she is already online, he asks Park Young-ah if sending that kind of item to Yun he would be acceptable, and her answer comes back instantly furious. Ho Jae keeps trying to defend the idea as practical stress relief for a trapped rookie, which only makes Park Young-ah's chat replies call him more of a pervert. Once the nonsense passes, Ho Jae opens the auction and lists the gift bag with the standard 77-point starting bid used for sending gifts to someone specific. He reflects on why this gift system works at all. Jajangdan made interfering with deliveries a crime, and their harsh enforcement is one of the few things stopping the tutorial from sliding into chaos. At last the transfer goes through cleanly, and Ho Jae watches the bag leave for Lee Yun-hee, hoping it helps her even a little. Ho Jae finally reaches the second floor waiting room and feels the first real release since entering the tutorial. With more than 40 hours left in his first attempt, he realizes he cleared the boss so fast that he could have abused the trap one more time first. Then he notices the new option in this room, a prompt that can send him straight into the second floor stage before the reset. That possibility makes him think bigger, because players on easier difficulties may already be farming higher floors and hiding their best information. He also wonders whether clearing multiple floors in one attempt could stack first clear rewards, and decides to ask Kirikiri once his plan is ready. While looking around, he finds the one upgrade in the room, a nasty old bed hidden in the dark corner. Ho Jae stops caring how filthy it looks and drops onto the bed the moment his tension finally breaks. He sleeps so deeply that when he wakes up, half the day is gone and the remaining time has dropped to just over 30 hours. Once he clears his head, he turns to the real problem bothering him, whether his reckless obsession with growth has broken something in his mind. He replays his own logic and admits that choosing pain, near death, and trap grinding just because it was efficient only makes sense if he is still treating this place like a game. That thought drags up his old life, when he drifted through dull days drinking, watching TV, and not really caring how he ended up. But the tutorial has woken up the same brutal thrill he once felt as a pro gamer, the kind of high that mattered more than comfort or fear. He finally gives himself an answer. His mindset is definitely abnormal, but right now that dangerous hunger is fuel, not a weakness. With that settled, he opens the shop and confirms that combat gear is still locked here, leaving only food and daily life items for sale. Thanks to Kirikiri's earlier warning, he already bought what he needed, so he changes out of his ruined clothes and finally feels human again in a clean white t-shirt and sweats. Next he opens the auction and finds it full of starter junk, mismatched weapons, and random first-floor rewards people are trying to dump. One listing makes him laugh out loud, a useless cat collar with a bell, proof that some reward rolls are just absurd. After checking the community chatter, he concludes the bonus rewards seem wildly random, no matter how well someone clears a floor. That leaves his final question for the day: should he use the leftover time to scout the second floor now, or save that risk for the next attempt? He weighs the obvious upside first, because even a failed push now could reveal the second floor's layout and maybe unlock hidden bonuses. But the downside is just as clear: the floor is still a black box, and the only warning he has from Kirikiri is one ugly phrase: status ailment. Once he strips away the guesswork, he decides the information he could gain right now is too limited to justify a blind rush. Since he has no rivals on held difficulty, he chooses pacing over greed and postpones the second floor challenge until the second attempt actually starts. That choice pushes him back to the same answer as before: train harder and learn what this upgraded body can really do. For a moment his thoughts drift back to Choi Min-sik, Cho Kyung-min, and Park Soo-ah, and the idea that he may never see them again hits harder than he expects. He cuts that mood off immediately, knowing that if he sinks into misery here, it will ruin both his focus and his chances of surviving. So he trains alone for hours, testing his limits with stretches, running, jumps, push-ups, punches, and kicks across the cramped stone room. The more he tests himself, the clearer it becomes that his body has crossed into outright superhuman territory. What shocks him even more is that the tutorial did not only strengthen his muscles, it also sharpened the kind of instinct and talent that only gifted athletes are born with. That realization boosts his confidence fast, because now his proven game sense is being backed by a body that can finally keep up. When he opens his status to review everything, one line stops him cold: battle concentration has an active function he can trigger on purpose. He immediately ties that unlock to the strange hyper-focus state he hit in the boss room and realizes he might be able to enter it at will. So he activates battle concentration during training, and the world seems to slow down enough for him to read his own movement in incredible detail. The power is amazing, but after keeping it up too long he gets hit with dizziness, headache, shaky vision, nausea, and collapsing legs. Even after learning the risk, he keeps using the skill in short bursts because it makes every workout and every sword and shield drill more efficient. That progress only leaves him with one new frustration: he can feel himself improving fast, but there is nobody here to teach him how to use any of it properly. So he swallows that frustration and keeps grinding by himself until the remaining hours finally run out. At last the countdown ends, and the system announces the start of his second attempt on held difficulty. The second attempt starts, and the portal in Lee Ho-jae's waiting room vanishes at once, proving he is locked in here for the first 3 days again. Instead of wasting the extra save time, Ho-jae coolly maps out a brutal training plan to sharpen his body, his weapon control, and even his pain resistance. He even decides that his breaks will not be breaks at all, just more self-inflicted pain to try to force his tolerance skills higher. When he opens the community notice board, Ho-jae is jolted to see the hell difficulty count rise, because a fresh batch of players has just been dragged into the first floor. The chat fills with the same panic he remembers from day one, but the new hell players stay silent, and that silence worries him more than the chaos. Remembering how Choi Min-sik had kept his own group organized, Ho-jae guesses these newcomers may also be talking privately, but he is sure that ignorance will still get them all killed. So Ho-jae urgently types into the chat, begging the new hell players to answer so he can warn them properly. He sends a second message explaining that he survived the first floor on hell difficulty, but the people he wants to save still refuse to say a word. As the minutes drag on, Ho-jae has no way to contact them directly, and his worry turns into helpless, nail-biting anger. Then the new players leave the community chat entirely, and Ho-jae snaps, cursing them for ignoring help that was practically handed to them. Even after deciding he owes them nothing more, he cannot stomach leaving them blind, so he spends time writing out every hell difficulty trap he knows. After that, he throws himself back into trap training, replaying the first floor arrow gauntlet until his body starts moving on instinct. The training pays off enough that Ho-jae finally believes he could clear the old arrow trap cleanly, even if the boss room still feels too lethal to trust. On his next break, he goes right back to stabbing his own arm while scanning the chat, but none of the resistance skills budge. Other difficulties argue over whether his hell difficulty warning is real, and Ho-jae can only hope the new players believe enough of it to survive. When the system announces the stage is opening again, Ho-jae cuts off his lingering worry and turns his full attention back to his own survival. He steps into tutorial floor 2 and finds another dark stone corridor, familiar enough to be unsettling but low-ceilinged enough to feel tighter than the first floor. The first thing Ho-jae does is check his upgraded gear and potion stock, because he chose light armor on purpose to protect himself without getting lazy. He starts forward at a controlled pace, because he has learned that on hell difficulty the real danger is not slowness but getting surprised from the wrong angle. That confidence is real now, because Sprint and the Wind Spirit's blessing let his body go lighter and sharper once he keeps his speed above a certain threshold. The first trap triggers from above, and Ho-jae meets it almost casually, knocking away the opening arrow with his shield. More arrows rush in from ahead, but he rolls forward and slips past them so smoothly that ordinary shots barely feel threatening anymore. Feeling in control, Ho-jae even chooses to parry one arrow with his sword just to keep improving under pressure. That tiny bit of greed backfires when a louder shot follows the same line, catching him off balance and forcing him to trigger battle concentration. Inside that slowed world, he suddenly realizes one incoming shot is not a normal arrow at all but a huge bolt moving far too fast to dodge cleanly. With no safe escape left, Ho-jae braces behind his shield and deliberately lines up his own arm to stop the bolt before it can reach his chest. The impact is vicious, smashing through shield and armor alike, and Ho-jae is hurled back with his left arm horribly pierced but his heart still untouched. Before he can recover, smaller shots come from behind, and one needle-like hit catches his ankle as battle concentration drops away. He tears the needle out and immediately remembers Kurikiri's warning that weird status effects matter as much as raw damage down here. Ho-jae forces himself to wait and observe instead of chugging a potion blindly, even while the bolt in his arm makes thinking almost unbearable. The poison reveals itself piece by piece as heat, spreading pain, paralysis, headache, and stomach cramps crawl through his body. Once he is sure it is poison, Ho-jae finally pulls out an antidote, though opening it one-handed is almost as irritating as the trap itself. The antidote smells so rotten that even in this mess he stops to wonder if the cure is secretly poison too. But as he endures the symptoms a little longer, Ho-jae makes a strange, calm discovery. For him, this poison still feels manageable. With poison spreading from the dart in his ankle, Ho-jae forces himself to stay calm because his hard-earned feel for death tells him he is still not at the edge yet. He decides the poison is painful but still manageable, so instead of wasting a potion right away, he tries to endure it long enough to earn resistance first. Just as he commits to that gamble, the system rewards him with poison resistance LV.1. Seeing a chance to save the potion entirely, he straps off his leg above the wound and starts the slowest possible walk back to the waiting room. He even picks up the 5 poison darts on the floor as he limps along, grimly amused that he looks like a man on a quiet stroll while half dying. Then the paralysis suddenly spikes, his breathing turns ragged, and every shaky step starts to feel like the poison is dragging him straight toward death. He finally reaches the waiting room portal and sits down in front of it to remove the strap, but the moment he loosens it, the poison floods harder through his body. As his vision narrows and his thoughts slow to a crawl, he barely stays awake long enough to gain paralysis resistance LV.1. To jolt his fading mind back online, Ho-Jae twists the giant arrow in his ruined left arm and forces himself to choose the portal before collapsing outside it. The portal light wraps around him, and when he wakes again, he is safely back on the waiting room floor. Once he catches his breath, Ho-Jae admits the poison became far more dangerous than expected, especially once the paralysis started shutting down his body and mind. Even so, he is not scared off at all. With poison resistance LV.1 and paralysis resistance LV.1 earned, he already plans to train against it again more efficiently. He checks the 5 darts and finds the waiting room has already purified their poison, so he stores them away for later use anyway. Not wanting to lose more time on this attempt, he heads straight back through the portal to keep pushing the second floor. Back in the corridor, Ho-Jae sets a hard goal for the day: push poison and paralysis resistance as high as he can before moving beyond the first trap. Armed with what he learned earlier, he slips past the huge opening bolt and blocks the follow-up poison darts without even needing battle concentration. After clearing the trap cleanly, he carries the darts back to the portal and prepares for something even crazier than his old pain training. He mutters at himself, then deliberately drives one poison dart deep into his right hand to grind resistance faster and study how the poison spreads. The same wave of pain, sweat, dizziness, and spreading paralysis hits again, and Ho-Jae grimly decides to keep going until he finishes the grind for the day. By day 2, the training only gets him to poison resistance LV.2 and paralysis resistance LV.3, and he bitterly realizes he blacked out again after pushing too hard. He suspects the darts act more like a neurotoxin than a simple poison, but with time running, he gives up on perfect grinding and decides to push deeper instead. The first trap is easy now, but 5 minutes later the second trap reveals itself with a poison-coated arrow that feels wrong the instant he blocks it. When more shots follow, Ho-Jae instantly triggers battle concentration and realizes this trap is nastier than it looked. Under the skill's heightened focus, he catches the real trick. 6 arrows are flying in from several directions, but some launch almost silently to bait him into trusting his hearing. He makes a snap move to the left, blocks 2 arrows with his shield, and confirms there were attacks coming from behind too. Then the second layer appears. Poison darts are tucked right behind the arrows, nearly invisible unless he keeps tracking every line perfectly. Thanks to battle concentration and his eye-enhancing skills, he threads through the barrage and clears the whole trap without taking a hit. Afterward, he is tempted to test the new poison on himself too, but this time he reins himself in and saves that idea for after he finds the floors healing well. He keeps advancing through more mixed arrow and dart traps, and while the patterns grow faster and nastier, his grinding pays off enough for him to survive them cleanly. But somewhere along the way, a subtler threat starts creeping in as the corridor air grows hotter and heavier around him. At first the change is slight, but as he pushes on, the heat and humidity build until just standing there starts draining his strength. Even in that furnace-like air, the traps keep firing, forcing Ho-Jae to burn even more stamina just to stay alive. Hours later, after another cleared trap, he finally understands the floor's real game. The arrows were never the main threat, the heat was. He gulps cold water and dumps the rest over his head, only for it to turn warm almost instantly in the brutal air. That is when it clicks for him completely. The floor has been boiling him slowly on purpose, raising the temperature so gradually he would not notice until his body was already failing. By the time he realizes it, his legs are already trembling, he is dizzy and nauseous from dehydration, and he knows another trap could kill him in this state. Right at that breaking point, the system grants heat resistance LV.1 and gives him one brief, precious breath of relief. But the relief vanishes almost immediately, and Ho-Jae is left gasping in the same unbearable heat, knowing the second floor is still trying to cook him alive. Deep in the second floor corridor, Ho-Jae realizes the heat is killing him fast and makes a desperate choice to keep going instead of turning back. His body starts breaking down from heat stroke, so he gulps water from his inventory and dumps the rest over himself just to stay moving. Remembering Kurikiri's advice, he pulls out a freezing potion and decides to bet everything on it. He tears up a large cloth, soaks it with the potion, and wraps it around himself like a makeshift cooling cloak. He adds a wet towel and more freezing potion over his head, and the small burst of relief lets him breathe again. He forces down salty jerky, keeps just enough speed for Wind Spirit's blessing, and pushes deeper while his strength runs out. Then the humid furnace abruptly turns into a dry desert heat, and the new air starts drying him out even faster. He throws back an expensive stamina potion, but his lungs still tear with every breath and his body starts shutting down. When his sweat suddenly stops and his skin starts burning from within, he realizes the heat has pushed him into an even worse state. He smears freezing potion directly onto his bare skin, using the sharp cold pain to keep himself conscious for a few more steps. When even that is not enough, he does the reckless thing and swallows the freezing potion to cool his core. The cold tears through his insides, but he still lurches into a shaky run because stopping now feels like death. An arrow trap fires again, and he can only dive down and curl under his shield while poison arrows and darts hammer into his back and sides. Pinned there and barely conscious, he finally understands he rushed this floor instead of slowly building the resistances he needed. Just when he thinks he is dying, A level up hits and drags him back from the brink. The level up restores his body to peak condition, dropping the arrows from his back and wiping away the poison and heat damage for the moment. He does not hesitate this time and bursts forward at a full run before the heat can crush him again. He activates battle concentration mid-run and locks all his focus onto moving faster and cleaner through the trap zone. Another arrow snaps toward his face, and he slips past it with the smallest tilt of his head without breaking stride. As he keeps sprinting, Li Ho-jae realizes Wine Spirit's blessing has a hidden full speed effect that makes him absurdly faster than before. The speed is incredible, but the air hitting his face is still furnace hot, turning the run itself into another kind of torture. Even scared by how fast he is moving, he decides not to slow down and doubles down on the sprint. He turns battle concentration back on and forces himself to keep control while the hot wind cooks his skin. A fresh volley of poison arrows fires, but now he is moving so fast that most of the traps simply cannot catch him. For one brief moment, the impossible run actually feels like victory as he slips cleanly through the trap field. Then the heat suddenly disappears, his legs tangle at scooter-like speed, and one stupid misstep turns into disaster. He is launched into the air, slams across the floor, and blacks out from the crash. Much later, he wakes on the corridor floor in his own blood and realizes he somehow survived again. He uses his last healing potion, but the near-death crash leaves him flat and bitter about how badly he messed up. As the shame hits, he can barely stand the fact that he almost died by tripping over his own feet. When he checks his body, he finds ugly burns and blisters all over his skin and even parts of his hair burned away. A normal healing potion barely helps the burns, so he switches to a burn treatment and checks his status. The status screen confirms he reached level 7, gained stronger heat and burn resistance, and even picked up natural regeneration while he was out. Seeing the note that the god of adventure pities him only makes the whole humiliating mess sting even more. After thinking it through, he decides natural regeneration is weak but still a big deal because he cannot keep gambling on level ups for healing. He tests the area and realizes the giant heat trap is finally over, but a cold zone begins just ahead. That is enough to make the next decision clear, and he chooses to return to the waiting room instead of blundering into another trap unprepared. He vows to grind up his heat, burn, and poison resistance properly this time and never rush the floor on confidence alone again. With that lesson burned into him, Li Ho-jae runs back toward the waiting room to prepare the smart way. On round 2, day 19, Ho-jae wakes in the second floor waiting room already tired, but he sticks to the strict routine that keeps him focused in this timeless place. He follows the routine that keeps him steady here, jogging laps around the waiting room and then settling down to a plain breakfast of jerky and rice balls. While he eats, Ho-jae opens the community board and finds the newer survivors chatting about normal world news so casually it almost feels fake. He watches the flood of shared information with mixed feelings, because most people only started talking after meeting supervisors like Kurikiri and wanting to show off what they learned. Some of that information is garbage, and Ho-jae knows he is partly to blame because his own early warning about hell difficulty got lumped in with rumors and outright lies. Still, the top climbers are posting real progress, and Ho-jae is stunned to see someone called Dear God already make it to floor 6. The most important rumor is even bigger. Multiple survivors say clearing floor 100 is the way back home, and that thin hope hits Ho-jae harder than he wants to admit. He forces himself back to reality, deciding that dreaming about floor 100 is useless if he cannot survive the floor in front of him. Before logging off, he checks the hell difficulty board and sees the result he expected but still hates. Not one newcomer survived. Not wanting to sink deeper into that mood, Ho-jae shuts the community and calls up his status window instead. His level and skills have climbed again, but Ho-jae is still irritated that the god of adventure keeps pitying him in the miscellaneous line. What matters more to him are the new gains, especially increased field of vision, which sharpens the way he reads what is happening around his target. He also tests tough skin in the simplest way possible and ends up grossed out by the strange, leathery feel of his own body getting harder. After confirming that his resistance growth has slowed, Ho-jae decides the review is over and it is time to enter the stage again. By the next day, Ho-jae pushes through the corridor's brutal heat until it finally breaks, and he rips off his blanket with a gasp of relief. Knowing the next section is freezing, he quickly switches to thick handmade winter gear he made himself just to stay sane while trapped here. His resistance levels have stopped budging no matter how much time he spends suffering, so today he changes priorities and decides this run is for clearing the second floor. He accelerates into Wind Spirit's blessing and tears down the corridor at familiar high speed while the trap arrows chase behind him. Because he already memorized the trap patterns, most of the deadly volley is just background noise now, with only the occasional arrow worth blocking. The speed makes his handmade hat feel useless, so he shoves it into storage and keeps running straight into the colder stretch. Soon the cold turns savage enough to hurt through every layer, and Ho-jae is forced to slow down before the freezing wind strips him apart. At the lower speed he has to watch the traps again, but the real problem is his body going numb as frostbite starts showing on his skin. Furious that even this pain still will not raise his cold resistance, Ho-jae takes a brutal shortcut and jams heat stones into his gloves and shoes. The stones burn him on contact, but he endures the searing smell and pain because a few burns are better than losing his limbs to frostbite. When he reaches the last trap, Ho-jae activates battle concentration and braces for another attack pattern that refuses to become predictable. Even without a fixed pattern, the final volley cannot touch him anymore, and Ho-jae slips through it with the calm precision of someone who has done this too many times. A few more steps carry him out of the freezing zone, and the sudden appearance of a healing fountain feels almost routine now. He drinks just enough to fix the frostbite and burns, then keeps moving because the real challenge is waiting ahead. Past the wall of thick fog, Ho-jae finally sees the giant stone door to the second boss room. The door grinds open, and Ho-jae enters a wide circular chamber that reminds him of an old stone shrine, except this one has no statue and no comfort. As soon as he is inside, the entrance slams shut behind him, reminding Ho-jae that boss rooms only get dangerous once retreat is no longer possible. Then the room surprises him with something he actually likes seeing. A familiar blue portal suddenly appears in the middle of the chamber. His confusion deepens when the system offers to send him back to the second floor waiting room instead of forward. A second warning appears and makes the room's trick obvious. He has to stay here for at least 3 hours, and the portal is bait for anyone too weak to endure it. Ho-jae pieces it together fast and concludes the whole trial is built around patience, with the escape portal there to tempt challengers into surrendering on their own. That realization steadies him, because everything he suffered through on the second floor was already training for this exact kind of endurance test. He openly accepts the challenge and waits for the room to show him how it plans to break his patience. Instead of attacking right away, the system almost politely gives him a 30-second warning before the trial begins, and Ho-jae can only answer with dry disbelief. In the second floor boss room, the system orders Ho-jae to stay 3 hours for a gateway trial, but it gives him no visible timer this time. Because he still does not know what kind of attack is coming, Ho-jae lowers his stance and stays right beside the portal as his emergency escape. The trial finally starts with a cold warning. He must withstand the most painful times he has ever experienced. A ringing noise hits, and Ho-jae briefly blacks out before waking to a strange split awareness between his real body and a scene forced into his head. Once he confirms the portal is still right in front of him, Ho-jae steadies himself and dares to look into the memory illusion. The first projection drags him back to the first floor trap corridor, where his past self crept forward in terror with sword and shield. The trap fires exactly like before, and the arrow in his ankle brings back the raw pain from before he ever had pain resistance. Even that recreated pain is not enough to break him now, and he almost sounds disappointed that this is the best the trial can do. The next projection jumps to the second floor waiting room, where his past self trained by pressing a red-hot sword into his own leg. That fresh burn pain surges through him too, but Ho-jae treats it like another ugly memory he can simply sit through. A god reacts with embarrassed fascination, and Ho-jae realizes the trial is being watched from above. Then the trial turns cruel and drags up a school memory, putting his younger self in uniform before a packed hall full of students. His younger self blurts out the confession he rehearsed, and the memory instantly heads for disaster. The crowd erupts, the girl breaks down in tears, and the public humiliation hits harder than the physical pain ever did. Ho-jae nearly comes apart in the real room, furious that the trial has switched from pain to humiliation just to dig deeper. Before he can recover, the illusion throws him into the worst memory yet, his father's funeral. The trap replays his father's last hospital conversation, dragging all the old anger, regret, and guilt back to the surface. He relives leaving that argument unresolved, and then the cold reality that his father died in surgery the very next day. At the funeral, his sister's blame lands on top of the guilt he already feels, and the memory keeps tearing that wound back open. To stop himself from being swallowed by the illusion, Ho-jae grabs his sword in the real room and drives it into his own thigh. That familiar physical pain snaps him back to the present, and he tells himself this is only a psychological attack inside the tutorial. He stabs himself again and again, turning the familiar agony into an anchor so the past cannot drag him under. Instead of denying his past anymore, Ho-jae decides he will carry that guilt, use it as fuel, and endure the whole trial head-on. With that choice made, his panic burns back into anger, and every thought of escaping through the portal disappears. The next illusion drags him back to his pro-gamer days, right before a younger rival publicly mocked him in an interview. The humiliation of that defeat returns too, but this time he grabs onto anger instead of sinking into shame. He lightly slices his leg again, deciding that if the trial wants to attack his mind, then he will turn this into resistance training too. As the long trial drags on, he chews jerky from his inventory and endures wave after wave of repeated memories, family scoldings, and even childish nightmares. By then, the pain itself matters less than the audience, because more and more gods keep sending reactions as they watch him endure. At last the system announces that he is the first person to completely conquer the final trial of Floor 2. His scattered resistance skills fuse into mind corruption immunity, all his stats rise, his injuries are healed, and huge clear rewards pour in. Before he can even sort that out, another message offers a strange extra reward. The god of slowness wants to give him her power instead. Ho-jae instantly accepts, too stunned and greedy to hesitate when the word power shows up. The gift becomes Blink Emblem LV Max, but its description reads less like a skill and more like a threat from a god who expects loyalty. Another god immediately sends a disappointed reaction, and Ho-Jae decides he needs to ask Kirikiri how these gods and trial rewards really work. Once the messages stop, he stretches in the blood-wet room and feels an eerie calm after surviving the worst psychological attack yet. Then he finally checks the time and realizes the memory trial did not last a few hours after all, but 3 full days. With everything finally settled, Ho-Jae walks to the portal and leaves the second-floor boss room behind. White light swallows his vision, and he arrives back in the green merchant plane where Kirikiri bounces over to greet him like an old regular. Back in the merchant area after clearing floor 2, Ho-Jae thanks Kirikiri with an absurdly expensive whipped cream cake, and both of them end up happily devouring it. Still eating cake, Ho-Jae asks for any useful advice on floor 3, but Kirikiri bluntly says there is none. Kirikiri explains that Ho-Jae has grown too fast, so her usual tips would not really help him anymore. He briefly considers asking what wiped out every Hell Mode challenger on round 2 floor 1, but when Kirikiri hints the answer would cost almost all his quota, he drops it. Instead, Ho-Jae asks about Blink Emblem, and Kirikiri immediately starts to explain before getting distracted and hopping away mid-conversation. After Ho-Jae calls her back, Kirikiri finally gives the real answer. Blink Emblem is a divine gift from the god of slowness, earned instead of a normal bonus by challengers who exceed a threshold. She adds one more useful detail. Each god only gets one chance to gift a challenger, which makes Ho-Jae realize how little he understands about the gods and their motives. When Ho-Jae presses for Blink Emblem's actual effect, Kirikiri admits she already arranged for the full description to appear in his floor 3 waiting room status window. Ho-Jae pushes his luck and asks for the same treatment for Wind Spirit's blessings, though Kirikiri's quick agreement only makes him more nervous. To make sure she follows through, Ho-Jae threatens to buy 2 cakes next time and eat both himself if the explanations are bad, and Kirikiri panics hard at the idea. The tantrum also reveals something odd to Ho-Jae. Despite rumors that managers can crush challengers, Kirikiri herself feels physically weak, almost like an ordinary person. Ho-Jae uses the moment to ask the biggest rumor in the community, whether clearing the 100th floor returns challengers to the real world, but Kirikiri refuses to answer yet. His next questions hit the same wall too, because information about the gods and the managers is still beyond the quota he has earned. He does get one strange answer. The idea of completely conquering a trial is apparently just a mistake made when the tutorial was created, though Kirikiri refuses to explain that part. Then Ho-Jae wastes a question on a shameless joke about her underwear, and Kirikiri immediately punches him while declaring privacy questions off limits. Finally, Ho-Jae asks why his resistance skills stopped growing at level 4, and Kirikiri confirms there really is a cap, another abnormal flaw that normal challengers should never hit so early. That answer spends the rest of his quota, and Kirikiri instantly turns her attention to the lonely cherry still left on the plate. When Ho-Jae flatly refuses to hand it over, the two of them settle the fate of the cherry with rock paper scissors. Ho-Jae actually loses the first round, realizes Kirikiri shows her throw too early, and shamelessly demands a best of 3. He turns that tell against her and wins the rematch easily, leaving Kirikiri on the verge of tears over a single cherry. For a moment, Ho-Jae enjoys tormenting her, dangling the cherry in front of her tearful stare just because he can. But Ho-Jae decides staying on Kirikiri's good side matters more, so he awards her the cherry as a reward for her help. Her tears vanish instantly as she nibbles the cherry like treasure, and Ho-Jae stands to leave for floor 3. Kirikiri waves him off with childlike energy and immediately asks him to come back with another cake, which makes Ho-Jae laugh on his way to the portal. The moment Ho-Jae arrives in the floor 3 waiting room, a warning appears first. This floor can kill him with a single fall. He immediately checks his status and finds that Kirikiri really did leave a full explanation for Blink Emblem. The description reveals Blink as a divine movement skill with 5 uses, a 5-minute cooldown, and no mana cost, making Ho-Jae realize just how broken it is. Ho-Jae tests Blink in the waiting room and instantly teleports several meters forward, confirming it is closer to true short-range teleportation than a dash. He also learns a huge safety trick. Blink erases momentum, so in theory it could save him even while running or falling. Then he tests the dangerous question, what happens if something blocks the path? And the answer is brutal. Blinking past the bed makes Ho-Jae smash into it, crash across the floor, and briefly expose crushed bone in his leg before the waiting room heals him. Shaken by the crash, he decides Blink is incredible but still too dangerous to use recklessly in combat. He checks the second promised explanation next, and Wind Spirit's blessings finally make sense too. The skill gives dexterity plus 10, explains the speed-based forest blessing and acceleration effects, and even hints at a hidden third stage. Satisfied for once, Ho-Jae decides to sleep and start floor 3 properly the next day with Blink practice as his top priority. Before moving on, Ho-Jae keeps arguing in the community, trying to convince lower floor challengers that ignoring his hell mode warnings will get people killed again. The argument is still messy, but this time more people support him because he is the only hell challenger who survived long enough to speak. Then a private message appears from Lee Chan-suk, inviting Ho-Jae to join something called the Representative Confederation. Ho-Jae realizes factions are already forming in the community, but since he knows nothing about this group and cannot meet anyone in held difficulty anyway, he leaves the message unanswered. 2 days later, after practicing through floor 3, Ho-jae reaches the healing fountain without a scratch, and he has done it twice. The first clean run made him so happy with Blink that he openly praised the god of slowness, which earned a sulking reaction from the god of adventures. But easy progress starts to bother him, so he deliberately clears the route again without using Blink just to keep pushing his own skill. That second perfect run proves he can handle floor 3 on pure memory and reflex, though it gives him no new levels at all. By now he understands floor 3's gimmick. Its traps are built around deception, hiding a trick inside a familiar-looking pattern to catch challengers when they relax. One room makes the lesson obvious, with black and white floor tiles that seem safe if he steps only on white. The trick is that the final row fires anyway, filling the room with poison arrows and forcing him to survive the trap instead of neatly solving it. On his first run he survives that surprise with battle focus and Blink, and on the second he dodges it without Blink because he already memorized the pattern. That is the real shape of floor 3, where the trick can fool you, but if you can still break through the follow-up attack, the danger stays manageable. The floor feels almost too easy, and Ho-jae starts wondering if it is just a throwaway stage with no real payoff for him. He had hoped floor 3 might give him useful utility skills like trap detection or identification, but none of his efforts unlock anything at all. With no new growth coming from the traps anymore, Ho-jae reaches the obvious next step and fixes his eyes on the only thing left, the third floor's boss room. The stone doors open, and Ho-jae steps into a third-floor boss room that is nothing but 2 tiny mountain peaks floating above the clouds. The doors vanish behind him, leaving Ho-jae stranded on a cramped stone patch where one bad step means falling into clouds he cannot even see through. The wind hits so hard that even standing upright feels deadly, and Ho-jae drops his body low just to keep from being blown off. A system message appears and bluntly tells him to reach the objective, even though the only thing in sight is the faraway peak. Then a square tile appears in midair, changes from green to yellow to red, and drops, showing him the basic rule of the trap. A whole bridge of green tiles stretches from his peak to the other one, but with no supports and no safety, it looks more like a sky-born death sentence than a path. When the first tile starts changing color, Ho-jae realizes the boss room is a cruel running game where he has to keep moving or fall to his death. Still swearing at whoever designed this nightmare, he forces himself onto the first tile and starts forward before it can drop. At first he can only inch along with shaking legs, every glance at the clouds under his feet making his heart hammer harder. The tiles start dropping faster, and Ho-jae has no choice but to stop hesitating and break into a run against the wind. Battle focus kicks in, and once he commits to speed, Ho-jae realizes his trained body can actually balance on this madness better than he expected. The terror twists into a reckless rush, and Ho-jae almost laughs at how close every step feels to death. That confidence gets punished immediately when an arrow suddenly flies in, forcing him to block with his shield without losing his footing. He steadies himself by tracking the gap behind him and decides to hold his current pace, trusting his shield to handle the arrows. Then the bridge itself starts bouncing under him, and the trap stops pretending to be fair at all. A mocking god message flashes by as Ho-jae hangs above the shaking tile for a heartbeat, sure he is about to die until his feet finally hit again. Seeing the collapsing path catch up, Ho-jae kicks his speed higher and pulls out the stronger effect of the wind spirit's blessing. Now each step almost sends him airborne, so he starts matching his landings to the wind and trusts his grown reflexes to keep him alive. He reminds himself that Blink is still his lifeline, and the thought finally gives him enough confidence to keep charging ahead. After enough non-stop danger, Ho-jae starts adapting, and the impossible bridge begins to feel almost manageable. Near the end, a familiar vibration warns him the bridge will shake sideways this time, and he bets everything on predicting the pattern. Instead of staying planted, he jumps high into the air to wait out the sideways lurch before it can throw him off. He reads the wind midair, crashes back down with a heavy landing, and immediately sprints again before the collapsing bridge can catch up. By now he has read the arrow pattern too, and he realizes that at this speed the shots can no longer catch him cleanly. The boss room answers his confidence with one last vicious twist. A huge section of the bridge ahead is simply missing. He quickly judges that raw jumping power is not enough, so he commits to a running leap and plans to chain Blink through the gap. Ho-jae jumps, blinks forward 3 times in midair, and finally reaches the far side of the broken bridge. The last blink kills his momentum and the wind almost sweeps him away, so he uses Blink again to cancel the drift and force a safer landing. When he raises his head again, the objective peak is finally close enough to touch. Using the last charge of Blink, Ho-jae makes the final jump and lands on the goal peak at last. The same kind of peak that terrified him at the start now feels like the safest place in the world, and his whole body starts shaking once the run is over. Even while exhausted, Ho-jae cannot shake the feeling that this boss room was not training at all, but pure malice dressed up as a trial. Then the clear messages finally arrive, healing his body, awarding a mountain of points, and confirming he has cleared floor 3 on held difficulty. One reward stands out when the god of adventures offers him a special power instead of a normal bonus, and Ho-jae eagerly accepts. The new power turns out to be Talaria's wings at max level, a divine skill that even its own description admits was made in a hurry. When he opens his status, Ho-jae sees the new max level skill added to his list, and the extra tab has somehow switched over to the God of Slowness again. He decides the skill is probably useful despite the awkward description, and more than anything else he is just grateful to be alive. Back in the grassy merchant area, Kirikiri instantly greets him with a shameless demand for cake. The soft grass, mild wind, and perfect sunlight hit Ho-jae so hard after that nightmare that the whole place feels absurdly peaceful. He finally gives in and falls asleep on the grass, getting the most satisfying rest he has had since entering the tutorial. He wakes to a tiny problem when he realizes Kirikiri has fallen asleep too, using his stomach as her pillow. Amused, Ho-jae starts petting her ear and discovers it is even softer than he expected. The second he touches too far inside, Kirikiri jolts awake and snaps that her ears are too sensitive for that. Her anger vanishes the moment Ho-jae mentions cake, and Kirikiri flips from sulking to eager in an instant. While she digs in, Ho-jae asks about the third-floor boss room because the whole trap felt wrong compared to everything before it. Kirikiri explains through a face smeared with chocolate that it was an illusion trap meant to trick challengers into falling first. The real danger comes after the fall, because once the illusion breaks, all the hidden traps prepared underneath trigger in sequence. That explanation makes the whole room click for Ho-jae, and it also confirms he only survived because he cleared a trap no one expected anyone to clear cleanly this early. He asks if there is any way to send insults to the person who designed the tutorial, and Kirikiri shuts that dream down immediately. Since Kirikiri is too busy stuffing herself with cake to answer anything else, Ho-jae turns to the community to look for useful new information. Most of what he finds is just normal strategy chatter, and the hard difficulty players are still grinding far behind where he is. Then a strange leaked exchange catches his eye, with several users worrying about something called the Representative Confederation. Because he got an invitation from them too, Ho-jae stops skimming and starts treating the thread like a warning sign. The comments make it clear this group is not led by top rankers, which only makes the name Representative Confederation feel stranger and more unsettling. One line sticks in his head: nobody can do anything about people who never come out of the waiting room. That detail crashes into what Ho-jae already knows about waiting room rules, and the logistics make no sense unless something abnormal is happening inside them. The satisfaction of clearing floor 3 drains out of him as the Representative Confederation starts looking less like a group and more like a hidden problem nobody outside can touch. With no clear way to investigate or intervene, Ho-jae is left staring at the problem and asking himself what he is supposed to do next. After clearing the 3rd floor, Ho-jae forces himself to stop worrying about the Representative Confederation because he cannot interfere anyway. He calls Kirikiri over, and she looks up in surprise with chocolate still on her hand from the cake he bought her. Ho-jae first lets her finish eating, then asks for a full explanation of Talaria's wings. Kirikiri tells him the details will appear once he returns to the waiting room, so Ho-jae asks a more important question about his leftover chances. When Kirikiri confirms he can save those chances for later, Ho-jae relaxes and decides to use them someday on bigger questions about the gods, or the tutorial itself. With that settled, Ho-jae asks Kirikiri to help him buy what he will need for the 4th floor. Using his save points, he upgrades to better leather armor, stocks more potions, and adds a strange set of utility items that Kirikiri insists on. Ho-jae can guess the 4th floor may involve terrain and visibility, but the mirror makes no sense to him at all. Afraid to waste a chance on such a basic question, he just looks into the mirror himself. Instead of a normal reflection, the mirror reveals a glowing blue magic seal burned onto his forehead, and Ho-jae immediately loses it. Kirikiri cheerfully explains for free that the mark is the symbol of his blink emblem. The idea that he has been walking around with a shining symbol on his face embarrasses him so badly that he is almost grateful nobody on Hell difficulty is around to see it. Still sighing over the mark, Ho-jae steps into the portal to leave for the next floor. Just before the portal swallows him, Kirikiri blurts out a bonus tip that a grand conference will be opening soon. Ho-jae has no time to ask what that means before he is teleported into the 4th floor waiting room. In the quiet room, the phrase grand conference keeps nagging at him, so he checks the community for answers and finds nothing. He starts thinking that if the conference gathers everyone into one shared space, he might finally reach the representatives directly. Even without answers, Ho-jae decides he should prepare his approach now and opens a chat room with several people he has been watching in the community. Only then does he open the full reward description for Talaria's wings, which confirms it was hastily made by the god of adventures for a challenger who caught his eye. The skill cannot grant true flight, but Ho-jae quickly realizes gliding plus blink would have made the 3rd floor sky arena almost harmless. What excites him just as much as the huge magic defense, because magic is exactly where a close-range fighter like him is weakest. Ho-jae activates the skill at once, and a gigantic pair of blue crystal wings blooms behind him in the cramped waiting room. The sheer size and beauty of the wings hits him so hard that his heart starts pounding before he even tests them. His first relief is practical. The wings float behind him instead of piercing into his body or ripping through his clothes. When he wills them to move, the crystal wings respond smoothly enough to wrap around and completely shield his body. Their sharp tips also look dangerous in close combat, but his mood drops a little when frantic flapping proves they still cannot make him fly. He changes his plan for the round and decides research can wait, while he masters Talaria's wings, blink, and the way they work together. The days fill up again with non-stop skill practice, and the same brutal resistance grinding he never skips. The story then jumps to an earlier waiting room, where Chang-suk crouches by a wall, silently trying to calm his frightened little sister while he sneaks jerky out of his inventory. He knows they can only stay in the waiting room for 24 hours, and while he might endure it, his little sister may not survive that long without food or water. Food is only part of the problem, because Chang-suk has no way to protect himself or his little sister from the older survivors who control the room by force. He remembers how 7 newcomers once attacked just 3 first-round seniors and still got beaten nearly to death without landing a scratch. That impossible gap in strength convinces him the tutorial itself must be changing people's bodies like a game, but the game refuses to explain its own rules. He badly needs answers about where they are, what happens after the waiting room ends, and how anyone can become strong enough to survive here. The scene flips to the other side of that room, where Chang-suk spits on a trembling captive and enjoys every bit of the fear around him. With stolen jerky and stolen water in hand, he reflects on how his own first round ended in failure but also gave him the idea that changed everything. Back then he was just another scared failure, but when the second round newcomers arrived looking exactly as helpless as he once was, he finally saw his chance. He starts treating the newcomers like property, barking for a girl caught reading the community to be dragged over as an example. Drunk on being king of one tiny room, he comes up with a bigger scheme to link other rooms under one name, the Representative Confederation. Much later on floor 60, Ho-jae kills time by singing alone until a cup of coffee appears and his quiet cafe routine begins. He opens the monthly normal newspaper, the tutorial's regular paper, because news from the real world has become one of his few pleasures. This month's headlines are full of nations competing over returned and even pushing more people toward held difficulty, which Ho-jae thinks is insane. He reflects on how the world returned into a national resource so valuable that countries now shape policy, military power, and even citizenship around them. China was first to push hard into held difficulty, but the result was catastrophic and wiped out wave after wave of challengers. Korea then rose unexpectedly because its return survived at a high rate, and Ho-jae himself became its top held difficulty ranker. America copied Korea's model, turned held challengers into heroic media figures, and ended up with 11 survivors that Ho-jae thinks are still chasing a near-zero chance of escape. He remembers warning Korea so strongly that the country made held difficulty illegal, and now he wonders if he pushed too hard. When he turns to internal tutorial news, the only name he really cares about is Lee Yun-hee, because he still scans every article for anything that might help her. He finds nothing useful there either, so he turns to the auction catalog with a last bit of hope that he can send her something helpful. The moment he sees a dragon egg finally going up for auction, his whole mood detonates into excitement. Ho-jae instantly pieces together a wild but serious plan: hatch the dragon, teach it magic and polymorph, and use it to break through the floor blocking him. After checking his points and confirming he can afford it, he storms into the community and threatens anyone who dares bid against him. Lee Jun-suk immediately needles him in public, dragging Park Young-ah into the mess, and Ho-jae fires back without softening at all. Then Kim Min-hyuk joins in to joke that Ho-jae has changed, and Ho-jae answers with the kind of old friend insult only someone close would dare use. Even after the bluffing settles, Ho-jae knows the real reason he is calm is simple: nobody in the tutorial can match him in points. That thought circles him back to the only place he could truly face other people directly again: another grand conference. He realizes it has been a long time since the last conference, and if one opens soon he will finally be able to see his friends and Lee Yun-hee face to face. The memory brings back older conferences too, some useful, some ugly, and Ho-jae bitterly jokes that the gods should have planned this system better from the start. After finishing the paper, he sets it aside and pulls out a handwritten letter for Lee Yun-hee, because their daily chats still are not enough. He has been sending her items and letters through the auction house for so long that their exchange now feels almost like becoming pen pals inside the tutorial. Lee Yun-hee's messages are less about cold strategy now and more like a diary, full of loneliness, memories, and the small feelings she can only safely send to him. He proofreads his own reply carefully, checking every answer and every line like they matter more than he wants to admit. But he keeps stumbling over one final line, rewriting it again and again because he wants to mention Kurikiri without saying too much. In the end he settles on the safest version, simply asking Lee Yun-hee to send his regards to Kurikiri, and the choice finally clears his mind. After barely surviving the third floor, Ho-jae spends the last days of round 2 drilling his new movement skills instead of rushing ahead. He gets used to blink for closing distance and escaping, but Talaria's wings still feels awkward, so he relies on glide to stay airborne. His resistance skills have stalled, so with only a little time left, he decides to scout the 4th floor instead of trying to clear it. A flash of light drops him into floor 4, and his first impression is simple but ominous: the same stone corridor, only much wider and swallowed by darkness overhead. Because Kurikiri warned him ahead of time, Ho-jae starts gearing up for a floor that looks built for real combat, not just traps. He swaps into a full black leather set with boots, gloves, and belt, spending extra points for the matching look because he wants the armor and the confidence. He also adds a throwing dagger to his belt, guessing the 4th floor will force him to hit something from outside normal sword range. Then a harsh war cry rolls down the corridor, and Ho-Jae finally hears his first 4th floor opponent coming. When the enemy appears, Ho-Jae's plan to fight another small goblin dies instantly. This hell difficulty goblin is nothing like the weak versions from easier modes, and Ho-Jae realizes his short gladius suddenly feels useless. He talks himself into one workable plan: use the shield to survive the axe, then stab through any opening Blink can create. But the moment Ho-Jae inches forward, the goblin suddenly charges and forces the fight to start on his terms. Ho-Jae fires back with battle focus and a quick stab at the goblin's neck, trying to steal the initiative before the axe lands. The goblin swats at him first, and Ho-Jae escapes backward with Blink before that opening exchange can crush him. Even Blink does not shake the goblin, who keeps pressing forward like he has already measured Ho-Jae's limits. Ho-Jae barely parries the first real axe swing, and the impact tears pain up his arm even though the shield holds. He counterstabs fast, but the blade sinks into the goblin's shoulder and gets stuck in thick muscle instead of ending the fight. The goblin answers with a brutal punch through the opening, smashing Ho-Jae back hard enough that he abandons the stuck sword and escapes again. The goblin keeps fighting with a sword lodged in his shoulder, proving he is treating Ho-Jae like a lesson, not a threat. When Ho-Jae prepares for the same overhead strike again, the goblin changes rhythm and slams him with a sudden shoulder tackle from below. Ho-Jae spits blood, stunned by how badly the difference in actual combat skill has exposed him. Then the goblin openly taunts him with a hand gesture, and Ho-Jae realizes the monster has been playing teacher the whole time. Ho-Jae knows he can still escape to the waiting room, heal up, and come back stronger, but his pride refuses to retreat now. The goblin finally takes him seriously enough to adjust his own stance, and Ho-Jae sees one reckless opening. Instead of blinking in front of him, Ho-Jae teleports past the goblin and turns his whole body into a desperate tackle. The hit lands like a cannon shot, and both of them crash down so hard that Ho-Jae blacks out on impact. He wakes in darkness and dizziness, barely able to understand where he is or make his body move. As his sight clears, he sees the goblin down too, and the fight becomes a brutal race to see who can stand first. Ho-Jae uses battle focus to inspect his ruined body and realizes almost nothing works, especially his left arm. Instead of panicking, he leans on the pain and stun resistance he has trained so hard to build and forces himself upright. Once he gets his balance back, he glares at the still prone goblin and knows the fight has finally flipped. It still takes repeated stabbing through thick skin and muscle, but Ho-Jae finally kills the goblin in a bloody, ugly finish. Afterward he vomits over the corpse and is unsettled less by the killing itself than by how little emotion he feels anymore. When the body fades away, it leaves behind a stone drop instead of a corpse, reminding Ho-Jae this tutorial still runs on game-like rules. The item window names it Goblin Gractus's birthstone, and Ho-Jae is left staring at the absurd reveal that this giant armored brute was somehow just a goblin. By the next day, Ho-Jae has turned that nightmare matchup into training, beating the goblin instructor often enough that the lesson finally starts sticking. He realizes the first loss was never about raw stats so much as inexperience, because his body had already been stronger than the goblin's. So instead of pushing deeper into floor 4, he keeps challenging the goblin again and again to steal real combat basics from him. Watching the goblin's efficient movements even brings old judo and kendo memories back, and Ho-Jae starts craving a real teacher. That grinding finally pays off when his shield and sword skills level up, and even cut gets folded into proper swordsmanship. By now he can even beat the goblin with just a sword, which only makes him think harder about how to challenge himself next. He returns to the 4th floor waiting room feeling that round 2 was brutally productive, with his climb finally accelerating after floor 1. For once, he gives himself a tiny reward and buys potato chips and cola, treating the end of the round like a short, guarded break. He knows spoiling himself too much could make him lazy, but tonight he tells himself he has earned a little rest. Then round 3 begins, and Ho-Jae opens the Hell difficulty forum expecting at least one new arrival. Instead he finds Hell difficulty empty this time, which feels strange but also spares newcomers from pointless deaths. So he keeps browsing the wider community, hoping the new people from easier floors can tell everyone what happened in the outside world. At first the usual confusion pours in from terrified beginners who do not understand the tutorial, or where they are. Veteran players answer them quickly, because everyone now knows panic over the unknown is more dangerous than the first floor itself. Then a few newcomer comments mention portals, monsters, and being injured before entering, and the whole mood of the chat turns wrong at once. Kim Min-hyuk asks the obvious question from floor 3, and the newcomers answer with a full apocalypse. They reveal that portals opened around the world, monsters poured out days later, and whole countries started collapsing under attacks that normal small arms could barely stop. The news gets worse fast. Hidden portals keep spawning enemies, casualties have already exploded past wartime levels, and public order is breaking apart everywhere. Korea is still standing, but even there the front has broken, provinces have been devastated, and martial law was not enough to stop the damage. The chat erupts into desperate questions about loved ones, and Ho-jae joins them immediately by asking about Suwon. He gets one small relief when he hears Suwon has no portal yet, but there is still no news about his own family or friends. 18 hours pass with Ho-jae doing nothing but watching the community, and the stillness starts to feel deeply wrong to him. He tries to reassure himself that the army and Suwon might have protected the few people he still cares about, even if his family relationships were never good. Then one message snaps him out of it. If the tutorial can make people strong enough, maybe they can go back and help. Ho-jae connects the pieces and starts to believe this so-called tutorial may really be training them to fight the monsters outside. He is not alone in that thought, and the high rankers quickly agree to share information and clear the tutorial together as fast as possible. With the world collapsing outside and everyone finally aligned on one goal, the tutorial speed run begins. Round 3 starts with Ho-jae snapping awake on his own, already so used to the tutorial that he only bothers sleeping 2 hours for his sanity. Because the waiting room restores his body anyway, Ho-jae has turned those extra hours into work, mapping floors 1 through 3 for the next hell difficulty players. He also feeds the community brutal training advice, including his favorite method of digging into his own arm to raise resistance faster. A floor 5 survivor named Kim Sang-shik fires back that Ho-jae's method sounds completely insane. Even when people reject his crazier ideas, the shared research keeps spreading, and lower floor players finally start moving with real confidence. By the time round 3 fully opens, Ho-jae is already standing on the portal, ready to turn that planning into a speed run. The instant he arrives on floor 4, Ho-jae breaks into a full sprint and lets the wind spirit's blessing hurl him forward even faster. That reckless speed pays off when the goblin instructor appears almost immediately, giving Ho-jae one last familiar fight. Ho-jae cuts his speed with a blink right into melee range, forcing the instructor into an axe swing before the goblin can really adjust. Because the axe lands too close to build force, Ho-jae absorbs the hit cleanly and drives his sword into the instructor's right shoulder in the same motion. When the instructor tries to maul him with brute force, Ho-jae hops back and snaps a low kick straight into the goblin's knee. The kick mangles the joint so badly the kneecap tears through skin, and the instructor's whole stance collapses on the spot. Ho-jae doesn't drag it out, smashing the goblin down, mounting him, and twisting his neck once the instructor is dazed senseless. As the body fades without dropping either the axe or a birthstone, Ho-jae just wipes the goblin's hair oil onto his armor and keeps moving. The next obstacle is worse than a simple mob pack. 5 goblins dug into a roof trench with spears, bows, and one mysterious staff user in the rear. Rather than charge into their setup, Ho-jae decides this is the perfect time to fight unfair. He blinks straight upward 3 times, climbs high into the corridor air, and braces himself at a height that would have scared him before the 3rd floor boss room. Then Talaria's wings unfurl behind him, turning the drop into a smooth, silent glide. The god of adventures finally reacts again, and Ho-jae dryly guesses the god had been hiding from embarrassment over those hastily made wings. Staying close to the ceiling and out of sight, he glides over the wooden roof while the goblins below stay tense and watch only the corridor ahead. As he carefully tracks their positions from above, the system rewards that sneaking with a brand new sneak skill. He slips all the way past the squad, then circles down behind the trench instead of risking a pincer later. The moment his feet touch down, Ho-jae folds the wings, drops into the trench, and cuts the staff goblin's throat before it can even turn fully around. That clean opening throws the other 4 into chaos as the archers abandon their bows and the spearmen struggle to turn around in the cramped trench. Ho-jae blinks right into the middle of them and summons Talaria's wings again, this time as weapons instead of mobility. The wingtips slam into both archers and pin them bleeding against the trench walls, instantly cutting the squad in half. With the wings too bulky to keep open, Ho-jae dismisses them and rushes the spearmen while flicking a throwing knife ahead to break their timing. One spearman knocks the thrown dagger aside, but that tiny delay lets Ho-jae ride the other spear along his shield and force his way inside their reach. He steps on the attacking goblin's foot, drives his sword into its neck under battle focus, and drops it before the spear can save him. The last spearman gives up on the weapon and swings barehanded, but Ho-jae sees the punch coming in slow motion and cracks him back harder. A kick to the chest drops the goblin, and Ho-jae mounts and finishes it with the fallen dagger before cleaning up the 2 archers afterward. Once the trench is finally clear, Ho-jae comes away impressed all over again by how absurdly strong God-gifted skills really are. Far away in another waiting room, Chan-suk closes the community with a satisfied grin because the representatives are taking over floor 1 faster than he expected. When someone asks what has him so pleased, Chan-suk snaps that it has nothing to do with them, making the power gap in the room obvious. To Chan-suk, the new rounds are perfect because frightened newcomers are adapting straight into his system instead of resisting it. A scream from the corner barely even distracts him because his men are torturing slaves as a warning to anyone thinking of progressing without permission. He is already planning past this round, convinced he can hold the boss room again, wait out the lonely downtime, and come back to an even tighter grip on floor 1. His real kingdom runs on fear and food, with weak beginners and broken cowards squeeze for water and jerky until every floor 1 room belongs to the representatives. Even while daydreaming about that kingdom, Chan-suk keeps one eye on the rankers' direct messages, expecting at least a few stubborn rebels to survive long enough to become a problem. Back on floor 4, Ho-jae wipes blood from his knife and finally admits his shield and gear are getting battered enough to replace after this floor. He keeps hunting anyway, cutting through goblin positions that now use walls, trenches, hooks, crossbows, and shamans without slowing him down much. With Talaria's wings protecting him in the air and his own combat instincts catching up fast, Ho-jae realizes the floor's ranged pressure barely matters anymore. The proof appears in a stack of skill gains, especially battle focus, which starts growing again now that he is using it in more varied fights. Then another goblin roar echoes ahead, and this one feels different enough to stop the easy rhythm cold. The new goblin looks like a harsher version of the instructor, slightly shorter, completely unarmed, and built like he expects his fists to be enough. Ho-jae steps in with a flicker of excitement for the one-on-one, but the goblin's sudden charge warns him this will not be a normal brawl. Without warning, the goblin's fist turns red and a crushing blow slams into Ho-jae's chest hard enough to send him rolling backward. Ho-jae barely gets up before Goros is on him again, and this time battle focus lets him see the truth. The red fist fires forward like a bullet without normal punching motion. There is no time to dodge, so Ho-jae throws up his shield and still gets blasted backward all over again. Ho-jae kills his momentum with blink, lands right back in front of the goblin, and slaps him across the face before Goros can reset. He tries to bait the goblin with a high kick and spring a wing trap from his exposed back, but Goros leaps away from the crystal blades in time. That dodge unsettles Ho-jae almost as much as the red fists, because it feels like this goblin already knows every trick he likes to use. Ho-jae spits out blood, realizes one tooth is broken, and grimly admits he has no right to whine about unfair skills when he abuses blink and wings himself. Instead of meeting that broken range head-on, Ho-jae starts throwing weapons to force tiny openings before he steps inside. The sword doesn't land, but the follow-up dagger from even closer finally makes Goros hesitate just enough for Ho-jae to take control of the exchange. Ho-jae kicks the goblin's armored stomach to shove him off balance, using the same low-center lesson the instructor taught him the hard way. Then he blinks a tiny step and smashes a sideways kick into the goblin's thigh before Goros can settle on one leg. As soon as the goblin wobbles, Ho-jae rams in behind his shield and lands a clean punch to the face. Goros still fires one last red fist from that awful position, and both of them get smashed apart by the simultaneous exchange. Ho-jae tumbles away dizzy, and when he finally lifts his head he sees Goros is down too and cannot get back up. Ho-jae hauls himself up and loudly credits his pain and stunned resistance for being the one still standing. To make sure the fight stays over, he kicks Goros unconscious and finishes him with the dropped dagger. This time the reward finally drops, and the birthstone reveals the dead goblin was Goros, the Red Eye tribe's finicky instructor. The victory leaves Ho-jae half impressed and half annoyed, because this is the first enemy skill user he has beaten and the goblins are getting ridiculous. Then the level up hits, boosting his stats, his wind spirit blessing, his sneak, and even the resistance that just saved him. At the healing fountain before the boss room, Ho-jae finally slows down and admits rushing the 4th floor is starting to look reckless. He thinks back to the last instructor and realizes the 2 instructors guarding this floor were clearly stronger than the rest of the goblins. That close fight convinces him the boss room is too much right now, even if he could probably handle the same instructor more easily on a rematch. So he resets his mindset and chooses the method that kept saving him before: stay on this floor, train hard, and leave only when his growth really stalls. He reminds himself his progress is already fast for held difficulty, so impatience is just fear talking. Once he admits the news from outside has been making him anxious, he turns that panic into motivation and decides to clear this floor without leaning on his god skills. 3 days later, in the waiting room, Ho-jae checks the mirror and grins because the ugly blue blink circle on his forehead has almost faded away. He notes the mark only flares bright again when he uses blink, which means he can finally stop worrying about looking ridiculous all the time. Then he drinks from the healing fountain, opens his status, and sees just how much the last stretch of grinding has pushed his level, resistances, and combat skills upward. Seeing even Talaria's wings and his other god-given tools becoming smoother in his hands, Ho-jae decides this time he is ready to face the boss room for real. He also cuts himself off before overfarming the floor, worried that if it stays too safe and easy, he will start losing the edge that keeps him alive. Past the fog and the stone doors, the boss room drops him onto a mountain under a stunning night sky, and the view hits him so hard he just stares. A system message finally snaps him out of it and names the objective: defeat the Goblin King. With no clue where the king is, Ho-jae picks the uphill path for one simple reason: on held difficulty, the harder route is usually the right one. 15 minutes later, that instinct pays off when a torchlit fort appears on the summit. Hidden in the trees, he scouts the fort with binoculars and counts about 20 goblins on the 5-meter walls, then realizes how absurd this place would be without Blink and Talaria's wings. Because his mobility gives him an escape route and control of the walls, he decides this first fort is manageable and moves in. He uses Blink to stick under the wall, slips to the least guarded section, and blinks up again without being seen. Excited by how clean it feels, he creeps behind a guard and tries a movie-style silent kill with his sword. It fails immediately because the dying goblin thrashes and moans loud enough for the other guards to notice. Once the shrieks start echoing across the mountain, Ho-jae gives up on stealth, counts the first kill as a bonus, and opens his wings for a straight fight. By sunrise, the fort is his, and the view from the mountain top is so beautiful that for a moment, he almost fantasizes about staying here forever. The tutorial even rewards the mood with a lucky bonus, and Ho-jae accepts it like the moment has earned it. Looking out from the captured fort, he realizes this boss room is far bigger than a single stronghold because a full goblin city spreads across the plain below. The sight unsettles him because this is not some ragged tribe anymore but a developed civilization with roads, stone buildings, and enough people to fill a real city. He rules out fighting on the open plain first, since a city with this many goblins could drown him in soldiers, arrows, and magic before he ever reached the king. Then he sees riders racing out from the city, and that gives him a better idea. Hold the forts, bait reinforcements, and grind the army down before ever touching the city. He builds the plan step by step, bleed their soldiers at the forts, slip away if needed, infiltrate the weakened city later, and only then go for the inner castle. As the first reinforcements climb the mountain, Ho-jae feeds more wood to the signal fire and gets ready to greet them. Several days into the campaign, Ho-jae studies a dying goblin commander and realizes the enemy has been organized enough to order retreats and carry warnings back to the city. He respects that leader's nerve for staying behind to buy time, even while acknowledging the gap between them is too wide now. Then Ho-jae leaps from the fortress with Talaria's wings and chases the fleeing survivors through the night sky because none of them can possibly outrun him. Flying under the stars thrills him so much that for a moment he almost forgets the battle and just enjoys the impossible freedom of having real wings. By this point his fortress-hopping guerrilla war has worked exactly as planned, because every time the goblins send larger forces to retake a fort, he slips to another one before they can corner him. When the goblins finally commit 200 soldiers to each fortress, they walk straight into his trap and one of those armies gets wiped out to the last man. He can pull this off because the week of non-stop fighting has raised his level again and sharpened both his skills and his confidence in mass combat. Watching the goblins scrape together worse gear and barely trained troops, Ho-jae realizes his harassment campaign is draining the city dry. He even jokes to himself that he feels like a great strategist, right before one god sulks that his methods are unfair and another delights in the chaos. With the outer armies broken down, Ho-jae decides the next stage is a direct raid on the city itself. Getting inside is easy for him, because he simply flies over the walls and lands on a rooftop to scout from within. From that rooftop he starts refining all the ugly options he prepared before, from fires to hit-and-run attacks, because chaos would make the king easier to reach. But when he keeps watching instead of moving, he notices something that wrecks his plan. Ordinary goblins living ordinary lives. A laughing goblin child clinging to its mother hits him hardest, because this city suddenly stops looking like a dungeon map and starts looking like home to someone. Then he sees full restaurants, happy couples, and all the tiny signs of daily life, and the goblins stop feeling like monsters to him at all. That realization twists the knife, because if these lives are real, then from their side of the story he is the monster who invaded their world. He starts replaying the goblins he killed, and for the first time their fear, hatred, pain, and desperation all feel horribly human. By the end of that spiral, Ho-jae feels less like a hero clearing a floor and more like the villain in someone else's tale. Days later, after sitting on that rooftop far too long, he watches the streets empty for the night, and knows he cannot stay frozen forever. He tries to harden himself by saying these goblins might just reset like an illusion anyway, but even that excuse no longer feels solid. So he chooses the least ugly option left to him, skip terrorizing the city, go straight for the Goblin King, and leave this place as fast as he can. He slips into the inner castle and finds it thinly guarded, which only deepens his suspicion that the king is hiding rather than commanding openly. From above, he spots one especially suspicious central building with a different design and crudely boarded windows, and he becomes sure that is the place. Trusting that instinct, Ho-jae dives toward one of the boarded windows with Talaria's wings wrapped around him like a projectile. Ho-jae smashes through the boarded window of the strange central building and lands in the room he suspected all along was the Goblin King's hideout. 4 goblins stare back in shock, 2 heavy-looking warriors, 1 shaman, and an old king in red silk standing safely behind them. On another day he would have tested their strength first, but this time Ho-jae is too drained to play it safe and decides to end the boss room in one strike. He throws Talaria's wings wide, blinks straight to the king, and uses the impact to blast the 3 bodyguards out of his path. The room cracks with splintered wood, and none of the king's guards get back up after that sure kill combo. The old king does not beg, flee, or attack. He steps forward calmly and tries to speak to Ho-jae in goblin language instead. Unable to understand a word but unsettled by the king's steady gaze, Ho-jae decides the cleanest answer is a swift death. Ho-jae grabs the king by the shoulder and drives his sword straight through the old goblin's heart. The Goblin King falls like a dry leaf, but in his last second his eyes slide away from Ho-jae towards something hidden in the room. Following that final look, Ho-jae discovers several richly dressed goblin children hiding under a decorated table near the dying king. One child jolts when his eyes meet Ho-jae's, bumps the table, and breaks the room's dead silence with a small noise. Then the biggest child crawls out on his own, certain he is next, even though Ho-jae never planned to kill the children. The child starts screaming through tears and bloodshot eyes, and even without the words Ho-Jae can feel that every line is a curse. Before Ho-Jae can answer or even process the child's rage, clear windows flood the room and announce the 4th floor clear and his rewards. The gods even vote to give him a special skill, and Ho-Jae accepts without hesitation. The new skill, Knowledge of the Time Before Babel, takes effect at once, and the goblin child's roar suddenly becomes language Ho-Jae can understand. Now the child spits the meaning right into him. The gods will punish Ho-Jae, and he is a monster. A portal opens a few steps away, but Ho-Jae cannot move because all he wants in that moment is to deny what the child is saying. He wants to explain that he was dragged into this tutorial too, that the killing was forced on him, but the excuses die in his throat. As the child praises his dead father and condemns the slaughter, Ho-Jae's old certainty starts to crack because the grief in front of him no longer feels fake. Right as that doubt deepens, a system message says the god of adventure is blinding his eyes and the god of slowness is furious. His vision goes black, then returns to the peaceful green field outside the boss room as if the gods themselves yanked him out of that scene. Ho-Jae calls out to Kurikiri, but when he steps closer with blood and flesh still on him, she instinctively backs away. She keeps apologizing because she thinks he is angry, while Ho-Jae insists she is not the problem and quietly tries to swallow the shock. What really gnaws at him is the god's interference, so he turns to Kurikiri and cashes in his saved questions for answers about them. Kurikiri says the gods are watching Ho-Jae because he might qualify to become an apostle, a rare role earned only by meeting unknown conditions. She adds that Ho-Jae is unusual enough that some decision will have to be made about him eventually. When she finally explains the god of slowness, Kurikiri makes it clear that the title is not about moving slowly but about following the endless flow of time itself. That answer helps Ho-Jae make sense of why a god of slowness could still rule over Blink, but when he asks about the god of adventure, Kurikiri shuts him down because his information allowance is gone. Since answers are over, Ho-Jae switches to practical business and asks Kurikiri to help him change his loadout for the next floor. First he buys Punisher's handgun, a strange weapon that does not fire bullets so much as trigger a powerful nearby explosion, and Kurikiri says he will need it on the 5th floor. Next he picks a Blessed Gladius, a short sword much like the one he already trusts, except its godly blessing keeps the grip from slipping unless he wants it to. He also buys a heavy backsword meant for a savage warg rider, figuring its reach and cutting power will pair well with his superior speed and blink. By the time he looks at shields, his points are almost gone, and Ho-Jae realizes a burst of practical shopping has emptied his wallet. He gives up on replacing the shield for now, thanks Kurikiri for the help, and heads for the portal to keep moving. Kurikiri unexpectedly sends him off with real encouragement, then immediately ruins the solemn mood by reminding him to buy her cake next time. That familiar little demand finally makes Ho-Jae smile, and he waves back, promising himself he will bring her cake when they meet again. In the 5th floor waiting room, Ho-Jae chats with Kim Min-hyuk about Kurikiri's shopping advice, and Kim tells him to buy everything even if it drains all his points. Kim admits the 5th floor boss room is rough enough that Ho-Jae will need those items, and Ho-Jae realizes he has already climbed all the way to floor 5. The oversized room only makes the silence worse, and Ho-Jae drifts back to the first waiting room, trying and failing to remember the 4 people who started with him. Before moving on, Ho-Jae forces himself to face the thought he kept dodging on the 4th floor. The goblins did not act like mindless monsters. He remembers that the goblins had society, families, emotions, and hierarchy, and that ugly faces were the only obvious difference from humans. That thought hits hard, because if the goblins were real thinking beings, then what he did on the 4th floor was not hunting but murder. He retraces the fights and admits the goblins were usually defending their own ground while he was the one who kept pushing the war forward. Even after admitting that, Ho-Jae gives himself the brutal answer he was avoiding. If another goblin blocked the path he needed, he would kill again and keep going. He reminds himself why people are dying outside the tutorial, his family is still out there, and the only way back is to clear all 100 floors. So he frames the tutorial like a lethal match with everything on the line, where hesitation could get him killed and mercy could slow his growth. He hates how heartless that logic sounds, and he makes himself one promise: he will keep questioning it instead of burying it. By the end of that long pause, Ho-Jae settles on a fragile balance. He will keep moving, keep thinking about what he has done, but refuse to drown in it. With his thoughts parked for now, he switches back into survival mode and opens his status window. The screen confirms how much the 4th floor changed him, with Ho-Jae now at level 10 and his combat stats and skills jumping sharply. He realizes 2 boss room levels in 1 floor is absurd progress, and he quietly credits that spike to the insane 4th floor fight. One detail bothers him, though. The status only says the god of slowness is satisfied now, with no sign of the earlier fury he saw in the boss room. He shrugs off the mystery and opens the community instead, hoping to catch useful information. A private message from Kim Min-hyuk pops up immediately, and Kim is stunned to see Ho-Jae has already reached the 5th floor. Kim says most challengers cannot even break the 2nd floor on hell or the 3rd on hard, but Ho-Jae brushes it off as luck. Privately, he knows it was more than luck, because God-given points and 2 authority skills are the real reason he survived this far. Since no one in the community is openly talking about authority skills, Ho-jae keeps his own mouth shut too. That caution suddenly matters when Kim drops a worse problem. He suspects one of the rankers is a mole. Ho-jae fires back in disbelief, but Kim admits he does not know who it is yet and is still digging for proof. For now, Kim gives him one instruction: do not share any more information about the Day of Great Harmony. Ho-jae instantly understands the damage, because if a ranker really flips sides, then everything the managers revealed about that event has probably already leaked. After ending the call, he curses under his breath and wonders why any ranker would side with the representative union at all. Then his thoughts turn cold. After what he settled earlier, he no longer cares whether an enemy blocking his path is a monster or a human. 2 days later on the 5th floor, that hard focus shows in battle as Ho-jae smashes a charging lizardman's mouth with his shield and drives a sword into its neck. A second trident comes in right after, and Ho-jae catches it barehanded while tracking another attacker behind him. He answers with Talaria's wings, flaring broad energy from his back and skewering the rear lizardman into the wall. When one furious lizardman turns on him, Ho-jae draws the heavy single-edged backsword he bought and braces himself to practice with it for real. He activates battle focus, studies the incoming thrust, and uses the bigger blade to parry instead of charging in recklessly. The moment the defense opens, Ho-jae blinks to the lizardman's chest, drops the awkward backsword, and kills it with the short sword he trusts more. After the kill, he admits the truth to himself: the new weapon still feels clumsy, and he has no teacher except trial and error. By round 3, day 26 at 1820, Ho-jae has learned the 5th floor's enemies well: huge trident-wielding lizardmen that rush headlong and fight far more aggressively than goblins. Even so, he does not feel cornered, because the growth he stole from the 4th floor was so explosive that this floor already feels manageable. He even suspects he cleared the 4th floor boss room by some unintended route again, because without those authority skills it should have been impossible. Since the 5th floor is not pushing him as hard, Ho-jae turns it into a training ground and decides to stay only long enough to get comfortable with the backsword before moving to floor 6. For that day, he decides to stop the conquest, head back to the waiting room, eat, and watch the community because the Day of Great Harmony is almost here. At midnight on round 3, day 27, the system finally interrupts everything and announces that the Day of Great Harmony has begun. The event UI adds the hard rule right away: the gathering will last 24 hours, and if Ho-jae does not enter on his own, he will be forcibly summoned in 5 hours. Back in the waiting room, Ho-jae narrows his resistance training down to one practical target: burn resistance, because cold, heat, paralysis, and fainting are either too dangerous or too hard to grind alone. He keeps feeding the training with heat stones and small fires until burn resistance becomes one of his strongest resistances, then finally stops when the growth starts crawling. Lately he has been practicing God-given powers instead, but when he wants to kill time and read messages at the same time, resistance grinding still works best. The community is exploding with chatter after someone leaks news about the Day of Great Harmony, and Ho-jae immediately reads the whole mess as equal parts information sharing and attention seeking. He notes that the representative federation stays completely silent, so the current uproar is coming from everyone around them instead of the group at the center of the problem. Ho-jae's suspects rankers are showing off because manager-given tutorial secrets have become social currency, and support factions are already forming around strong challengers. Even so, the mood on the community turns festive because exhausted challengers are desperate for one safe day to rest, meet allies again, and finally stand somewhere peaceful. He does not join the celebration, but reading everyone else's excitement still lifts his mood while he keeps training in silence. At midnight on round 3, day 27, the system finally announces that the Day of Great Harmony has begun, and gives everyone 5 hours before forced summoning. Ho-jae guesses the 5-hour grace period exists so people stuck in dangerous stages have time to survive or finish before being dragged out. He also notices the round timer freezes at day 27, midnight, which means the event is not stealing combat time from anyone's progression. Then a new portal pops up by his feet and follows him around like a pet, which catches him off guard enough to amuse him. When he accepts the invitation, the familiar floating transfer sensation carries him out of the waiting room. He opens his eyes in a familiar green field and realizes the event is taking place in Kurikiri's merchant plane, now repurposed as neutral ground. The system adds 2 crucial rules at once: nobody here can attack another person, and any injuries will heal automatically. Ho-jae looks for Kurikiri as if she might be hosting the event, but when he cannot find her anywhere, he feels an unexpected little letdown. Instead, he is surrounded by a rare sight in the tutorial: people laughing, crying, and talking in relief because for one moment they can just be human again. The open field, the busy air, and the sound of people together hit Ho-jae hard enough to remind him how long it has been since he stood in a place like this. That reflective moment gets broken when Kim Min-hyuk eagerly grabs his hand and blurts out that he used to be a fan of Ho-jae's old pro-gamer career. Kim jokes that if Ho-jae had revealed that earlier, people might not have dismissed him as a delusional liar on the community. Ho-jae cuts straight to the real issue and asks where the others are, meaning the rankers and the Federation's victims. Kim explains that the rankers are checking names and faces across the field, trying to identify any victims if they enter the event space. So far they have found nobody from either side, and Kim guesses the missing people are waiting until the very end of the 5-hour limit before being forced in. When Ho-jae wonders how the Federation could control scattered victims so tightly, Kim points out the ugly answer. On round 3, anyone who survives without clearing will still run into them on the second floor. That means the victims are not really free at all, so the safest move is just surviving until the round ends instead of risking contact with the Federation. Before the conversation can go further, several rankers gather around them and report the same result. Still no victims, still no Federation members. The group deliberately avoids the Federation topic after that, drifting into small talk about gaming and tutorial gossip, while Ho-jae keeps his distance and stays suspicious. Since the field is supposed to block all attacks, Ho-jae decides to test the rule himself instead of trusting the system at face value. He drives the blade toward his own palm with enough force to pierce it, but the knife skids away across an invisible layer instead. When he saws more slowly, the barrier gives just enough for a tiny cut to form, and then the wound heals almost immediately. From that, Ho-jae concludes the field is doing two jobs at once, softening harmful contact and instantly repairing damage that still gets through. He tests blunt force next by smashing his own palm, and even a hard hit barely produces pain, only the feeling of impact. That muted impact makes him realize pure force still transfers enough to push and move a body, even if the pain and injury are mostly suppressed. That leads him to wonder whether grapples and joint attacks might still function, so he starts a final test on his own body. He slowly chokes himself until his breathing starts to fail, but the instant it becomes truly dangerous, an unseen force slaps his hand away and his body recovers at once. Frustrated, Ho-jae accepts that the field will allow minor pressure but forcibly interrupt anything that crosses into real harm or death. Kim Min-hyuk walks back over and tries to pull him into another talk, only for Ho-jae to blank on his name and bluntly ask who he is again. Kim has to repeat his name in visible disbelief, and the awkward beat lands because Ho-jae actually does respect him. He just cannot remember a face that ordinary. Once they settle down, Kim admits they should have made the Federation problem public earlier instead of assuming the Day of Great Harmony would solve it cleanly. Kim says the Federation has disguised its abuse as a fight over pride and social order, making the conflict look like a faction dispute instead of systematic intimidation. He adds that they are hiding behind talk of a future network for lower-floor waiting rooms, using reform language as cover while they tighten control right now. What worries Kim most is scale. After digging around, he now believes more than 10 normal difficulty challengers on the third floor are already tied to the Federation. And Kim believes that number will only grow, because the Federation is planning to expand its organization at least up to the 10th floor. He even singles out Lee Chang-suk as someone persuasive enough to keep pulling more people into the group. With the mess spiraling wider than expected, Kim finally asks the blunt question he has been building toward: just how strong is Ho-jae really? Ho-jae thinks back over everyone's gear, movement, and atmosphere in the field and quietly judges that he has already seen enough to understand the rough standard of the so-called rankers. So when Kim asks him to compare himself to normal difficulty rankers or hard-mode third-floor challengers, Ho-jae answers without hesitation: he is absurdly strong. As Lee Ho-jae looks over the Day of Great Harmony crowd, the gap between difficulty groups is obvious at a glance. The easy group looks almost comfortable, because their traps are mild enough that effort alone can keep them alive and earning points. The normal group is split in two. One side just survives on jerky and water, while the rankers push information and progress through the tutorial. The hard challengers feel different from everyone else, because almost all of them are still trapped around the first and second floors. Even when they meet again here, the hard group only trades awkward short greetings before the silence settles back in. The most frustrated are the few hard challengers stuck on the third floor, because nobody can figure out how to clear the heat-heavy stage. Listening to them complain, Ho-jae gets irritated because the answer looks simple to him: build resistance before the floor kills you. The challengers protest that raising resistance means risking death, and they still do not even understand how burn resistance is supposed to work there. Ho-jae finally cuts in and tells them to use a heat stone and a small fire to train burn resistance directly. Their confused faces make it clear words are useless, so Ho-jae decides to show them with his own hands. He wraps a heat stone in cloth, rubs it fast, and calmly makes the fabric catch fire in front of everyone. Ho-jae drops the burning cloth onto the grass, feeds it dry blades, and bluntly tells them this is all it takes to make a training fire. Instead of the method, the crowd fixates on the fact that Ho-jae just held burning cloth without panicking. Ho-jae shrugs off the fuss and reminds them this safe zone heals minor damage anyway, so they can use that to grind resistance safely. Kim Min-hyuk casually asks what Ho-jae's resistance levels are, and Ho-jae answers with heat and cold at 4 and burn at 7. That number stuns the others so badly that they stop treating Ho-jae like a normal person at all. Ho-jae keeps one thought to himself: if burn resistance shocks them this much, they definitely cannot handle hearing his pain resistance level. Then a new commotion rolls in from across the field, and the rankers' faces immediately darken. The representative federation arrives, and the whole gathering slips into a nasty standoff that drags on for half an hour. Lee Chang-suk keeps pressing Kim Min-hyuk to show proof, and Min-hyuk can only grit his teeth because exposing informants would get them punished later. Watching him hold back, Ho-jae thinks again that Kim Min-hyuk is a decent guy, but far too soft for people like this. As the mood grows violent, most bystanders quietly back away, leaving only thrill-seekers close enough to watch. More Federation people join in, a few rankers step out to answer them, and the balance of numbers swings hard to the Federation side. Ho-jae counts the sides coldly and sees the real problem. His side is outnumbered, mixed loyalties are possible, and only a few people would actually fight seriously. Behind the Federation's front line, Ho-jae notices something worse. They are using their own bodies to hide a group of terrified people. The people behind them are not just nervous, they are badly scared, and that tells Ho-jae the abuse is more serious than he expected. Among them, Ho-jae locks eyes with a schoolgirl in a torn uniform who clearly has no gear and no intention of staying passive. Instead of looking desperate, the girl gives Ho-jae a slow, deliberate nod like she is signaling that something is about to happen. Ho-jae has no idea what she is planning, and that uncertainty alone makes the whole scene feel dangerous. Then the girl suddenly moves, and Ho-jae snaps into battle focus as she bursts straight toward him. In that slowed instant, Ho-jae sees a man behind her reaching to grab her shoulder with some kind of skill already activating on his hand. The girl's point of view makes her gamble clear. She believes Lee Ho-jae is the only strong person here who might actually help. She notices how differently Ho-jae carries himself, already hiding one sword behind his body and quietly watching the field instead of wasting breath on the argument. For her, this is the last chance before the next round begins, so she decides to force Ho-jae to act even without a real plan. A memory of her dead sister pushes her on, because one of the last things she heard was that Lee Ho-jae, the lone survivor of hell difficulty, kept helping people anyway. As she runs, her eyes stay locked on Ho-jae alone, convinced he is the only one who can smash through the pigs in front of her. Then Ho-jae vanishes from in front of her so fast it looks impossible. When she turns, Ho-jae is already behind her, looking annoyed and ready to intervene. From Ho-jae's side, the whole thing feels like another cursed moment where helping people drags him into a bigger mess whether he wants it or not. He still moves, because standing back is no longer an option once he sees the girl and the man reaching for her. Using Blink, Ho-jae jumps behind the girl and drives a fist into the attacker's stomach hard enough to launch him away. The hit instantly exposes the terrified victims behind the Federation, and Ho-jae can finally see just how bad their faces look. Lee Chang-suk explodes first, cursing and acting like Ho-jae attacked for no reason at all. The rest of the Federation piles on with the same routine, yelling that Ho-jae has gone crazy and pretending this was all unprovoked. Ho-jae answers with open contempt and tells them to stop whining and come at him if they dare. Unlike Kim Min-hyuk, Ho-jae never meant to talk this out, because people like this would deny everything no matter what proof appeared. Since the day of great harmony could end before he sees them again, Ho-jae decides the whole problem has to be settled right here. Talaria's wings burst from Ho-jae's back in a huge blue spread, cutting the schoolgirl off from the Federation and making the pigs finally panic. Ho-jae mocks their fear, says he only wants to clear up the misunderstanding, and makes it obvious that his version is going to hurt. Lee Chang-suk scrambles to buy time with smooth excuses, but Ho-jae ignores every word. A few Federation members start edging back, but Ho-jae has already memorized their faces and has no intention of letting them slip away. With 18 hours still left in the event, Ho-jae looks at the trapped pigs and coolly decides he has plenty of time to experiment on them. When the Federation side yells for everyone to stop him, Ho-jae just drops Talaria's wings and calmly invites them to try. The first attacker throws an obvious punch, and Ho-jae catches the fist with one hand and bends the elbow the wrong way with the other. The system instantly forces Ho-jae's hands away and heals the arm, proving the safe zone protection works but only after the damage lands. Ho-jae realizes the pain is already gone, so the man's rolling on the ground is just panic and phantom pain. He stomps the fallen man's head aside and turns to the next one without missing a beat. A huge swordsman charges straight in, but Ho-jae instantly sees that the man's stance and distance control are terrible. Ho-jae kicks the giant in the stomach, using both the man's charge and the remaining impact to wreck his breathing. Before the giant can recover, Ho-jae follows in and snaps his jaw and neck hard enough to knock him cold. The giant's neck twists back into place like a horror scene, but he stays unconscious in the grass. That one-sided takedown stops the rest of the rushing Federation men cold. Ho-jae pieces the rules together fast. Blades are mostly neutralized, but a quick crush to joints, organs, or the neck still drops people before the system can fully save them. While Ho-jae crushes the front line, Kim Min-hyuk and several rankers move to encircle the representative Federation before anyone can escape. A spear ranker named Myung Jin-chan steps up, praises Ho-jae's move, and smugly insists Ho-jae is not the only one with skills. Blue light gathers around the tip of Myung Jin-chan's spear, but Ho-jae just cuts him off and tells Mr. Nobody to hurry up and fight. Ho-jae attacks first, slips past the blue spear thrust, and immediately punishes the opening. He smacks the hand holding the spear with Gladius, and the burst of pain makes Myung Jin-chan disgracefully drop his weapon. Watching the spear ranker awkwardly scramble to pick his weapon back up, Ho-jae decides this fight is too easy for Blink or Talaria's wings. Since sharp edges barely matter here, Ho-jae puts Gladius away and pulls out the heavy backsword to use it like a beating stick. In Ho-jae's mind, this turns into pure punishment, and he starts laying into the Federation members until the stress finally drains out of him. Hours later, with the Federation side already broken, Ho-jae sprawls on the grass and enjoys the ridiculous peace of Kiri-Kiri's field. He realizes the beatings felt weirdly therapeutic, and in a place with no fatigue, he is left feeling refreshed instead of worn out. Checking his status, Ho-jae is startled to see basic swordsmanship reach level 7 from beating weaker opponents in a totally different way. He figures out why fighting goblins taught him survival and precision, but today let him experiment with blunt, aggressive swings he never used before. He even considers going back for more practice, but one look over shows that his part in the violence is already over. Once Ho-jae started crushing them, Kim Min-hyuk stepped in, tied every Federation member with ropes, and turned the victory into total control. Then the quiet schoolgirl finally steps forward as Park Young-ah and gives the group the clearest plan for what comes next. Park Young-ah says the real answer is to push first-floor challengers upward, prepare for retaliation after the event ends, and punish the Federation so hard they never dare repeat this again. Her harsh proposal is to use the captured Federation men as living sandbags, so the victims can train, lose their fear, and finally fight back together. She gathers the whole field, exposes the Federation's abuse in public, and wins support even from people who are not direct victims. She keeps going, turning the frightened victims into a united group by talking plainly about both the danger ahead and the hope they still have. Kim Min-hyuk and the other rankers deliberately step back and let Park Young-ah lead, because this has to be resolved by one of the victims herself. Once everything is organized, her plan begins for real, and the bound Federation men become targets for training across the field. Rankers teach basic boxing and sword swings while the victims hit the men who terrorize them, turning punishment into forced combat practice. Even the ones who cry and refuse are forced to participate, because everyone agrees that letting that fear stay would be worse. With that brutal process underway, Ho-jae ends up with nothing left to do except kill time and think about the 13 hours still left in the event. Light footsteps approach, and Park Young-ah comes over to him after handling the whole field. Ho-jae greets her awkwardly, but Park Young-ah suddenly drops to her knees and thanks him on behalf of her dead older sister and the other victims. Then she says she still has one more favor to ask, and Ho-jae braces himself as her story begins. Park Young-ah tells him a long, painful account of her life before the tutorial, what happened after she entered it, and how her older sister died. By the end, her request is simple and huge at the same time. She wants Ho-jae to lend her his strength. When Ho-jae asks how she plans to repay that debt, Park Young-ah answers that she will spend the rest of her life protecting other people. That answer corners Ho-jae emotionally, and instead of refusing, he opens his inventory and hands over the magical handgun he bought earlier. He gives her a quick warning: it fires explosions at range, has no safety, and only holds 5 shots, but he has never tested its power himself. Park Young-ah decides to test it immediately, and Ho-jae follows because now he wants to know too. She heads straight for Lee Chang-suk, one of the Federation men being used as a training target. Without any rush, Park Young-ah pulls out a small bottle, coats her fingers with the slippery liquid, and prepares something far uglier than a simple shot. Then she slowly pushes her lubricated fingers under Lee Chang-suk's eye, forcing space open while the system refuses to intervene. As Lee Chang-suk reaches peak panic, Park Young-ah slides the handgun's narrow barrel into the opening she made. One deafening blast later, Lee Chang-suk's head is gone, and this time the system does not heal him at all. As the blood falls back over her, Park Young-ah quietly judges the weapon and shocks even Ho-jae with how calm she looks. There is no grief or madness on her face, only the chilling calm of someone who decided this was necessary and carried it out. Park Young-ah raises the handgun and calls everyone's eyes to her, and the whole field erupts into vomiting, screaming, applause, and cheers all at once. Standing on Lee Chang-suk's corpse, Park Young-ah starts another speech, and in that brutal moment the Order of Vigilance is born. 2 days after the Day of Great Harmony, Lee Ho-jae admits he lost extra time to clean up, politics, and helping Park Young-ah build the new Order of Vigilance. His thoughts jump back to the field where Park Young-ah personally executed Lee Chang-suk and turned that shock into the founding moment of the Order. A lot of victims and rankers still joined her anyway, because to some people Park Young-ah looked less like a tyrant and more like a blood-stained savior. Kim Min-hyuk, the rankers, and even Ho-jae himself joined the Order as it took shape around one clear mission: keep basic safety and rights alive inside the tutorial. They hammered out 4 simple rules on the spot: no violence, no rape, no theft, and no violating another person's freedom. Plenty of people hated the idea and feared the Order would become a second representative federation, but the group pushed ahead anyway. Once the rules talk ended, the execution started again, and Park Young-ah picked out the worst Federation members for death while the rest were marked for surveillance. After 15 hours of terror and beatings, the surviving Federation members were mentally shattered, but Park Young-ah still refused to lower her guard. She announced that part of the Order, including herself, would stay behind on the first floor next round to control any new chaos instead of clearing upward. She also insisted that new challengers needed proper instructions and clear rules the moment the tutorial dragged them in. Kim Min-hyuk took that job and prepared community notices like a survival manual, which finally wrapped up the whole ugly affair by yesterday morning. Ho-jae comes out of it all with a pounding headache and a blunt conclusion. He is far better at fighting alone than handling everybody's opinions. That is why the giant stone gate ahead of him almost feels comforting, because this brutal path is the one he understands. Now that he has gotten used to the backsword, Ho-jae decides it is finally time to clear the 5th floor boss room. He still knows boss rooms are always nasty surprises, so confidence and unease sit side by side as the gate grinds open. Inside the enclosed stone chamber, Ho-jae is startled to see only one opponent waiting for him, a lone lizard man behind a glass barrier. A system notice says the trial begins in 30 seconds, and Ho-jae immediately suspects there has to be some hidden trick behind a boss this simple. When the countdown ends, the mission names the boss as Idaltaru, a stealthy shadow warrior, and that title sounds wrong the moment Ho-jae sees how carefully the lancer holds back. The duel stalls into a tense circle, and for the first time in a while Ho-jae feels genuinely anxious because the reach advantage is all on the lizard's side. He realizes charging first could get him killed on a counter, so the fight turns into a grim test of nerves instead of raw aggression. Then a stranger detail clicks for him. This lizard man does not feel like a normal lizard man at all, and its guarded behavior starts to look almost nervous. Remembering how obsessed lizard men are with pride, Ho-jae decides to test that weakness with the most exaggerated warrior praise he can fake. Ho-jae praises Idaltaru as a magnificent lancer and says dying to such a strong warrior would leave him with no regrets. The reaction is immediate, because his language skill lets him see what should be unreadable on a reptile face, pure delighted pride. Idaltaru answers in her own tongue, impressed that a human can speak it, and says she will honor him by allowing 3 attacks first. Ho-jae knows that still does not make her harmless, but it is the opening he wanted, so he decides to kill her before that arrogance can vanish. He opens with his best combo, spreading Talaria's wings and chaining it straight into Blink for a point-blank body charge. Instead of landing, the attack passes through black smoke where part of Idaltaru's body should have been, and Ho-jae is stunned by the impossible dodge. A trident thrust comes from behind almost immediately, and Ho-jae barely catches it on his shield before jumping back out of range. Even after that, Idaltaru does not press the advantage, proving she really intends to honor her promise of 3 attacks. That is when she drops an even stranger line, praising his strength and casually saying she would take him as her husband if he were her kind. Ho-jae reels, because that one sentence reveals 2 shocks at once. The lizard is female, and she is looking at him in a way that feels deeply wrong. Creeped out, he instantly changes tactics, hurling his gladius at her and drawing the backsword as he rushes in again. Idaltaru turns part of her body to smoke again to avoid the thrown sword, confirming that trick was no fluke. Ho-jae slams his backsword into the trident to break her guard, but Idaltaru smoothly rolls the impact away with superior spear control. He commits anyway and dives inside her reach, gambling on Talaria's wings and Blink to survive the kind of reckless move that should get him killed. When her tail whips in to block him, Ho-jae catches it with Talaria's wings and smashes his shield into her face. He wants to keep pressing, but Idaltaru calmly shortens her grip and still drives a precise trident thrust at him from point-blank range, forcing him back again. That exchange convinces Ho-jae she is the most technically skilled opponent he has faced yet. Idaltaru, meanwhile, just pats the spot he hit and looks at him with a weirdly pleased, almost tender expression that completely ruins the mood. Then she fully relaxes her combat stance, reaches a hand toward him, and politely says she has long wanted a strong male. She keeps going and says she might be able to overcome the species barrier with him, even if they would have to test whether mating with a human could produce children. Ho-jae is so stunned he briefly wonders if his translation skill has broken, because what he is hearing is too insane to accept on the spot. He replays every word in his head under battle focus, and the truth lands with absolute clarity. This reptile is trying to take his virginity. In the 5th floor boss room, Idaltaru suddenly introduces herself with a shy, excited smile and even invites Lee Ho-jae to call her ID, turning the duel into something deeply unsettling. Ho-jae forces himself to ignore her mating signals and re-enters battle focus, deciding he has to win now if he wants to avoid whatever this lizard woman has in mind. As he studies her, Ho-jae realizes Idaltaru is dangerous precisely because she fights nothing like the other lizard men, staying calm, defensive, and ready to counter every mistake. He also pinpoints the rule behind her black smoke evasion. She can phase through one impact, but not keep it up long enough to stop a chained follow-up. That gives Ho-jae a plan: force out the smoke skill with a normal attack, then finish her with a blink charge backed by Talaria's wing. But when he raises his sword again, Idaltaru looks genuinely hurt and demands to know why he keeps rejecting her. Ho-jae snaps back that she is a hideous lizard, and the insult lands hard enough to finally break her composure. Humiliated and furious, Idaltaru drops the shy act, vows to keep him by force, and her eyes blaze red as she charges. Her all-in thrust is so heavy Ho-jae knows he cannot cleanly parry it, so he makes a brutal choice and jams his shield and arms straight into the line of attack. The trident punches through his shield and left arm anyway, but Ho-jae uses that instant to swing his backsword and chop off Idaltaru's left arm at the shoulder. Idaltera lunges in with her jaws instead of phasing through the hit, and Ho-Jae blinks backward before she can tear into him. When they separate, Ho-Jae realizes the trade worked. He is bleeding badly, but Idaltera is down an arm and her weapon is still stuck in his body. Idaltera bitterly calls him cruel, admits he nearly took her head, and finally stops talking like a suitor as she declares him an enemy she has to kill. Then her whole body swells with muscle and nearly doubles in size, kicking off a terrifying second phase. Her next stomp cracks the floor like glass, and Ho-Jae instantly realizes this berserk version hits far harder than anything before. She loses all technique and just rampages, but raw power is enough to turn the entire marble room into a collapsing wreck every time Ho-Jae dodges. The problem is that Ho-Jae starts burning out first, because even successful dodges are draining him faster than she slows down. After spending several emergency blinks to stay alive, Ho-Jae realizes he only has 2 uses left and needs to turn them into a finish somehow. He finally sees a tiny opening when her fist buries itself in the wall, and he snaps his gladius toward her heart before she can recover. Idaltera's tail catches him first and smashes him into the air, leaving Ho-Jae sure he is about to die. In pure survival panic, Ho-Jae blurts out ID while airborne, accidentally using the intimate nickname she wanted. The name works instantly, because Idaltera freezes in place and lets him land safely instead of finishing him. Seeing that opening, Ho-Jae awkwardly praises her strength and tries to turn the fight into a confession delay instead of a death match. He pushes further and begs for time to think, using a familiar soft rejection line, and to his shock even giant berserk Idaltera calms down immediately. Once she pauses, Ho-Jae yanks the trident out of his own arm, bleeding even harder, and immediately drinks stamina and healing potions while watching her for betrayal. He stalls one more time by claiming he needs a human ritual to focus his heart, but what he is really doing is preparing a new blink sword technique he has almost never landed cleanly. Ho-Jae times the slash with blink itself, trying to carry the teleport's momentum into a lethal chest cut without throwing his whole body into the impact. The slash itself still fails to wound her because Idaltera turns into black smoke again, but this time Ho-Jae is relieved since that was the exact reaction he wanted. The moment her body reforms, Ho-Jae follows with the real finisher and blinks in behind Talaria's wing for a point-blank charge. But even in that split second, Idaltera's tail snags his ankle, and they crash together in a wild tumble that smashes Ho-Jae's head into the floor. When Ho-Jae comes to, Idaltera lies still in a huge pool of blood, and he thinks the fight is finally over after all that damage and blood loss. He tries to think through escape and recovery, but then a cold realization hits him. The boss clear never triggered, and the usual restoration never came. A low growl answers that fear, and when Ho-Jae slowly turns back, Idaltera lifts her blood-smeared face and glares at him from the floor. Still alive, Idaltera stares him down and calls him monstrously cruel, ending the chapter with the fight clearly not over. Pinned on the ruined 5th floor, Ho-Jae hears Idaltera rasp that he cannot move anymore, and the dying lizard woman crawls closer with a terrifying promise to make him her husband. Ho-Jae nearly panics, but he forces himself to think through what still works and realizes his right hand can move even if blink is spent. Since God-given powers still work, he rummages through his inventory in desperation and settles on the heat stone as his last weapon. Ho-Jae hides the blazing heat stone in his palm, willing himself to endure the burn so he can ram it into Idaltera if she reaches him. As Idaltera drags herself closer, Ho-Jae finally hears what she has been muttering the whole time, the same obsessive vow to make him her husband. Then Idaltera suddenly stops, and collapses at arm's reach, her body finally giving out before she can touch him. With her last breaths, Idaltera reveals why Ho-Jae mattered to her. He was the first one who called her strong instead of mocking the stealthy way she fought. She dies still clinging to that wish, and Ho-Jae is left staring at a monster who suddenly feels more lonely than frightening. Ho-Jae imagines she may have been shunned even by her own kind, and the thought leaves him bitterly sorry even though he still would have killed her. Unable to leave it there, he crawls closer and gently closes Idaltera's open eyes. The 5th floor clear finally hits, healing Ho-Jae and burying the ugly fight under a flood of rewards, point changes, and one suspicious gift offer from the gods. He hesitates because the gods' gifts never feel harmless, but refusing could offend them too, so he reluctantly accepts. The new skill turns out to be dead summoning, a nameless god's power that can call back the dead through a soul-linked item. A soul stone rises from Idaltera's fading corpse, and Ho-Jae instantly realizes what the gods were hoping he would do. He flatly refuses to revive the woman who nearly dragged him into a nightmare marriage, and the watching gods react with relief, disappointment, and irritation. Done with all of it, Ho-Jae touches the portal and leaves the 5th floor behind. Back on the peaceful green plains, Kirikiri greets him with a sulk because his bizarre 5th floor finish became entertainment for the gods. Ho-Jae snaps back that he was not about to mate with a lizard woman, and one slice of cake is enough to melt Kirikiri's anger. With cake in hand, Kirikiri cheerfully explains that Idaltera's proposal was a rare tutorial event, which only makes Ho-Jae feel more insulted. Ho-Jae tests a long-held theory out loud, piecing together that goblins and lizard men must come from real worlds beyond Earth, and that other tutorials probably exist. The moment he starts reading her reactions for answers, Kurikiri freezes like a statue, making the boundary painfully obvious. Ho-jae backs off at once, and Kurikiri warns him not to keep fishing for forbidden information through her responses, or their relationship will change. Realizing she had still been trying to help him all along, Ho-jae apologizes sincerely for pushing too far. Even after everything, Kurikiri oddly suggests that if he had talked Idaltari down, she might have become a strong ally, and Ho-jae wants no part of that idea. Planning to save points for a better shield later, Ho-jae moves to leave, but Kurikiri stops him with an urgent warning to buy more potions first. He already has plenty, but Kurikiri has never steered him wrong, so Ho-jae spends all his remaining points on potions anyway. Kurikiri sends him off with a strangely ominous goodbye, and Ho-jae steps into the portal toward the 6th floor. On the 6th floor, the first thing waiting for him is a party selection screen, and the problem is obvious at a glance. This floor was built for a team. That is when Ho-jae understands Kurikiri's warning. On held difficulty he has no allies to recruit, so he will have to enter a 5-person stage alone. He curses the tutorial's design and the gods behind it, then realizes the trial can at least still be attempted solo. Since there is no better option, Ho-jae braces himself to do the work of 5 challengers by himself and accepts the stage. He appears in a cramped stone room with a magical bonfire and 2 portals, the kind of safe planning space other challengers would have used together. The bonfire is tempting, but Ho-jae pushes that aside and heads straight for the real trial portal. Beyond the portal, he finds a dark, narrow corridor with a gigantic stone door behind him, and the door refuses to open because it is the very place he must defend. The trial briefing explains the disaster clearly. 16 priests of the Bar sect are marching a death army toward the White Mountain Range, and Ho-jae must hold them back until holy knights arrive or wipe them out himself. Ho-jae quickly reads the terrain for what it is worth. The corridor is too cramped for flight, but its choke point might let one fighter hold off an army for a while. After 4 hours of walking, he finally meets the enemy and sees why Kurikiri sounded so grim. The corridor ahead is packed with an endless marching skeleton army. The individual skeletons look weak and badly equipped, but when Ho-jae jumps for a better view, he still cannot see the end of the army. He quickly understands the real problem. This floor is not about one big burst of strength, but a grinding war of endurance and speed against an army that may not stop for days. Even so, Ho-jae draws the heavy backsword instead of a sharp blade, deciding blunt force will work better on bare bones. He spreads Talaria's wings to block the passage and launches himself into the front line, using the corridor itself as a bottleneck. His first blow proves the basic rule immediately. These undead only truly stop when their skulls are smashed. Bodies without heads still twitch and bite, so Ho-jae has no choice but to keep crushing each one cleanly and fast. In the middle of the swarm, he spots a better armored skeleton with a plumed helmet and instantly reads it as a commander. He is a moment too late, and the commander lets out a shriek that rolls through the undead ranks like a signal. Thousands of skeletons answer the cry at once, their eyes and weapons igniting with dark energy as the whole horde grows deadlier. 2 brutal days later, the fight has become exactly the nightmare he feared, and Ho-jae has been pushed all the way back to the stone door despite smashing skeletons without end. With the buffed undead still pouring in, Ho-jae realizes he cannot hold the line anymore. A few skeletons finally slip past him and reach the door, and the trial ends in failure just as round 3 runs out. On the 60th floor, Ho-jae distracts himself from a headache-inducing letter by polishing the incubator so he can stare at his dragon egg more clearly. The egg still has not moved, but Ho-jae keeps watching it all day because unlike the last owner, he is determined to force an answer out of the tutorial managers. With almost absurd dedication, Ho-jae has already planned the hatchling's whole life, from elixirs and blessings to special food, a huge nest, and even rare fairy feed for later. He even learned polymorph magic and installed a handmade dragon heart in his own body, just in case the baby dragon refuses to accept a human parent. When he looks at everything he has prepared, Ho-jae feels a dangerous kind of bliss, like maybe this time life and hell difficulty might finally go smoothly. That quiet mood breaks when a familiar message alert pops up while he is resting with coffee after finishing the cleaning. Kim Min-hyuk contacts him from the 99th floor to say his final round is about to begin, and Ho-jae is hit by how unreal it is that Min-hyuk is finally leaving the tutorial. Min-hyuk claims he plans to live quietly once he gets out, but Ho-jae immediately doubts the outside world will leave Korea's most connected top ranker alone. Ho-jae says it is a shame there will be no day of great harmony before Min-hyuk leaves, but Min-hyuk bluntly reminds him those events only happen when something has gone very wrong. Their bickering slips into old rhythm when Min-hyuk teases that Ho-jae enjoyed the first day of great harmony only because everyone else did the real work. When Ho-jae mentions hearing that another day of great harmony may be coming, Min-hyuk is surprised because he no longer gets that kind of information after leaving the Order of Vigilance. Min-hyuk asks if Park Young-ah knows, and once Ho-jae says she probably does, Min-hyuk calmly concludes the event will likely be cancelled like always. Ho-jae reflects that the day of great harmony is really a danger signal inside the tutorial, and Park Young-ah's order usually crushes the problem before anyone can reunite with family or friends there. Then Min-hyuk nudges the real sore spot by asking whether Ho-jae and Young-ah are still stuck exactly where they were. Ho-jae gives the short answer, But inside he knows time has changed nothing because as long as he is trapped here, reconciliation would solve nothing. Min-hyuk keeps pushing anyway, saying that once he leaves, hardly anyone else will be able to talk to Park Young-ah casually, so Ho-jae should help. Ho-jae snaps back at the matchmaking, and Min-hyuk only makes it worse by claiming Young-ah seems interested. Certain Min-hyuk fed Young-ah the same story in reverse. Ho-jae immediately messages her out of pure curiosity. Young-ah never replies to him, but Min-hyuk instantly does, complaining that Young-ah just unloaded a storm of insults on him instead. The two fall back into easy banter, and Ho-jae jokes that if the day of great harmony somehow really happens, he can just talk to Young-ah face to face instead. The topic shifts when Min-hyuk brings up the held difficulty newcomer, and Ho-jae bristles because he knows exactly how brutal the 6th floor still is for an archer like Lee Yun-hee. Min-hyuk points out that she reached the 6th floor in 10 rounds, but Ho-jae cannot stop comparing that pace to his own monstrous climb and worrying about the wall ahead. In the end, Ho-jae admits that if Lee Yun-hee ever looks truly stuck, he is ready to flood her with items just to force her upward. Before he logs off, Min-hyuk asks one last thing that matters to the outside world, just how strong Ho-jae has become now. Min-hyuk offers G-rank monsters as the benchmark, the kind of national disaster that forced whole regions to be abandoned and even massacred elite awakened in New York. After a brief mental comparison, Ho-jae answers with shameless confidence that he is probably stronger than those monsters anyway. Min-hyuk dryly calls it the same thoughtless answer as always, and the two drift from teasing into memories of how their friendship survived almost entirely through messages. That makes Min-hyuk's farewell hit harder, because even if they rarely met in person, losing these conversations still feels like losing family. When Min-hyuk finally says he will go first and see him outside, Ho-jae answers calmly but is left staring at the obvious truth that he has to escape too. Still unsettled, Ho-jae goes back to the cluttered table, finds the packed letter for Lee Yun-hee, and fills the last empty line with one direct request: please tell Kurikiri about Sarah. 2 days into round 4, Lee Ho-jae is stuck in the 6th floor waiting room, still burning from his first real defeat. He wants to run straight back into the 6th floor, even knowing his odds are terrible, because losing hit him harder than any injury so far. That hopeless feeling drags him back to the day he quit pro gaming after getting crushed by an unknown rookie. Back then his body was failing him, with old injuries, slower reactions, and a mind that could not keep up anymore. The tutorial gave him all of that back, restoring him to his prime and beyond, which makes this new wall even more infuriating. So instead of despairing, he tells himself this place still lets him grow, and that means even this wall can be broken. The worst part is that he has to sit on that urge for 3 full days, unable to re-enter while his mind keeps replaying the fight. While he waits, new challengers keep arriving and flood the tutorial with badly needed news from the outside world. The updates say Korea is battered but not collapsed, with the Chungcheong area ruined and the rest of the country holding defensive lines against the monsters. It is still a disaster, but compared to other countries, Korea is somehow on the better side, which says a lot about how bad the world has become. Inside the tutorial, Park Young-ah uses the start of round 4 to launch a new attack on the battered Representative Federation, saying they might move again. Since the Federation is already scattered and broken, the fight ends almost immediately and turns into a purge. 8 more Federation members are executed, and the story spreading through the tutorial is that Park Young-ah personally blew one man's head apart with a handgun. That brutality sparks a fierce argument over whether Park Young-ah should still be leading the Order of Vigilance at all. Ho-jae cannot decide if she is becoming a monster, a necessary judge, or both, and that uncertainty bothers him. In the end, he sets a hard line for himself. If Park Young-ah ever causes another day like the Great Harmony, he will stop her the same way he did before. At the same time, Kim Min-hyuk throws himself into practical work, writing a full tutorial guide for the newcomers. He also turns the auction site into a gift and trading network by marking items priced at 7 or 77 points as reserved for specific people. That small rule opens real trade between challengers and starts turning the lower floors into something closer to a functioning community. Kim Min-hyuk openly says he wants to build a society people can live in, because he doubts most challengers will ever see the 100th floor. Ho-jae does not fully share that goal, but he has to admit Kim Min-hyuk's plan may be the best hope for the countless weak people getting stranded below. Ho-jae spends the same days trying to help 2 new hell difficulty victims, Lee Kyung-won and Kim Jong-un, who only landed there through stupid bad luck. One admits he chose hell while drunk, and the other says he accidentally hit the option while testing whether the strange screen was even real. Feeling sorry for them, Ho-jae gives a much fuller lesson than before, teaching not just the trap pattern but how to move through it. Even after all that effort, he still is not confident, so he tells them to test the first trap and report back from the waiting room. The result is exactly what he feared. One of the 2 dies almost immediately. Kim Jong-un survives, but his message is pure panic as he says he could not even hear the arrows before they nearly killed him. After 4 days of trying, Ho-jae has to admit his help changed nothing for these hell difficulty beginners. All he can do is tell Kim Jong-un to stop challenging the floor, wait by the portal, and survive on jerky and water until the next round's supply drop. That answer feels awful, because he knows he may be condemning the man to an endless cycle of starvation, waiting, and slow mental collapse. The contrast eats at him. Kim Min-hyuk can support stranded people on the easier difficulties, but Ho Jae still has no real answer for hell. With nothing more he can do for the newbies, he finally turns back to his own impossible problem on the 6th floor. He sits by his magic bonfire, bakes bread, and uses the quiet to think through the 6th floor one more time. His eyes go to the spirit stones of Goblin Gractus, Goblin Goros, and Idaltaru, along with the dead summon skill that could call them back. He realizes that if the summons can be reasoned with, those 3 dead enemies could become a temporary squad strong enough to cover the corridor with him. In his head, that opens up real tactics, rotating teams to save stamina, rescuing each other when one line falters, or sending a standby fighter to kill the skeleton commander. He even sees a brute force option, because the corridor is so narrow that 4 fighters in a row might actually push through the skeleton line. So yes, dead summon could probably carry him through this floor, and that almost makes it feel like a gift designed for this exact crisis. But the skill has a time limit on the summons and only 5 uses total, which makes it a short-term patch instead of a real answer. He sees the bigger trap immediately. If he leans on temporary mercenaries now, the next party-based wall will crush him again. That finally brings him to a harsher conclusion. The only real solution is to grow until he can fight with the weight of 5 people by himself. So he strips the problem back to basics and decides his job for now is simple: keep surviving, keep colliding with the wall, and keep growing from it. The tutorial's rules actually favor that plan, because every failed run still raises his level, improves his skills, and sends him back to full recovery in the waiting room. That means forcing a clever clear right now would only delay the real work and leave him weaker when the next wall arrives. He tells himself not to be impatient and commits to one brutal rule: fail, return, recover, and challenge again without dying. His target shifts from merely holding the line to becoming strong enough to shove the skeleton army backward and advance on his own. Once he frames it that way, the hopeless wall turns back into what he understands best: an RPG grind with perfect recovery and endless room to improve. With that, he hardens his resolve, swears he will just hunt until it works, and sets his first milestone at level 20. And as that resolve lands, the system abruptly cuts in with the cold reminder that his 6th floor run has already ended in failure, and round 4 is closing. Stuck alone in the waiting room again, Lee Yun-hee kills time by digging through ancient community posts and bitterly watching old challengers ignore Lee Ho-jae's warnings. She admits the real problem is boredom, because skill grinding in the waiting room is miserable and her passive skills barely rise anyway. With nothing else to do, she keeps reading until the community turns into a history lesson on the Korean server and Lee Ho-jae's rise from dismissed liar to untouchable top ranker. Those records remind her that even before entering the tutorial, she already knew Lee Ho-jae as the famous hell difficulty survivor the media never stopped talking about. She remembers first noticing his face on TV as a handsome pro gamer long before he became the person keeping her alive in this place. That thought turns serious when she admits Lee Ho-jae became her daddy longlegs, the one who gave her hope when she entered hell difficulty by mistake and had no idea how to survive. Then her mood tilts into embarrassed fantasy as she wonders if she wants to become that kind of savior too, only with herself cast as a prince riding in to save a trapped princess. Realizing how absurd she sounds, she yelps, rolls around on the bed, and tries to laugh the whole thing off before anyone can see her. The mood snaps back when Park Young-ah messages her and asks if everyone is ready. When Park Young-ah says Lee Ho-jae told her to check on Yun-hee because he went up to the 61st floor, Yun-hee instantly bristles at hearing her call him big bro. Because she has read years of old records, Yun-hee knows Park Young-ah never used that tone before, and the fake intimacy grates on her immediately. She asks why Lee Ho-jae went to the 61st floor, and Park Young-ah says he just needed more points after spending a lot this time. That answer tells Yun-hee he is not searching for a 6th floor solution for her, so she decides to keep this conversation as short as possible. When Park Young-ah asks if she memorized what to tell the manager, Yun-hee answers yes but sees at being talked down to like a child. As round 95 begins, Yun-hee cuts the conversation off, ignores Park Young-ah's last message, and heads for the stage to clear her head. Inside the 6th floor bonfire room, she checks her items, skills, and plan one last time before stepping into the real fight. She remembers that Lee Ho-jae stopped spoon-feeding exact trial solutions after the early floors, forcing her to gather information and build her own strategy. The core trap of the 6th floor is simple. 16 priests keep mass-producing skeleton soldiers, and anyone who just waits for rescue gets buried under the endless swarm. After one last mental simulation, she commits to a fast strike plan and accepts the trial. The stage opens with the bar sex backstory, but Yun-hee skips the familiar briefing because speed matters more than flavor text now. Her first move is preparation, pulling out a high-grade magic stone and concentrated mana potion to build a return spell near the entrance. The instant the return circle activates, she turns away from it and sprints down the corridor under a wind spirit's acceleration buff. While racing ahead, she starts dropping alarm traps behind her so she can track enemy movement by sound later. To save stamina and keep her speed up, she switches to low-altitude flight magic and glides through the straight corridor instead of running. She keeps planting traps even in flight, turning the corridor behind her into a breadcrumb line for the retreat she already expects to need. At the first fork, she drops the flight spell, checks for nearby skeletons, and confirms she still has a safe lead. She adds an explosive magic circle at the junction, knowing the blast will not stop the army but will tell her exactly when the swarm reaches this point. Then she commits to the route she memorized through all 14 forks and slips into the left passage without hesitation. The sound of skeleton footsteps grows louder ahead, confirming she is threading through the same maze their army is using. To pass them unseen, she summons a wind curtain spirit and uses its invisibility to cling to the corridor ceiling. Hidden by the spirit and her stealth skill, she glides over the skeleton troops while carefully avoiding the Death Knights who might actually notice her. That careful route finally brings her into a massive cave where all 16 priests are openly mass-producing skeleton soldiers. She hides behind a pillar and dismisses the wind spirit, because once the attack starts she only has a few seconds before the whole room turns on her. She deliberately leaves the leader cases alone, because attacking him too early makes him transform into something far worse and speeds up the whole summoning process. Her ambush begins with a light-infused arrow that blows one priest's neck apart in a flash. Using the blinding flash to steal another heartbeat, she drops a second priest before the room can fully react. The priests recover faster than expected and immediately summon the Death Knights while hurling fire and curses at her. She enters battle focus, slows the world down in her head, and squeezes out one more perfect shot for a third kill. 3 dead priests is as far as she can push it, because the curses are about to finish and a Death Knight is already almost on top of her. So she triggers the return spell and vanishes from the cave before the counterattack can land. She reappears on the return circle at the stage entrance and drops to the floor, wrecked from spending too much high-level magic in one burst. Still, the raid worked. 3 priests are dead, the others had to break off summoning to attack her, and that delay is exactly the opening she came for. With her mana, stamina, and focus all nearly empty, she has only one move left for now: chug potions and recover before the next exchange. As she reaches for the potion, a distant explosion from one of her planted traps echoes through the corridor and confirms the enemy army is already moving. On round 5, day 8, Li Ho-jae heads straight into the 6th floor trial with no big plan left to make. Because the first enemies are still hours away, he decides to use the dead travel time to train his body instead of wasting it. He starts doing burpees every few steps, turning the march into a brutal warm-up. Even with superhuman stats, the simple workout leaves him breathing hard, and he bitterly realizes how badly he neglected basic conditioning. As soon as he steadies his breath, the skeleton soldiers finally come into earshot, and the daily grind begins again. One failed run after another still gives him levels and stat growth, but the endless loop is starting to wear straight through his nerves. He compares this grind to an obsessive gamer repeating the same task forever, except he does not enjoy it anymore and only keeps going because this is now his job. The one upside is that the endless fighting finally polishes his basics until his sword and shield start moving almost on their own. His battle focus sharpens so far that for a heartbeat the world almost looks frozen around him. Using that focus over and over also hardens his will, even as the pressure keeps digging at his mind. Because enemies keep swarming him from all sides, his shield work catches up fast enough to awaken a sturdier defensive skill. He gets so sick of the skeletons screeching at him that he starts roaring back, and that somehow turns into a combat buff. A Death Knight named Asti steps out, and Ho-jae charges him in a burst of false hope after briefly mistaking the mid-boss for the floor's end. The real wall is not one enemy but the branching corridors, because every fork lets another wave slip past him and open the stone door. He considers simply holding the line until the Holy Knights arrive, but he has already learned they can come absurdly late, and his body cannot survive another 13-day stall. The only other option is an even harder one: get strong enough to break through the whole route before the undead can reach the door. So he throws himself back into the grind, stacking resistance skills from all the cuts, stabs, and poison like filth those rusty weapons leave behind. Eventually his basic swordsmanship crosses the line into a higher tier, and he also awakens Mana Circuit to finally move the mana inside his own body. As he practices the circuit, he learns to reinforce his body and starts imagining sharper bursts of strength at the exact moment he needs them. Then the breakthrough becomes obvious when he wraps mana around his blade and jokes to himself that he is basically carrying a lightsaber now. The more skillfully he uses mana, the more he feels his total supply falling short, so he starts searching for a way to steady his mind and control it better. That search gives him meditation, which helps with concentration but also leaves him alone with every ugly thought he has been trying not to face. As he keeps digging through those thoughts, he realizes the tutorial has given him almost nothing good, and the spiral gets bad enough to trigger resistance against mental corruption. Back in combat, he pours mana into his roar and evolves Battle Cry into Soul Cry, a taunt that can force weaker enemies to focus on him instead of slipping by. His other close combat skills rise with him too, and the build he has been grinding toward finally starts to look complete. When he finally faces the true floor boss cases, the fight nearly kills him and snaps him out of the complacency he built up from surviving weaker curses. After surviving that scare, he understands the answer at last. He has to wipe out the Death Knights, skeletons, and priests first, then take cases alone. By now the priest's recycled speeches irritate him more than they intimidate him, and he starts cursing them out before they can finish. At the end of the long grind, he tells the boss to just transform already, because this time he is here to finish the floor for real. He finally clears the 6th floor on hell difficulty, and the system washes away all his injuries as a flood of points pours in. The gods pile on extra rewards. He gains the special skill Soul Steel, and 2 different gods immediately start fighting over him as a possible apostle. Later on the 60th floor, Ho-Jae sits by the giant incubator and happily writes a homemade magic textbook for the dragon hatchling. He had recently learned that dragons never needed written magic lessons at all, which still annoys him enough to grumble at the species before apologizing to the egg. Even so, he decides extra teaching can only help, and he focuses the book on getting the hatchling to learn polymorph as early as possible for the sake of the 61st floor. A community message cuts in when Park Young-ah demands his regular report, clearly already in a bad mood about him being late again. Knowing better than to argue with her head-on, he instantly switches tactics and acts apologetic and mentally worn down from being trapped too long. The move works almost too well, and Park Young-ah immediately softens, apologizes, and tells him he no longer needs to send regular reports. Feeling victorious, he pushes his luck and asks her to check on Lee Yun-hee before she enters the stage, claiming he is about to scout the 61st floor for more points. He also reminds her to tell Yun-hee not to forget the message meant for the manager, neatly taking one more burden off his own list. Park Young-ah brings up Yun-hee's progress, and Ho-Jae admits that while she is not on his level, she is genuinely gifted as a caster and excellent with mana. He reflects that Yun-hee solved her early archer weakness by learning activation magic, and that combination has already proven itself far beyond theory. That thought turns into a broader explanation. Activation magic became dominant because it casts fast and easily, while true traditional magic is too hard for most people to use well in battle. He then mentions rumors that another major event may be coming, and both of them treat that possibility with immediate caution. When the talk brushes near another day of great harmony, Park Young-ah reacts like the whole server could end up dead if another breach really opens so soon. Ho-Jae uses the opening to tease her about overworking the Order of Vigilance so badly that her subordinates have been crying to him for mercy. The moment she demands names, he wisely answers politely, fully aware he may have just signed those people up for punishment. He still presses the point, telling her to stop only punishing people and start raising them, especially now that Kim Min-hyuk has left the tutorial. He even says Kim Min-hyuk used to play the group's motherly role, and Park Young-ah bleakly admits she is not built for that kind of job. That leads into an awkward jab about her divorce, and she admits she never expected Kim Min-hyuk to leave the tutorial for Rio right after they split. After the long exchange, Ho-Jae finally finishes most of the dragon textbook and decides the last details can wait until he knows what kind of hatchling comes out. He drifts into excited guesses about the dragon's future color, privately hoping for a red one just because it sounds coolest to him. He says goodbye to the egg and gets ready to head for the 61st floor, but the closer he gets to leaving, the more uneasy he feels about abandoning it alone. He checks the room's controls and security, yet the anxiety still will not go away, so he decides he needs a backup guard before he can leave. To solve that, he draws 2 magic circles and summons a humanoid clone of himself into the room. The clone appears looking exactly like Ho-Jae and immediately greets the original by insulting him, which tells Ho-Jae this plan may be useful but definitely will not be peaceful. Their argument escalates instantly as original and clone trade profanity, with the clone mocking him for his paranoia and weakness. Still, Ho-Jae knows the clone can share thoughts and alert him from a distance, so he decides this foul-mouthed copy is good enough to serve as a living alarm for the egg. When Ho-Jae starts silently insulting him again, the clone flatly threatens to go on strike, and that is enough to make the original stop pushing it. With the arrangement finally settled, Ho-Jae orders the clone to guard the house and the egg while he goes out to earn points on the 61st floor. The clone sends him off with a half-hearted line that somehow wishes him safety and non-return at the same time, and Ho-Jae walks toward the portal anyway. On the 61st floor, Lee Ho-Jae sprawls across an absurdly huge ice throne and enjoys the rare feeling of his mind finally cooling down. He forces himself not to dwell on unanswered regrets, because looking back only wrecks his head even more. The throne's strange refreshing effect even reminds him of resting in Kiri-Kiri's green plain, and he immediately cuts that train of thought off. A message pops up from Park Young-ah saying she already spoke to Lee Yun-hee for him. When Park Young-ah bluntly asks why he did not go see Yun-hee himself, Ho-Jae dodges with a flat excuse that he is too busy. Park Young-ah fires back that he does not look busy at all, then admits something stranger. She thinks Lee Yun-hee dislikes her. Knowing one wrong answer could poison the whole conversation, Ho-Jae carefully tells her Yun-hee was probably just nervous around someone with Park Young-ah's hard image. That answer works, and Park Young-ah grumbles that speaking politely to people feels wrong enough to give her a rash. Then Park Young-ah warns him that some new major event may be coming soon, so he needs to stop ignoring his messages. That warning makes Ho-Jae consider a risky shortcut. Maybe he can send his clone to another difficulty, or even outside the tutorial. His clone instantly curses him out, and reminds him that once their link is cut across worlds, the clone would just die. The clone keeps insulting him, and Ho-Jae can only click his tongue at how useless this supposed breakthrough has become. Even so, the clone's bitter joke about being an unwanted youngest son makes Ho-jae laugh, and for a moment his chest feels lighter. Refreshed enough at last, Ho-jae gets off the throne and decides it is time to move again. He returns from the icy space to the 61st floor entrance, a dark hub with a bonfire and 3 portals. Standing before the portals, he thinks through the 61st floor rule again. Both side stages must be cleared by separate challengers before the boss room will open. That is why he briefly wonders if the dragon hatchling Yong might someday count as a separate challenger, even if he knows the chance is slim. With no better answer, Ho-jae enters one side stage and steps straight into a brutal desert. The heat does not injure him, but the dry wind and flying sand are miserable enough that he throws up a mana shield on the spot. He has no patience for this place, so he uses land folding to skip the march and head straight for the final room. His shortcut drops him at an oasis with a portal in the middle, and the sight reminds him of his first visit to the 61st floor. He activates the portal and is welcomed back by a giant's voice echoing across a fiery hall. In front of an enormous empty throne, the old red giant king greets Ho-jae like an old acquaintance and asks after the former queen. Ho-jae answers dryly that the former queen is still obsessed with skin aging, and the giant king explodes into a deafening laugh. Their banter quickly turns serious when the giant king asks about Ho-jae's arrangement and calls him a mighty sword that is still not complete. The giant presses harder, asking what Ho-jae will do with that strength once he is finally finished, but Ho-jae admits he still does not know. The old king accepts that answer, but warns Ho-jae to choose carefully later because the giants have already entrusted their will to him. With the talk over, the giant king lifts his sword and the duel begins. At that signal, 200 giant knights rise out of the magma and form up in a terrifying wall of steel. The old king and his knights salute Ho-jae as their king before the fight, and Ho-jae answers by simply raising his bare hand. Right on the edge of battle, another message from Park Young-ah cuts in and confirms the coming event is not the day of great harmony. The next chapter jumps back to Ho-jae clearing the 11th floor on held difficulty, and collecting a welcome upgrade to great poison resistance. Even with the reward, he collapses where he stands because the floor itself was less dangerous than it was exhausting. The real nightmare of the 11th floor was a treasure hunt through an underground city packed with countless decoy chests. Trying to interrogate the city's monsters got him nowhere because they all killed themselves before giving up any information. In the end, pure frustration solves it. Ho-jae tears up the underground king's garden, uncovers a hidden passage, finds a key, and reveals the treasure room behind the throne. That miserable clear convinces Ho-jae he badly needs better deduction and search skills, because brute force alone will not cover every floor. From there he heads to Kirikiri's world, where she happily greets him and immediately notices he took longer than usual. When Ho-jae answers too plainly, Kirikiri pouts that his reactions have gotten boring compared to the time he cried from relief at seeing her. Ho-jae retaliates by declaring there will be no cake today, and Kirikiri instantly explodes into a dramatic tantrum. He bargains for silence, and once Kirikiri agrees, he finally lies down to sleep. He wakes from a short but precious nap on Kirikiri's plane and realizes real sleep has become hard to find anywhere else. Kirikiri is still asleep with her head on his stomach, and Ho-jae quietly strokes her ears instead of waking her right away. While she sleeps, Ho-jae organizes the questions he has been saving ever since the miserable 6th floor clear and the god's apostle offers that followed it. His biggest worry is simple: if he accepts one god's offer and rejects the other, the angry one might sabotage or kill him later. So he lines up the answers he needs from Kirikiri, whether he can accept both offers, what penalties exist, and which god she recommends if he must choose. Even then, he lets Kirikiri sleep a little longer because she looks too peaceful to disturb. Instead, he checks in with Kim Min-hyuk and learns another major incident is likely to happen again before the round ends. The bad part is that nobody even knows why the event is happening, which tells Ho-jae the problem is larger than a simple repeat of old chaos. When Ho-jae asks about Park Young-ah, Kim Min-hyuk says she is furious again and trying to punish Order of Vigilance members who failed to catch criminals. That alarms Ho-jae because the Order's authority rests on fear, strength, and public trust, so internal cracks could make the whole thing collapse. Kim Min-hyuk says Park Young-ah knows the risk too, but Ho-jae still sends back a stern warning to keep watching her before she causes an accident. Once the chat ends, Ho-jae decides Kirikiri has slept enough and wakes her the mean but effective way by plugging her nose with his pinky. Kirikiri wakes with a tiny furious punch, but Ho-jae ignores it and jumps straight to the question he has been saving. At last, Kirikiri gives him the answer he needed most. There is no problem with accepting both gods' offers. Ho-jae is stunned that the answer was that simple, and only now notices Kirikiri has already started eating cake behind his back. The excerpt ends with Ho-jae deadpan and exasperated, telling Kirikiri to stop eating and hand the cake over. Ho-jae learns he does not have to pick one god yet, because he can accept both the god of adventure and the god of slowness and take both tests. Kirikiri warns that taking both tests has a price. The trials will likely get harder, and in the end he can still become apostle for only one god. When Ho-jae asks what the apostle tests are like, Kirikiri crouches down and starts covering the ground with strange symbols while she thinks. She explains that an apostle test is customized to the god's taste and the challenger's personality, so there is no fixed example she can hand him. Ho-Jae presses for more, and Kirikiri admits even she cannot predict the whole test for him, only that a god usually favors someone whose principles it already likes. Instead of exact answers, Ho-Jae asks Kirikiri to sketch the personalities of the two gods so he can judge them himself. Kirikiri starts with the god of adventure, and Ho-Jae jokingly warns her not to get distracted and wander off in the middle again. Kirikiri says the god of adventure loves long struggles, dreams reached after hardship, and stories that include comrades, enemies, and everyone around the hero. She contrasts that with the god of slowness, who values endurance from a strict first-person view and expects the apostle to face the world in the same solitary way. That finally clicks for Ho-Jae, who reads the god of adventure as someone drawn to party-style heroic stories, while the god of slowness clearly leans toward a lonely path that suits him better. When Ho-Jae asks for a direct recommendation, Kirikiri unexpectedly says the god of slowness's apostle path is too harsh for an ordinary human and advises him to choose the god of adventure instead. After weighing that advice, Ho-Jae decides to keep both paths open for now and choose between the gods later when he knows more. He says he will accept both tests for now, and the unseen gods immediately answer through system messages, with adventure relieved and slowness disappointed. Both gods immediately reward that choice by offering Ho-Jae new divine power skills before the apostle tests even really start. When Ho-Jae opens his status window, he sees both apostle tests have already been partially cleared by his past actions, but the god of adventure's route is absurdly larger. The first new skill, perseverance, reads like the god of adventure's combat gift, a power that should help most when Ho-Jae is facing real adversity. The second skill, focused effort, looks like the god of slowness's answer, a growth skill that rewards long, obsessive training, which makes Ho-Jae regret not getting it earlier. After the serious talk, Ho-Jae catches Kirikiri still glued to the dessert and teases her by taking back the cake plate, then settles on stealing the macaroon she had been saving. Kirikiri reacts like the world is ending over the lost macaroon, so Ho-Jae gives up on consoling her and simply buys her a whole macaroon set instead. The instant Kirikiri gets fed, she starts showering Ho-Jae with praise, and he dryly realizes she would probably trust any stranger who bribed her with candy. When Ho-Jae warns her not to follow strangers offering candy, Kirikiri keeps asking why until he gives up and tries to ask Kim Min-hyuk for help through the community chat. Before leaving, Ho-Jae tells Kirikiri to unlock fuller skill explanations once he reaches the waiting room, because he wants to inspect the new powers there. He asks if she has any advice for the 12th floor, but Kirikiri says it would not change much because he should be able to clear that floor easily on his own. That matches Ho-Jae's own confidence, because ever since he broke through the 6th floor's party stage wall alone, later floors have felt manageable by comparison. After buying food, potions, and a few simple expendables, Ho-Jae says goodbye and heads for the portal, feeling lighter now that the apostle question is settled for the moment. Kirikiri cheerfully teases that he should not cry from loneliness, and Ho-Jae grumbles back but still feels quietly grateful for how warmly she always sends him off. He enters the 12th floor waiting room and immediately finds himself in an enormous empty stone chamber with room to spare in every direction. With no distractions, Ho-Jae eagerly opens his status windows to inspect the real detailed effects of the two God-given skills. Perseverance turns out to be even better than he hoped, because it boosts him against stronger or more numerous enemies, when allies stand behind him, and when he is exhausted or wounded. The skill also adds resistance to mental attacks and stress, which makes Ho-Jae feel far safer against mind-affecting threats than before. When the god of adventure starts watching proudly through system text, Ho-Jae immediately drops the sarcasm and appreciates the gift a lot more. Focused effort also works about how he guessed, raising mastery growth when he keeps drilling one move long enough while giving a smaller boost to concentration and mental toughness. Even so, the skill leaves enough unanswered that Ho-Jae knows he will have to test its limits in practice and maybe ask Kirikiri later. Since he is fully rested and healed, Ho-Jae decides there is no point waiting around and moves straight out to start the next stage. At the entry prompt, Ho-Jae notices there is no party set up at all, which tells him the 12th floor is a solo stage. That only boosts his confidence, because he starts thinking a stretch of solo stages might finally let him climb fast enough to catch up in floor count. He says let's go and passes through the portal, expecting another manageable floor. The transfer sends him through a bonfire room and then into a lush jungle so hot and humid that he immediately feels this floor is different. The trial briefing welcomes him to the savage Ahoy continent, and bluntly says that survival here depends on caution, not bravery. Then the real requirement lands. Ho-Jae has to survive in this jungle for 25 full days. Before he can even adjust to that, the system disables his inventory, and Ho-Jae realizes he has entered a survival floor with no sword, no shield, and nothing in hand. He immediately blames himself for getting careless and stepping into a hell difficulty survival map without proper gear. The next realization is worse. There is no return portal, no failure condition, and with the round already underway he cannot possibly finish a full 25-day clear right now. Ho-Jae explodes in frustration at Kirikiri for not warning him, because he now understands this floor will strand him through the end of the round and force a proper clear later. Once the anger settles, Ho-jae forces himself to think like a survivor and starts listing the basics: secure shelter, stay safe first, and find food. He also starts wondering what lives here, because the enemies could be anything from territorial beasts to something far stranger. Then he grabs at one harsher possibility. If he can erase every threat fast enough, maybe a conquest clear could get him out early. A shrill roar cuts through the jungle before he can plan further, and a massive shadow suddenly swallows the area above him. When Ho-jae turns, he finds two building-sized dinosaur-like predators already tearing into each other, and both of them look unmistakably carnivorous. Their fight turns grotesque fast as huge claws rip flesh open, and so much blood sprays into the air that it starts raining through the jungle. Then one monster starts gathering blazing energy in its mouth, and Ho-jae instantly realizes whatever comes next is too dangerous to watch from nearby. Ho-jae bolts through the jungle just as the creature unleashes real fire breath, and the resulting collision shakes the ground behind him. With blood raining down and the jungle shaking behind him, Ho-jae drops any sane idea of a quick conquest clear and realizes he needs information before anything else. After a long sprint through the jungle, Ho-jae finally gets far enough from the two rampaging fake dragons to stop and catch his breath against a tree. The moment he calms down, the real problem hits him. With his inventory sealed, he has no food, no water, and not even a basic weapon to lean on. Ho-jae forces himself into survival mode and decides to save any fruit he finds for emergencies, because eating unknown plants carelessly could poison him when he has no antidotes. He settles on meat as the safest food source and is relieved that his old poison-resistant skill might keep one bad mistake from killing him outright. For a second he considers going back for dragon meat, but he quickly talks himself out of it because the survivor and every scavenger in the jungle would be waiting there too. He chooses the safer move and keeps putting distance between himself and the battlefield before anything smaller and nastier catches his scent. After walking even longer, his sharp alertness starts to wear down under the jungle's miserable heat, humidity, grass, and endless bugs. Just as the jungle starts grinding on his nerves, a message window pops up from Lee Hyungjin on the 3rd floor. Ho-jae takes the excuse to rest and tells Hyungjin he is not busy yet, even though he knows this floor is about to get ugly. When Hyungjin asks what the 12th floor is like, Ho-jae answers bluntly and admits the inventory is locked. He goes into more detail to satisfy Hyungjin's curiosity, but the honest explanation lands harder than he expected. Hyungjin replies that maybe he should never come this far, and Ho-jae realizes his younger friend is genuinely shaken instead of just impressed. Trying to pull him out of that mood, Ho-jae changes the subject and asks how the lower floor newcomers are doing. Hyungjin says the newbies are frustrated on the 1st floor, but he is keeping them from rushing ahead and getting themselves killed. When Ho-jae asks about him directly, Hyungjin admits he is delaying the 3rd floor boss because he does not trust himself to cross the cloud bridge safely. Ho-jae can tell Hyungjin's confidence has dipped, so he keeps his answer simple and tells him to stay safe and keep going. After the chat ends, Ho-jae reflects that Hyungjin is usually warm, careful, and steady enough to guide the other hell difficulty challengers better than he can. That is exactly why seeing Hyungjin depressed bothers him, and he decides to talk with him properly during the next day of Great Harmony if he gets the chance. He even thinks of dragging Kim Min-hyuk into that conversation, because comforting people is not his strong suit. He cuts that train of thought short, and forces himself back to the immediate problem. He needs a safe camp if this floor is really about long-term survival. Ho-jae weighs his options and narrows his camp choices to a riverbank, a cave, or the top of an unusually huge tree. He quickly rejects the river as predator territory and a cave as too hard to find, leaving a treetop camp as the only realistic answer. The plan immediately runs into another wall, because in this packed jungle he has no clear way to scout for a giant tree without wandering blind. He knows the easiest answer would be flying up for a better view, but exposing himself in open air could get him killed by anything that hunts the sky. Before he can decide, Ho-jae hears a barely audible set of careful footsteps somewhere to his left. He keeps his body still and confirms the sound is real, not insects or leaves, which means something is stalking him on purpose. When he still sees nothing, Ho-jae realizes the enemy is invisible and instantly triggers battle focus. Instead of panicking, he waits for the hidden attacker to step into range so the ambush can go the other way. The instant he feels the target close enough, Ho-jae lashes out with a mana-edged hand and slices something he still cannot fully see. The invisible predator shrieks and reveals itself as a grotesque orangutan-like monster with mantis sides and a beaked, saber-toothed mouth. Now that he can see it, Ho-jae is almost pleased, because the cut confirms his counter worked exactly the way he hoped. He tries talking to the creature instead, testing whether the babble effect lets it understand him, but the monster only grows more agitated. When words fail, Ho-jae gives up on diplomacy and steps in to end the fight by force. The monster rushes him head-on, but without its invisibility trick it feels no more dangerous than a wild animal. Ho-jae blocks one side with mana, cuts into the creature with the other hand, and starts dismantling it piece by piece. He kicks the monster down, pins it underfoot, severs its other shoulder to stop the sides, and beats the struggle out of it. Once it finally goes still, Ho-jae tries to start an interrogation, but he immediately remembers he has no potions to keep the thing alive. Before dying, the monster suddenly throws back its head and screams one clear message into the jungle: revenge. A chorus of matching shrieks answers from the distance, and Ho-Jae realizes there are dozens more of them out there. The creature dies under him, and Ho-Jae is left with the same ugly truth on every front. He knows nothing about the enemy, the terrain, or the odds, so running is the only smart move. Ho-Jae runs through the 12th floor jungle, already cursing the hell difficulty floor, because the orangutans refuse to let him stop moving for even a moment. He has already killed every orangutan that rushed him, but each death only brought more of them running, trapping him in an endless chain of fights. Once the orangutans learned he was stronger, they stopped charging blindly and switched to a cruel hunting pattern instead. They keep their distance, scream to shred his nerves, and send 1 or 2 attackers at a time just to ruin his focus and rest. By the end of the first day, Ho-Jae is forced to abandon the area because the smart, fast monsters will not let him settle anywhere. He realizes the real problem is not raw power but the floor itself, because even the jungle monsters casually use skills like the dinosaurs did before. He has already seen one orangutan turn invisible and another use strength boosts and wind attacks, so every ambush now feels unpredictable. Another hidden orangutan springs into his path, but Ho-Jae was expecting it. He drives his right hand straight through the monster's chest and drops the first ambusher in one brutal counter. A second orangutan rushes in late, and Ho-Jae kicks it away before it can capitalize on the trap. When the fallen monster's sides scrape the ground in black sparks, Ho-Jae realizes this ambush group had another electricity-based skill mixed in. He decapitates it with a man-edged hand and keeps running, too fed up to savor another clean kill. After killing well over 100 of them, he still cannot even tell how many are left because they only show up in tiny hunting groups. Through a gap in the canopy, he finally spots a huge cliff and latches onto it as his best chance to break their formation. He bets the blade-armed orangutans will struggle to climb it, so if he can just reach the top, he might finally shake them. But the jungle keeps warping his sense of distance, and even after another full day of harassment, the cliff still feels maddeningly far away. By the second day, Ho-Jae has gone without food, water, or sleep, and the constant pursuit has even robbed him of basic human dignity. He finally shouts at the orangutans with Soul Cry, bitterly demanding whether they plan to take responsibility if he ends up crapping his pants. The taunt does nothing, because the orangutans already learned to stay just outside Soul Cry's range after he used it to wipe out the closer groups. As the ambushes keep coming, he realizes the orangutans are not just coordinated but operating like a layered military encirclement. There are traps on his route, timed attacks from branches, and distant screamers pressuring him from every side. He has already tried escaping with sudden direction changes and wind-assisted movement, but every route fails because the circle around him is complete. When he counts at least 4 layers of pursuers in a jungle where nobody should see 10 meters ahead, Ho-Jae starts looking for the hidden reason behind it. He concludes that some skill users must be acting like a control tower, scouting from above and relaying commands to the whole hunting pack. That theory explains the nightmare, but it also tells him he probably cannot break out of the formation by force alone. So he sorts his options fast: find their commander, risk a long high-altitude escape, or make everything hinge on the cliff. He immediately throws out the first 2 choices, because he cannot find the control tower and flying high could attract something even worse than the orangutans. That leaves one plan, and Ho-Jae commits to reaching the cliff no matter how much the jungle tries to swallow him first. In the middle of that chase, a message window pops up from Kim Min-hook asking if he is busy. Ho-Jae snaps back that he obviously is, and keeps fighting even while replying. Without breaking stride, he nails a hiding orangutan with a thrown rock as if swatting away one more irritation. Kim Min-hook only says he found some strange information and will explain later, leaving Ho-Jae irritated and with no time to care. At last the cliff really does start looming close, and Ho-Jae feels the first real opening he has had in 2 days. He starts burning blink charges to climb faster while dodging the last desperate suicide attacks below. Then he activates Talaria's wings in midair and finally lifts free of the jungle trap. For one brief moment, he feels genuinely free and throws the screaming monsters a last rude fist gesture on the way up. He reaches the cliff top expecting safety and instead finds an open field packed with an enormous orangutan army waiting for him. As he lands and counts the scale of it, the trap becomes clear. There are thousands here, including much larger variants than the ones that chased him below. He thinks he can still just fly away again, right up until the lead orangutan swings its arm and seals Talaria's wings on the spot. The whole field erupts in triumph and roars, and Ho-Jae has to admit the orangutans really did read him and prepare the perfect counter. Even faced with 3,000 enemies and a sealed escape skill, Ho-Jae instantly decides this is still a battle he cannot lose. He opens with Soul Steel, the skill that made mass battles his specialty, and starts draining the entire crowd at once. At the same time, his new Perseverance passive finally gets the perfect test, because he is outnumbered, exhausted, and standing at the worst possible disadvantage. When a few orangutans hesitate and start to back off, Ho-Jae slams them with Soul Cry so none of them can run from the slaughter he has chosen. The monsters answer with a storm of mid-range skill attacks, trying to bury him under numbers and magic at the same time. He reads the trajectories with battle focus, blinks through the gap, and plunges straight into the densest part of the army. From there, his mana-coated hands turn into meat grinders, cutting orangutans apart faster than the crowd can react. Every kill feeds him back through soul steel, so the longer the massacre goes on, the more sustainable it becomes for him alone. By the time the battle ends, not a single orangutan is left standing on the field. Light rain starts falling as Ho-Jae washes blood from his face and grimly notes that the whole place is going to stink soon. He decides to leave before the smell and danger get worse, then grabs a severed orangutan leg from the bodies as he goes. Only after the ceiling caster dies does Talaria's wings come back, letting Ho-Jae jump off the cliff and glide away from the massacre site. After gliding for about 10 minutes, he lands back near the jungle zone where all this started, just far enough to breathe again. Now that the fight is over, all the obvious needs crash back in at once: food, sleep, water, a camp, and total exhaustion. But after 2 days of being hunted without a break, Ho-Jae decides there is still one emergency that outranks everything else. He needs to poop first. In a brutal downpour, Ho-Jae keeps dragging himself through the 12th floor jungle with barely any strength left, even after Soul Steel gave him only a little stamina back. To keep from collapsing, he starts butchering the severed orangutan leg by hand as he walks, slicing off ugly chunks of flesh with mana-coated fingers. He forces himself to chew the raw meat, but the smell, blood, and slime are so vile that every bite feels like punishment. He still tries to swallow it because he has been moving for 4 straight days without food or sleep and knows he cannot afford to be picky. As he trudges on, Ho-Jae bitterly complains to Kiri in his head for never warning him that the inventory would be sealed on this floor. What keeps him moving is one solid hope. Before leaving the cliff, he spotted a monster duck into a hidden cave and marked it as a possible shelter. The miserable march gets even worse when the rain-soaked raw meat and the memory of his stormy bathroom break finally turn his stomach. He spits everything out, looks at the chewed mess in disgust, and admits that this is beyond what he can stomach. In the end, his last bit of human pride beats desperation, and he throws the orangutan meat away instead of carrying that revolting thing any farther. After rinsing the fat and blood taste from his mouth with rainwater, Ho-Jae finally understands the 12th floor is testing survival judgment, not just fighting strength. By the time the rain finally eases, he reaches the hidden cave and immediately recognizes it as the first decent shelter he has found. The cave is dry because it slopes upward into the hill, but Ho-Jae still has to evict the creature hiding inside before he can claim it. He throws a rock and shouts into the darkness that this cave is his now. A strange upright beast finally answers the challenge, crawling out like a giant weasel or otter with electricity crackling around its front claws. Ho-Jae immediately uses Soul Steel, but the beast's crackling claws and the standing water around them make him pause, because one bad move could get him electrocuted. When the beast roars and charges straight in, Ho-Jae drops the overthinking and decides to kill it before it can get close. He slams it aside with Talaria's wing, using the magic-resistant wing as a safer weapon before the electrified beast can reach his body. Before it can recover, Ho-Jae uses Blink to finish the old combo and hurl the monster hard enough to stick it into a distant tree. With the cave owner dead and a little stamina recovered from Soul Steel, Ho-Jae decides he needs some answer to electricity before it catches him off guard again. Inside, the cave turns out far better than expected: roomy, dry, warm, and almost comfortable after the nightmare outside. That relief lasts one heartbeat before battle focus snaps on, because Ho-Jae hears movement inside the cave and knows something else is here. Even after adding sensory boosts, he still cannot pin down the hidden enemy and realizes he may already have stepped past a stealth ambush. He slows his breathing and waits inside that sharpened awareness until a tiny disturbance finally gives the attacker away. A palm-sized baby version of the electric beast suddenly launches at his face, and Ho-Jae catches it on reflex before it can bite him. Realizing that grabbing it was a bad idea, he immediately cuts its head off with his mana-wrapped right hand. The baby still rakes a long wound across the back of his hand, proving how dangerous even newborn monsters here can be. The wound closes fast thanks to natural healing power and super regeneration, and Ho-Jae immediately remembers the ugly catch: healing burns stamina. Already running on fumes with no stamina potions left, he suddenly goes pale and dizzy as the healing cost hits all at once. Full of late regrets about the meat, the rain, and pushing too far, Ho-Jae uses a safety skill and collapses onto the cave floor to rest. When he wakes, the first thing he sees is idolatrous sitting near the entrance on guard and calling him hubby again while offering food. Still flat on the ground, Ho-Jae throws a pebble at her tail and grumbles that he told her not to call him that. Heidi tells him he slept for 3 hours, which shocks Ho-Jae because he normally cannot sleep even 10 minutes in a dangerous place. That rare rest makes him deeply grateful he summoned Idaltaru, because on this floor a trustworthy guard and companion matter almost as much as raw combat power. Ho-Jae reflects on how their bond changed from her furious marriage obsession on the 5th floor to a strange, but genuine partnership after he explained human boundaries and eventually surpassed her in strength. Then Heidi hands him thin slices of raw meat, and Ho-Jae's first reaction is pure dread when he realizes it is not jerky. Heidi bluntly tells him to treat it like tartare, and this time he finds the raw meat surprisingly edible because she prepared the baby lamburu properly. Hoping for answers, Ho-Jae asks about this place, but Heidi can only admit she does not know because her tutorial-related memories are still blotted out. When she asks for the clearing goal, Ho-jae explains the stage rules and admits he does not have enough time left in the round to simply wait out a safe clear. So instead of rushing an impossible clear, Ho-jae decides to use the remaining time to grow stronger and figure out how focused effort really works. Heidi agrees, and together they decide to turn the cave area into their territory by hunting down the dangerous monsters nearby one by one. Heidi warns that active hunting could draw stronger predators, but Ho-jae judges the risk worth taking in a jungle this huge. They postpone the first hunt until daylight, and Ho-jae spends the rest of the night quietly cycling Mana Circuit while Heidi guards the cave. By morning he has made no visible progress with focused effort, but Heidi is already calling him outside like she has been busy all night. Outside, Ho-jae finds the whole entrance transformed with hidden traps, sharpened stakes, pits, and powder made from leaves that repel jungle animals. He is genuinely stunned that she built all of this in one night with no tools, and Heidi basks in the praise with obvious pride. Not long after setting out, they already bring down a grotesque boar-like monster, and Ho-jae realizes Heidi is far more skilled at hunting than he expected. Heidi explains that being shunned by her own kind forced her to survive by hunting alone, and Ho-jae answers her dark past with exaggerated praise that still makes her happy. Instead of hauling the kill back, they deliberately leave the carcass ripped open so the blood smell will lure nearby threats to them. Ho-jae then switches their roles on purpose. He wants to handle tracking himself while Heidi takes the fighting, because he needs search skills badly. The reason is simple. The orangutans tracked him too well, and the cave ambush proved that stealth and invisibility are now threats he cannot afford to leave unanswered. So Heidi begins teaching him real hunting from the ground up, starting with routes, territory signs, tracks, droppings, and how to hide his own presence. She also teaches him to use mana more delicately, both to suppress his movement and to spread a thin layer around himself to feel the area beyond normal senses. It starts rough, because his mana comes out too thick and visible, but he keeps refining it until he can finally spread it smoothly and sense what is around him. 2 weeks pass with the cave as their base, and Ho-jae steadily hunts the surrounding monsters while drilling those new survival skills. By the end of that stretch, the work finally pays off with clear gains. Mana Circuit reaches level 11, detection appears at level 3, and stealth rises to level 11. Deep in the 12th floor jungle, Heidi calmly drops a charging giant monster with one precise spear thrust, and Ho-jae realizes she is still growing frighteningly fast. After 2 non-stop weeks of hunting, they decide the area around their cave is finally safe enough to stop pushing deeper for now. Heidi cheerfully calls the cave home, and Ho-jae decides he can finally stay put and focus on training instead of survival alone. On the walk back, Ho-jae asks Heidi to teach him her spear techniques because he knows raw talent alone has left blind spots in his fighting style. Instead of answering, Heidi abruptly leaves the cave, and Ho-jae is left nervously wondering if he just broke some serious rule. While he waits, Ho-jae settles onto Heidi's cushion and quietly trains Mana Circuit and Detection together, squeezing practice out of every spare minute. This time he pushes Detection further, locking onto a tiny bug on the ceiling until its shape starts resolving in his mind like a mana scan. He activates Battle Focus and forces the skin even deeper until he can sense tiny hairs on the insect's legs, but the strain immediately punishes him with a nosebleed and pounding pain. Before he can recover, Heidi calls him outside with bright excitement, and his nervous wait turns into sudden hope. Outside, Heidi proudly hands him a rough wooden practice spear she carved herself, making it clear she fully intends to teach him. Ho-jae jokes that her talent deserves the nickname Idiomong, and Heidi turns away shyly even while obviously delighted by the praise. Heidi proves to be a superb teacher, patiently building from the basics until Ho-jae starts grasping the real theory behind footwork, spear use, and combat flow. The lessons pay off fast, and Ho-jae's spear skill appears while his hand-to-hand and swordsmanship also rise from the same training. As they banter after training, Heidi praises his absurd growth rate but also bluntly adds that he is underhanded, dirty, and a little too arrogant. Their strange domestic life gets even stranger when Ho-jae earns a cooking skill just by helping prepare dinner in the middle of held difficulty. Heidi immediately crushes his fantasy of overpowered cooking buffs, but the meal she serves still feels unbelievably luxurious for a place like this. Days pass in a surprisingly good rhythm of training, good food, and relaxed patrols, and Ho-jae realizes his bitterness about the 12th floor has almost completely vanished. That calm routine ends at midnight when the system announces the day of great harmony and the force-summoned timer starts ticking again. A little later, Ho-jae asks if Heidi wants to come with him, and even though the event will probably be boring for her, she chooses to go anyway. They arrive in Kirikiri's green field and find the mess already under control, with Park Young-ah viciously punishing the people who caused the gathering in the first place. Ho-jae keeps his distance to avoid stirring things up, but the punishment drags on so long that even he starts looking painfully bored. When Park Young-ah moves from beating people to shredding them with a long military-style lecture, Ho-jae decides he and Heidi are leaving before they get dragged in. They nearly slip out unnoticed, but Park Young-ah spots Ho-jae mid-rant, and the whole crowd turns toward him at once. Ho-jae awkwardly salutes Park Young-ah from a distance, then hurries off with Heidi the second he gets the chance. Back where his inventory finally works again, Ho-jae happily opens it and pulls out his long-missed reward item, a self-setting magic tent from the 9th floor. The spacious tent becomes their shelter at once, and Ho-jae sinks into a chair feeling almost offended that he could not bring discomfort into the 12th floor. Kim Min-hook drops by, and the easy mood gives way to talk about Park Young-ah's harsh discipline and how dangerous her perfectionism could become if nobody reins it in. Kim Min-hook agrees he is already watching her, and then he reveals he called in the Blitz user Ho-jae wanted for a new round of resistance training. The guest turns out to be Lee Jun-suk, a shy middle school boy from hard difficulty who is somehow more intimidated by Ho-jae than by the giant lizard man sitting next to him. Ho-jae gets straight to the point and asks Jun-suk to fire Blitz into his arm, shocking the boy almost as much as the spell itself. To keep his arm from jerking away, Ho-jae has ID tie it to the chair, and he tells Jun-suk to raise the voltage even more. While electricity tears into his arm, Ho-jae casually asks what caused this great harmony day, and Kim Min-hook explains it was a drug ring on the 30th floor of easy difficulty. Kim Min-hook says the order solved it the usual way, by planting an infiltrator deep enough to expose the whole syndicate before moving in. Ho-jae is genuinely stunned that so many people volunteer for that kind of hidden work, but Kim Min-hook insists duty, fear, and purpose are enough to keep them moving. Then the Blitz finally bites hard enough to char Ho-jae's arm black, and the day of great harmony healing wipes the damage away in seconds. Ho-jae treats the whole thing as useful data, explaining he needs Blitz resistance badly for the 12th floor, where too many enemies can lock up his body with it. Kim Min-hook is even more disturbed when Ho-jae reveals he has been running Mana Circuit the entire time while taking the shocks. Before the conversation can drift any further, Park Jan-sik barges into the tent with the easy swagger of someone used to running hard difficulty. The broad-shouldered hard difficulty manager settles in and says the cleanup is nearly done, so the leaders need to hold their meeting soon. Soon the core members of the order file into Ho-jae's tent, and even he instinctively straightens up once the room fills with people and attention. Park Young-ah opens the meeting by reviewing the drug case, how it was handled, and what they need to do to stop a repeat. The routine reports finish, and Kim Min-hook deliberately shifts the mood by announcing one piece of huge news. Lee Chan-young has cleared the 89th floor. The room reacts in awe because everyone knows what Lee Chan-young's climb means. He is their best chance to reach the 100th floor first and carry proof to the outside world that they are still alive. During the day of the Great Harmony, the order gathers in a tent to prepare messages for Lee Chan-young to carry outside before he clears the 100th floor. They remind everyone why this matters. Information only comes into the tutorial, and nobody outside even knows the missing people are here. The first concrete plan is simple and urgent. Send out a list of the players' names, their families' addresses, and the messages they want delivered home. Then Park Young-ah pushes the room into heavier territory by saying the Korean government must be told about the tutorial and made to recognize the order's authority. The room pushes back immediately, because once the government learns about them, it will probably try to absorb the order instead of treating it as an equal power. Park Young-ah answers with the order's harsh logic. Anyone who enters the tutorial, even a president, must obey their law or be punished like everyone else. Ho-jae understands the hidden threat right away. If the government refuses to recognize the order, any official who later enters the tutorial could be executed on sight. The tent erupts again, and Ho-jae finally cuts the issue off before it can spiral any further. The next topic turns practical again when they discuss starting weapons and how badly survival odds change depending on that first choice. They focus on one glaring shortage. There are far too few healers, because terrified newcomers almost never choose the weak-looking staff when their life is on the line. So they decide the outside world should be warned in advance that healers are desperately needed, at least on the easier difficulties. At the same time, Ho-jae bluntly warns that nobody should pick healer on hard or hell, where early solo stages are basically death traps. That leads Ho-jae to an even harsher idea. Maybe people should be stopped from entering hell difficulty at all. Kim Min-hyuk is the only one willing to push back, arguing that even if hell is a slaughterhouse, shutting it off completely might hurt them in the long run. Ho-jae shelves that problem too, and the meeting drags on through more strategy talk. Just when everyone thinks they are done, Kim Min-hyuk drops a fresh concern. A manager hinted that some new event is coming, and it is not the day of the Great Harmony. Because nobody knows what the event is, the order decides that everyone should start gathering information about it whenever they clear a stage. The mystery keeps the talk alive even longer, and Ho-jae ends up speaking more than usual until the whole room is worn out. At last Park Young-ah formally closes the meeting and starts dismissing everyone by rank and duty. Most people leave looking relieved, but Ho-jae and the other top leaders stay behind because one last awkward issue still has to be handled. When Park Young-ah tries to leave, Park Jan-sik stops her and drags out the real subject, the problem with how she treats Ho-jae. The problem is not rudeness but the opposite. As commander, Park Young-ah still treats Ho-jae like someone above her, and that threatens the order's chain of command. They explain that if she keeps acting like Ho-jae outranks her, the whole order could start treating him as the true authority above everyone else. Park Young-ah panics at the suggestion that she should relax around Ho-jae, or even treat him like a subordinate, because she still sees him as a heroic figure she cannot casually approach. After Kim Min-hyuk's long lecture, she finally agrees to try speaking to Ho-jae more casually. Then comes the truly painful part, because Park Jong-sik makes her practice right there in front of Ho-jae. Park Young-ah tries to call him more casually, but she turns bright red and can barely get the words out. Park Jong-sik and Kim Min-hyuk find the sight hilarious, while Ho-jae gets embarrassed right along with her. Even Id, who had seemed to sleep on the side, makes a little sound and becomes part of the room's awkward comedy. The day of the great harmony finally wraps up, and Ho-jae counts the whole mess a success mostly because Park Young-ah's problem was at least exposed. Even after agreeing to change, Park Young-ah only gets more awkward around Ho-jae and starts outright running away from him. That leaves Ho-jae with another problem, because Id is openly upset that he ignored her all day while dealing with everyone else. By then only Ho-jae, Id, and Kim Min-hyuk are left in the tent, and the mood finally shifts from politics to downtime. Ho-jae notices Kim Min-hyuk quietly carving wood with a knife, and the sight is odd enough to spark a lighter conversation. Their joking about hobbies turns serious for a moment, when Ho-jae remembers he only picked up sewing because isolation and self-harm were pushing his mind into a dangerous place. Ho-jae explains that routines, checking the community, and hobby time were the simple methods that kept him from breaking completely in the tutorial. Kim Min-hyuk admits his own reason is much simpler. He bought a house in the 30th floor residential district, and is carving decorations because store-bought furnishings cost too many points. Soon the break ends, and Ho-jae calls Lee Jun-suk over to ask about the 12th floor's Aoi continent, and use the chance to train him too. When he hears Lee Jun-suk's mana circuit is stuck at level 3, Ho-jae immediately decides this is the perfect time to use a rare item. Ho-jae hands him a special leather bracelet from the 10th floor, a precious item that raises mana circuit by 1 level just by wearing it. He explains the trick behind it. If Jun-suk experiences higher level mana control through the bracelet, he can push his real skill upward much faster on his own. Lee Jun-suk instantly takes the deal, especially after Ho-jae tells him he seems like the most talented of the younger members. Kim Min-hyuk watches the whole exchange like Ho-jae is selling snake oil, and the mood turns more serious when Ho-jae brings up Lee Hyungjin's fragile state on Hell's 3rd floor. Min-hyuk advises Ho-jae not to force a talk with Lee Hyungjin, because comfort from someone who cleared that floor so easily would probably miss the mark. With no better idea, Ho-jae gives up on meddling and drifts back into boredom while Kim Min-hyuk calmly resumes carving. Later, as round 14 nears its end, Ho-jae stands outside his cave and realizes the place he built has started to feel like a real home. Inside and out, the cave carries Id's touch, and that lived-in warmth hits Ho-jae harder than the apartment he had before entering the tutorial ever did. When Ho-jae says it out loud, Id gently agrees and reveals that this cave is the first real home she has ever had. Id tells him she never lived among her own kind and survived alone in the forest, moving from place to place each night without ever settling anywhere. She adds that the stage she barely remembers was just another prison, so in her eyes Ho-jae truly brought her out and gave her a place to belong. Ho-jae wants to comfort her, but all he can think about is Kiri-Kiri's answer that another idolater would exist without ever having met him, which leaves him frustrated and speechless. Before he can say anything, system messages appear and confirm the result of his 12th floor run. He failed to clear Hell difficulty but still earned a bonus reward. The extra reward surprises him, because instead of points the system gives Ho-jae a new skill, Poison LV.1. Id assumes they will simply spend 3 days in the waiting room, but Ho-jae corrects her and says he plans to stretch the break into 9 days by repeating the 12th floor and using the bonfire too. He has no intention of wasting a stage this useful, because the 12th floor gives him time, solo jungle prey, and room to train without hunting down targets or stopping some huge disaster. And Ho-jae ends on a clear goal before moving on. Before he leaves that floor for good, he intends to hunt down the fake dragons. Back on the 60th floor, Lee Ho-jae relaxes with the silver hatchling on his lap and tries to convince the little dragon to eat a healthier fairy worm instead of stealing his steak. Ho-jae realizes Yong-yong is not truly picky at all. The hatchling just copies everything he does, right down to what he eats, where he sits, and even pretending to read the community. He considers eating the fairy worm himself so Yong-yong will copy him, then gives up because forcing the little dragon feels wrong. A community chat from Park Young-ah cuts in, and she instantly loses patience when she learns Ho-jae named a dragon hatchling Yong-yong. Ho-jae defends the name, but Young-ah warns that other dragons would take it as an insult, and pushes him to choose something proper before the hatchling grows rebellious. When Ho-jae insists the hatchling does not hate its own name, Yong-yong suddenly turns serious and seems to say the opposite with one offended look. Young-ah asks whether the hatchling can even cry for naming inspiration, and Ho-jae casually reveals that this baby dragon does not cry at all. He follows that up with an even stranger reveal. Yong-yong already speaks human language, and the hatchling instantly protests when Ho-jae teases its pronunciation. Once Young-ah gives up and starts gathering name ideas from the whole Korean server, Ho-jae finds himself dragged into a full-blown naming contest. The first serious candidate, Lee Shin, gets rejected immediately because Yong-yong says it is too short. When Ho-jae calls the hatchling cute, Yong-yong indignantly refuses that too and insists on being mighty instead. A longer dragon-like name finally lands. Rayakones makes Yong-yong's eyes shine, and Ho-jae decides to rename the hatchling on the spot. The problem gets worse when another cool name arrives, because Yong wants both and refuses to let any favorite go. That spirals into disaster, and Yong ends up with an absurdly long ceremonial name that leaves Ho-jae baffled but the hatchling completely ecstatic. While the hatchling is still blissed out over the new name, Ho-jae finally slips a fairy worm into its mouth and wins the feeding battle without a fight. Young-ah accepts the ridiculous result, then changes the subject and asks Ho-jae to talk to Lee Jun-suk, who still refuses to leave the tutorial even after reaching the 90th floor years ago. Ho-jae knows exactly why this matters. Lee Jun-suk is a rare hard-mode talent backed by the Order of Vigilance, and even the Korean government, yet he keeps stalling on purpose. The more Ho-jae thinks about it, the clearer the answer becomes. Lee Jun-suk is not staying for ordinary growth anymore, but chasing some foolish goal tied to Ho-jae himself. He agrees to talk to Jun-suk later, but before he can plan what to say, the mana inside his body suddenly starts moving the wrong way again. Ho-jae reacts instantly by casting a barrier over Yong and forcing the runaway mana to gather above his raised right hand instead of exploding through the room. Even contained, the surge wrecks the 60th floor residence, leaving broken walls and a collapsed ceiling as Ho-jae struggles to calm the power down. Once the mana settles, Ho-jae admits the worst truth underneath it. What keeps leaking out is his buried rage at being trapped, waiting, and unable to move forward. He mentally crushes those violent urges back down, imagining them sealed under layers of cold restraint until the hatchling can finally drift back to sleep. The ugly feeling still lingers, so Ho-jae starts singing badly in the ruined building just to hold himself together, even though it wakes Yong up again. Chapter 68 opens in the waiting room, where Ho-jae checks the new reward from failing the 12th floor and immediately realizes poison energy is a viciously useful skill. He quickly maps out the strategy. With his speed, blink, and mobility, he can poison enemies, retreat, and finish them after the toxin does the dirty work. Idalteru and Kazes grumble that Ho-jae is devious enough already, but he cheerfully admits underhanded combat suits him just fine. That new reward gives Ho-jae an idea. If overperforming on the 12th floor earns extra skills, repeating it could become the fastest way to build a terrifying toolkit. He is almost sold on the plan because life in the 12th floor cave felt better than rotting in the waiting room, until Idalteru reminds him that Dead Summon has a timer and only a few uses left. Even with that limit hanging over him, Ho-jae decides to go back anyway, because the 12th floor is still worth using as a brutal training ground. During the next 9 waiting days, Ho-jae throws himself into experiments by poisoning his own body over and over, using the waiting room's healing to survive the grind. The method is miserable but effective, and poison energy climbs to level 4 while great poison resistance rises with it. When Idalteru points out there will be plenty of prey to test poison on inside the stage, Ho-jae flatly rejects the idea and insists his own body is still the best test subject. They re-enter the 12th floor and, just like before, 2 mountain-sized fake dragons are already tearing into each other nearby. The sight rattles Idalteru, but Ho-jae stays focused and calmly promises he will run if a dragon hunt ever starts looking suicidal. To settle her nerves, Ho-jae takes Idalteru back to their old cave first, and she brightens immediately at the thought of rebuilding their home. Once they are settled, Ho-jae begins fresh poison trials on his own body until he finally feels the toxin break through his resistance for real. The level 4 poison finally causes sharp pain, swelling, paralysis, and breathing trouble, but Ho-jae judges it only moderately lethal and keeps pushing for more. After measuring the poison on himself, Ho-jae takes over all the hunting alone so Idalteru can focus on restoring the cave into a proper base. Those solo hunts let him refine poison energy into something more dangerous, and once that is in place, he shifts his attention to learning tracking. Following Idalteru's advice that detection will not be efficient enough, Ho-jae starts wounding prey with poison, letting it run, and tracking the trail through the jungle to build tracking fast. By repeating that routine, Ho-jae gains both the skill and the field experience to move through the jungle with far more confidence than before. Eventually he strips the entire area around the cave of prey, which means his training plan has already worked and it is time to escalate. After 11 days on the floor and with the weather patterns still matching what he memorized last time, Ho-jae decides to push much farther out for serious hunting. Idalteru is startled by the distance, but Ho-jae reveals the real scale of his plan next. He is going to burn the jungle first. To prove he means it, Ho-jae pulls out a huge bag of heat stones from his dimensional backpack and explains that 1 stone can keep a fire going all day. With 800 heat stones ready, Ho-jae ends the chapter on a chillingly practical conclusion. He has enough firepower to burn down the entire jungle. On a cliff above the jungle, Ho-jae finally gets to live out a flying fantasy, just with one embarrassing twist. He is the mount, not the rider. He crouches and calls Idalteru onto his back, and she immediately starts joking about becoming the first lizardman to ride a human. Idalteru keeps laughing and poking at him from behind, and Ho-jae snaps at her to stop messing with his arm before takeoff. To get revenge for the teasing, Ho-jae leaps off the cliff and starts the flight with a few nasty acrobatics. The sky is beautiful for about 5 seconds, and then Idalteru goes pale and admits she is about to throw up. His payback backfires immediately when Idalteru vomits all over him in midair, leaving Ho-jae disgusted and unable to complain because it was his own fault. They land by a stream so Ho-jae can wash off, change clothes, and restart the trip with much more careful flying. Idalteru quietly apologizes, and Ho-jae admits the whole mess happened because he acted childish first. Once they are airborne again, Ho-jae explains why this route is safe enough. Few large flying monsters live here, he already knows the jungle well, and Idalteru makes the pair deadly in the air. After flying for a long time, Idalteru suggests they rest and eat, still sounding careful because of the earlier incident. During the break, Ho-jae expects to force a polite compliment, but Idalteru's packed lunch is genuinely incredible. Idalteru beams like a proud caretaker while Ho-jae eats, and the easy warmth between them becomes impossible to miss. When Ho-jae casually assumes lizard men would eat raw food, Idalteru calls him out and reminds him that other intelligent races have their own cultures too. She pushes the lesson further, warning him that not every being he meets from here on will be an enemy, so careless words could become real disrespect. Ho-jae apologizes properly, and Idalteru brushes it off with a laugh, pleased that he actually took her nagging to heart. As they sit together, Ho-jae quietly realizes Idalteru has become far more than an ally to him. She feels like family. A system message from the god of adventure pops up as if it approves of that thought, and Ho-jae's test progress jumps forward. 2 days later, they reach the far eastern edge of the 12th floor, where Ho-jae confirms the invisible boundary wall with his own hand and mana. Ho-jae studies the dry weather and the east-to-west wind, realizes the conditions are perfect, and tells Idalteru it is time to begin. Idalteru pulls out heat stones from their bag, and Ho-jae orders her to smash them into the trees and grass to start a controlled inferno. The first throws ignite fast, and the jungle begins to burn hard enough that even Idalteru can feel the heat surge. They pull farther away and watch the wildfire spread, and Ho-jae is openly thrilled by how huge and effective the blaze becomes. Ho-jae gets carried away and orders Idalteru to throw even more heat stones so the whole forest will burn faster. The wildfire starts feeding him experience immediately, and Ho-jae is delighted when level-up messages begin appearing from the damage done across the jungle. Soon the eastern jungle becomes a full firestorm, and monster screams echo under a sky turning black with smoke. From above, Ho-jae watches entire herds stampede west in panic, all of them too desperate to fight each other while the blaze chases them. A few monsters with water abilities stay behind to resist the flames, so Ho-jae decides those firebreaks have to be killed personally. Idalteru proves exactly why this team works when she skewers one of those monsters in a single devastating dive-by strike. As wounded and trapped monsters are swallowed by the fire below, Idalteru admits the sight still feels wrong to her because forests used to be home. Ho-jae brushes that concern aside with cold logic. Once they clear the stage, this jungle will not be their home anymore anyway. Then a gigantic Brachiosaurus-like monster appears near the inferno, roaring as it tries to hold the fire back with a barrier skill. Ho-jae immediately decides this huge target is worth hunting and tells Idalteru to hand him his old backsword. As they circle the giant from a safe distance, Ho-jae sizes up the fight and wishes he had a proper spear for enemies this big. He opens with soul steel instead of a direct charge, deciding to wear the monster down while stealing its vitality from the air. The giant finally turns its full attention on them, and Ho-jae even taunts it out loud because he knows it can understand him. With the beast distracted, Ho-jae swings them behind it and orders the first real attack. Their combined strike should have landed cleanly, but the monster snaps up a barrier at the last second and blocks both weapons. The giant whips around faster than something that size should move, forcing Ho-jae into evasive aerial maneuvers just to stay alive. Even after that failed pass, Ho-jae stays calm because the matchup is still in his favor. The beast cannot both save its burning home and catch flyers it cannot pin down. He commits to the grind, planning to keep attacking from blind spots until the active barrier fails just once. When the monster finally turns back toward the flames, Ho-jae launches a second pass and blinks through its tail strike to get close. The barrier stops several more hits, but Ho-jae keeps sliding along the giant's body instead of breaking off. That persistence finally pays off near the legs, where both weapons cut through real flesh before the barrier can catch up again. They disengage cleanly, laughing as the giant roars behind them, because Idalteru's poison is already spreading through the wound. The giant chases them in fury for a few minutes, but that only wastes the last time it had to save its habitat from the fire. By the time it gives up the chase, the poison and repeated wounds have ruined its legs, and Ho-jae knows the fight is already over. The giant lets out one last anguished roar, loses the strength to move, and crashes helplessly to the ground. Ho-jae refuses to leave the kill to the fire after half a day of work, so he and Idalteru swoop down to finish it themselves. He drives the sword between the beast's eyes and takes the experience for the kill himself. More level-up messages and a burst of godly reactions confirm the hunt was unusual enough to draw serious attention. Looking at the corpse, Ho-jae realizes these giant beasts were never meant to be easy prey at all. He only won by flying, kiting, and turning the wildfire into a trap. The smoke and heat are getting rough on both of them, especially Idalteru, so Ho-jae flies them up and away to recover. Idalteru asks what comes next, and Ho-jae says they will find a safe place, eat, rest, and maybe even sleep before continuing. Then Idalteru asks the obvious follow-up, and Ho Jae's answer is simple. After they rest, they are going to set even more fires. As the wildfire keeps spreading, Heidi looks back at the burning cave and quietly says their home is gone too. Ho Jae realizes the fire is spreading even faster than planned because the jungle is dry, the wind is pushing west, and nothing here is organized enough to stop it. The plan is working almost too well, and that makes Ho Jae more nervous because hell difficulty should not feel this smooth. Then he hears Heidi's voice break, and he realizes she is crying over the home they built together. Ho Jae panics harder over Heidi's tears than over the monsters, but he cannot think of a single decent thing to say. He even thinks about asking Kim Min Hyuk for relationship advice, then gives up because doing that in front of Heidi would look awful. Before the awkward silence can get worse, a fire-breathing bogus dragon bursts in and saves him from the conversation. Ho Jae immediately tells Heidi to kill the dragon first and talk later, and she wipes away her gloom and agrees. The dragon's fire breath looks dangerous, but its attack is too obvious, so Ho Jae blinks around it and closes in cleanly. Once the dragon pauses to recover, Ho Jae stabs it over and over until soul steel and poison drain the last of its strength. The bogus dragon crashes down dead, but Ho Jae barely cares because he still has to face Heidi about their ruined home. He awkwardly explains that he only meant to burn the east, not the whole stage, and Heidi quietly says she understands it cannot be helped. Heidi stops complaining and asks for the next step, so Ho Jae decides to finish the floor by burning everything and forcing a conquest clear. By the time they reach the western boundary, the entire floor has turned into a packed nightmare of trapped monsters, screams, and rising fire. Ho Jae watches monsters desperately cooperate, burn, trample each other, and scream so clearly that the whole scene feels like true hell. Heidi hands Ho Jae another heat resistance potion, because even they can barely stand the heat this close to the full wildfire. They slip into the packed monster crowd without drawing much notice, because the trapped monsters are too panicked to care about two more bodies. For a while they quietly assassinate frightened monsters one by one, using the panic and firelight as cover. As the bodies pile up, the nearby monsters finally start glaring at them and taking real battle stances. That only excites Ho Jae, so he narrows Soul Steel onto the hostile cluster and forces every eye around him to recognize him as the enemy. Surrounded by murderous stares, Ho Jae feels a thrill instead of fear and charges straight into the monsters. He still thinks the plan is perfect. Let the fire kill from one side while he and Heidi butcher the confused survivors from the other. Then the conquest clear still does not trigger, and Heidi bluntly asks where it went while Ho Jae can only admit he has no idea. Heidi finally admits the heat is catching up to her and asks for a break. At the same moment, the monster's last firebreak collapses and a fresh wave of flames surges west again. The trapped mob stampedes into the invisible wall, crushing tens of thousands, and Ho Jae realizes staying inside that crush is suicide. He stops hunting and carries Heidi out over the flames to a section of land that has already burned down to ash. In the scorched dead zone, Ho Jae gives Heidi potions and sets up a temperature-controlled tent so she can recover. He spreads freeze potions over the burning ground just to make the ashland barely survivable, but it still feels like sitting in a sauna. When he finally crouches in the ash and thinks it through, Ho Jae can only wonder if he is now stuck waiting out the rest of the stage in a world he already burned empty. Sometime later, Ho Jae and Heidi are just flying in circles over the burned floor, hunting the occasional survivor while they wait for something to happen. Heidi gets used to flying, not because she likes it, but because the ash-covered ground is too bleak and unsettling to land on. Then Heidi breaks the routine with bad news. Their water is gone. The fire has dried up the streams and ponds, and even the remaining lake water is useless because monster corpses rotted in it. Ho Jae tells Heidi they will have to endure, but the truth is they have become stranded survivors in the wasteland he created. Food is not much better, because Ho Jae packed almost nothing and surviving monsters are now so rare that even finding meat takes all day. By the time Ho Jae finally thinks he should have just stayed in the cave and trained, Heidi's contract time is already up and she vanishes before he can even say goodbye. Ho Jae considers summoning her again, then decides against it because there is nothing left here she can fix and she would hate being dragged back. Without Heidi, even cooking becomes miserable, and Ho Jae is hit by how badly he misses the meals she used to make. Then his survival problem gets even more ridiculous. The fire burned away every leaf he used as toilet paper, and there is no water either. Clutching his stomach and digging through the bag in panic, Ho Jae finds nothing useful and realizes the situation is becoming urgent. What he finally pulls out is the handmade muffler from the second floor, the precious keepsake he named Hororong. He stares at Hororong in total anguish, torn between preserving his precious memory and preserving his human dignity. In desperation, he messages Kim Min Hyuk asking whether human dignity matters more than a precious memory, and gets brushed off instantly. With no help coming, Ho Jae hardens his heart and treats Hororong like a fallen comrade. After the grim sacrifice, Ho Jae buries Hororong in the scorched ground and gives the muffler a tiny grave with a charred wooden marker. Right in the middle of that prayer, the system suddenly announces that he has finally achieved the 12th floor conquest clear. The timing makes it worse, because the floor only cleared after the last hidden survivor finally died off on its own. Ho Jae realizes the fire did not kill every monster at once. It destroyed the whole ecosystem until the survivors eventually starved inside the sealed stage. The reward window rose in with points and a new fire element resistance skill forged from his old heat and burn resistance. Then a flood of divine reactions appears, showing that a huge number of gods were watching his brutal clear. When he checks the new skill, the description is frustratingly bare, so he can only guess how strong fire element resistance really is. With the floor finally over, Ho-jae gives one last salute to Hororong's grave and steps into the portal. The next instant, the dead Ashland is gone, and Ho-jae arrives in Kiri-Kiri's bright green field after a very long time away. Kiri-Kiri bounces over in a playful mood and immediately teases him about not crying this time either. Ho-jae says nothing back and just buys a cake from the store window, which instantly wipes the smugness off Kiri-Kiri's face. Now that he has the upper hand, Ho-jae finally complains that she should have warned him to bring toilet paper in the first place. Kiri-Kiri shamelessly admits she kept quiet because it was funnier that way, so Ho-jae immediately flies off with the cake as punishment, while she begs him to stop. After Kiri-Kiri's long crying fit finally burns out, Ho-jae gets the hell manager sitting in front of him and starts laying down rules. He makes her promise not to pull that stunt again, then buys her a jawbreaker set, and warns her to do her job properly instead of hiding useful information for fun. Kiri-Kiri sulks that he once warned her not to trust old men with candy, so Ho-jae immediately insists that does not apply because he is not old. Once the teasing settles down, Ho-jae turns serious and asks about magic because the monsters on the 12th floor fought with fire, ice, bone spikes, and even skill ceiling. Kiri-Kiri explains that most monsters only know how to trigger their skills, not the magic behind them, and she refuses to explain skill mechanisms because the subject is huge, tangled, and far too expensive to teach casually. Instead of buying impossible explanations, Ho-jae asks if he can just study from magic books himself. Kiri-Kiri warns that magic theory will be brutally hard, but with her help Ho-jae still buys 2 rare textbooks that normal players never even see in the store. He chooses 1 basic theory book and 1 book on enclosures and skill ceiling because the orangutan leader seal showed him how dangerous it is to lose a key combat skill mid-fight. Kiri-Kiri makes it clear that ceiling magic is on another level entirely, because humans cannot normally use it with their own power and only borrow it through a god's apostle skills. Even with all her pessimism, Ho-jae buys the books anyway, convinced that something this difficult might still matter later if he keeps studying. Ho-jae's confidence flares when Kiri-Kiri keeps doubting him, and he brushes it off with a simple attitude. He will judge magic study after he tries it himself. Next he asks about the strange event the Order of Vigilance has been tracking, hoping for another clue before the round ends. Kiri-Kiri admits he does not have enough information allowance left, then secretly decides to bend the rules a little because he has been feeding her cake. When she says he needs to work harder from now on, Ho-jae instantly realizes she is copying the line he once used on her, and promises to keep buying cake. Trying to hide how thrilled she is, Kiri-Kiri gives him only 2 tiny clues about the coming event, foreigner and second. Ho-jae cannot make sense of the words yet, but he decides to pass them to Kim Min-hyuk later and trust that the order can fit them into the bigger picture. Before leaving, Ho-jae stocks up on a spear, emergency food, and an absurd mountain of toilet paper, which Kiri-Kiri gleefully mocks him for. With Kiri-Kiri shouting for him to come back with more cake, Ho-jae steps onto the portal and heads for the 13th floor waiting room. Back at the 13th floor late at night, Ho-jae decides Kim Min-hyuk is probably asleep and opens the magic textbooks first. The basic theory book shocks him immediately because it is almost blank, with only 1 strange question written on the first page. Since it tells him to find the answer, Ho-jae suspects the book may reveal more only after he solves it, and decides to test that idea. To make the thinking less dull, he heads to the bonfire room and tests his new fire resistance by holding his hands over the flames while mulling over the question. Then a message snaps him out of it. Lee Hyung-jin proudly announces that he finally cleared the 3rd floor. Hyung-jin explains that the Cloud Bridge boss room was packed with mixed traps, poison arrows, and shifting temperatures, which makes his survival an even bigger breakthrough for hell difficulty challengers. Ho-jae sincerely praises him, then tells him to organize the 3rd floor boss room data for the community so they can build a proper guide later. When Hyung-jin asks about the 4th floor, Ho-jae warns him that fighting through goblin stages will be rough for someone built more like an assassin than a frontline brawler. The good news leaves Ho-jae restless, and instead of waiting around he decides to challenge the 13th floor right away. Remembering how badly the 12th floor punished carelessness, he equips full armor, weapons, and a dimensional bag before entering. He steps into the 13th floor stage, and the trial announcement appears the moment he arrives. The rules are simple but provocative. On a hidden volcanic island temple of the god of duel, Ho-jae must beat at least 15 rooms of monks who already think he mocked their lifelong art. Ho-jae immediately guesses that the insulting setup reflects the god of duel's grudge against him, which also means favored challengers probably get treated very differently here. He looks around and finds nothing but silence, stone walls, and a single wooden door marked 0, making the place feel less like a temple and more like a sealed prison. He opens room 0, follows the long dark corridor, and reaches the first numbered duel chamber. Inside room 1, A hulking red-skinned monk greets Ho-Jae with open hostility and repeats the temple's view that he is the arrogant challenger. Ho-Jae lights the room with a lantern, sizes up the unarmed monk, and asks the obvious question of why a fighter would refuse weapons and armor. The monk proudly calls weapons petty tools that block true growth, and Ho-Jae instantly decides this conversation is hopeless because to him victory is the whole point of fighting. When the monk finally says the test is simply to defeat or kill him, Ho-Jae drops the talk and moves first. He blindsides the monk with a thrown knife, knocks his balance backward, and instantly pulls a spear from inventory as he charges in. One clean thrust through the heart ends the first monk before the duel can become anything more than a lesson in bad philosophy. The next few rooms go the same way, and Ho-Jae cuts through monks so easily that the stage barely slows him down. By room 5 he finally meets a monk fast enough to matter, but even that one goes down with a neck wound before truly threatening him. The kill feels slightly off, so Ho-Jae checks the corpse and realizes the monk's body is absurdly hard all the way through skin, muscle, bone, and even organs. That discovery changes his mood, because if a later monk matches his skill while keeping those natural stats, the fight around room 15 could turn dangerous fast. So instead of rushing onward, he performs a full autopsy to map their critical points and joint structure, no matter how much the watching gods hate it. Mid-analysis, Kim Min-hyuk suddenly messages him with rough details about the mystery event, which is impressive on its own because Min-hyuk has barely had time to breathe lately. Ho-Jae sends back Kiri's cryptic clue about foreigner in second, and Min-hyuk immediately calls him out for obviously buying it with leftover allowance after spending the rest elsewhere. Min-hyuk says he already posted the order's findings to the community, so Ho-Jae wipes off the blood and heads out to read it between rooms 5 and 6. Settling into the corridor for a short break, he heats milk with chocolate powder on a heat stone and pulls out dry bread cookies because the 12th floor misery has left him craving anything remotely comforting. As he eats, Ho-Jae quietly admits to himself that he misses real food badly enough to start thinking about learning to cook from ID next time he summons her. The community post reveals the event's name, competition, and confirms that everyone can enter, refuse, or forfeit, while the winner is expected to gain some kind of skill. The order still lacks the actual rules, but the community is already buzzing with the same nervous excitement people had before the first day of Great Harmony. Then another challenger drops a new rumor that the competition will be fought as individual or team battles, and the forum explodes all over again. People immediately start arguing over the prize and over who would win, with Ho-Jae's name pulled into the center of the debate against high-floor hard-mode rankers. Watching strangers praise and trash him like it matters leaves Ho-Jae irritated for a second, but his final thought is brutally simple. Of course he is going to win the competition. Ho-Jae drops the 15th room monk and immediately gets a new message. He has already cleared the 13th floor, but he can keep going if he wants. Since he has no idea where this floor really ends, Ho-Jae answers without hesitation and decides to push the trial as far as he can. With the system giving him no extra explanation, Ho-Jae treats his wounds with a potion and opens the community chat mid-break. Kim Min-hyuk tells him the competition will happen in several rounds, not just once, which means the event is bigger and more complicated than they thought. When Kim Min-hyuk brings up Ho-Jae's earlier clue about foreigners and a second event, both of them realize they may finally be dealing with challengers from other countries. That possibility changes everything for Ho-Jae, because now the tutorial's rules may be built around real national boundaries on Earth. Then Kim Min-hyuk abruptly asks Ho-Jae to command the challengers on normal difficulty during the competition, and Ho-Jae hates the idea on sight. He flatly refuses, arguing that the job is a pain and that most people would probably be terrified of him anyway. Kim Min-hyuk pushes back, says the order is swamped, throws out Park Young-ah's name, and then leaves Ho-Jae with the problem anyway. After the chat ends, Ho-Jae reigns in his irritation and admits Kim Min-hyuk is probably juggling an absurd amount of planning for the Order of Vigilance. Thinking it through, Ho-Jae realizes the Order may soon have to deal with foreign challengers who will not accept Korean rules or authority. He also sees why Kim Min-hyuk picked him. Park Young-ah leads easy, Big Bro Jong-sik can handle hard, and if normal has a gap, Ho-Jae is the threat they can put in front. In the end, Ho-Jae decides he may as well help with normal difficulty and dump the detailed planning on his future self. On the way to the 16th room, he reviews the monk's old weaknesses, like brief openings after head shocks and their poor instinct for messy fights. He even remembers winning one duel by biting a monk's exposed neck with mana-coated, poison-laced teeth, a dirty trick they were not ready for. But once he pushes past the minimum clear rooms, those weaknesses stop mattering because the monks from 15 onward are on another level. In the 19th room, the monk rushes him so fast that Ho-Jae's full-power spear thrust still gets casually dodged by a tiny tilt of the head. The monk keeps slipping past every follow-up, kicks the spear out of Ho-Jae's hands, and even smashes aside his knife draw before backing off like he has all day. Ho-Jae gives up on the spear, switches back to shield and knife, and falls back on the practical style he picked from day one for enemies faster and tougher than himself. Instead of mocking him, the monk calmly tells Ho-Jae that this is not enough, and warns him not to ruin the duel by holding back. Ho-Jae snaps back, but the monk explains that victory matters less to them than sharpening their art through a real duel, which Ho-jae still cannot fully understand. As blood pools in his mouth, Ho-jae finally admits that the 19th room is his current limit if he fights with his normal ability alone. So he deliberately switches on perseverance, proving he has learned to control the skill by will instead of waiting for it to trigger on its own. He stacks battle focus and soul steel on top of it, then tells the monk he is finally ready to show his best. Ho-jae blinks straight into the monk's face and goes for the neck, but even that surprise move gets read and countered. Inside the slowed world of battle focus, Ho-jae realizes he still cannot dodge cleanly, so he gambles on turning his own face into a shield. Using iron wall on his cheek, he lets the punch scrape across his face in a shower of sparks and steals the opening he predicted. With his left hand already clutching the monk's robes, Ho-jae drives the knife toward the monk's heart before the monk can recover. The 19th room monk accepts defeat with a smile and even calls it a great duel, which Ho-jae cannot take seriously after ending it in 10 seconds. Even when Ho-jae asks why he is so sure he will not be killed, the monk only says death would not be so bad either. Ho-jae walks away instead of finishing him, unsettled by the fact that this choice does not feel like his usual ruthless self. He knows these monks are resettable stage enemies and he has killed plenty before, so his own hesitation bothers him more than the monk does. Two gods start paying attention right then, but Ho-jae still cannot explain what changed in him and can only brush it off as maybe being whimsical. He shakes it off and opens the 20th room, where a strangely polite monk tells him to sit because he will need time to get used to this place. The moment he steps inside, Ho-jae realizes this room is not dim at all but wrapped in a total darkness that blocks normal sight. He tests the darkness and realizes it feels less like magic and more like some overwhelming power effect, which explains the last monk's advice to just close his eyes. So he shifts to detection, using mana to outline the monk's body and clothes in place of vision, but the mental load is already heavy. The monk offers to wait until he adapts, but Ho-jae cuts him off because he needs every bit of focus just to function in here. He draws a backsword, decides his eyes are only getting in the way, and fights with them closed so he can fully trust the mana image instead. Ho-jae opens with soul steel and a blink slash at the monk's neck, but the monk still senses it and slips under the blade. A crushing counterpunch slams through Ho-jae's shield and hurls him into the wall hard enough to leave him reeling. Before the monk can start lecturing again, Ho-jae switches to a reckless answer and wraps Telaria's wings around his whole body like armor. Then he blinks directly into the monk and turns himself into a flying body check, eating the shock but smashing the monk off balance too. He follows with a thrown knife and another blink strike, and this time his mana-coated hand finally tears into the monk's skin and poisons him. But the monk's next kick is so hard to read that even battle focus barely helps, and Ho-jae only saves his waist by hardening it with iron wall at the last second. The blow still launches him into the wall again, and now Ho-jae knows his ribs are cracked even before the full pain arrives. Since the poison is working, Ho-jae shifts to knife and backsword together, and decides all he has to do now is survive until the monk breaks first. The poison monk goes all in, and Ho-jae forces himself to adapt to the blind space under lethal pressure because failing to adapt now would mean certain death. By the end, Ho-jae has weathered the storm, and the monk finally admits the duel is over while lying beaten and unable to move. Ho-jae is not impressed by the monk calling it a great duel, because from his side it looked like a desperate, ugly stall for poison to do the work. Instead of leaving right away, Ho-jae pulls out an antidote and offers it in exchange for answers.